Our story starts at a campsite. The protagonist wakes up to a commotion when someone points out there's something in his boot. Annoyed by the noise, he thinks to himself that all he wanted was a moment of silence. That's when he introduces himself. His name is Encrid. After causing a scene at the camp, Encrid is demoted and assigned to lead the so-called Idiot Squad. Soon after, the narrative jumps to a battlefield, where a bloody fight breaks out. Amidst the chaos, Encrid reflects on himself. He has no special powers, no extraordinary gifts. Everything he has was earned through sheer effort and relentless training. Still, as the battle intensifies, a dark thought consumes him. The certainty that this would be his end, and that he would never achieve his dream of becoming a knight. He gets stabbed in the neck and dies. However, his death wouldn't be peaceful. After a brief encounter with a mysterious figure, Encrid wakes up abruptly, wondering if it had all been just a dream. But to his shock, the events start repeating. The battle happens again. He dies again, and again. On the fourth loop, Encrid finally understands. It wasn't a dream. The day was repeating itself, and he was trapped in it. A knight advances with a frontal attack. This was the 27th time our hero had seen that strike, and then he closes his eyes. The attack hits him directly in the chest. He grinds his teeth as blood flies from his mouth, and then he drops to his knees while the knight turns his back. In the middle of that war, there he was, lying on the ground and bleeding. But suddenly the scene shifts and everything goes dark. A blue lantern can be seen swaying. Our hero slowly opens his eyes, and right behind him a creature holds the lantern in a boat. It asks him if he does not want to give up. Our hero stays on his knees in silence, and grinds his teeth in hatred after hearing that question. Then the scene shifts to someone banging on a pot. To better understand, this is our hero, and he always returns to a few moments before he dies. And there he was, our hero warning the shaggy one that there was an insect in his boot. Then it crawls out, and Rem tries to stomp on it, and right after asks if it was our hero who put it in his boot. Our hero just turns away and tells him to shut up. He had already seen this too many times. And then he opens the tent curtain and heads into battle. The scene returns to our hero as a child training. He had learned to use a sword from a retired mercenary, and right then the mercenary said that if he pushed hard enough, he would be able to become a knight just like in his dream. Then the scene shifts to the silhouette of a knight from behind. He was holding a banner in the middle of the chaos. And then it returned to our hero smiling. He had been dreaming all of it. Suddenly laughter could be heard from a bar. Those guys were laughing at him because of his dream. Our hero was already used to it and simply ignored them. He knew it was too early to give up. Outside, he trained his sword strike, and it cuts to him older training the same strike, and cuts again to him training more and more, and here it cuts to him raising a sword and finishing a giant creature. All those moments were experiences he had gained over time, so that he could become a knight. And then the scene cuts to him standing there without a reaction as his sword flew through the air, and he received a strike directly to his gut, and we can see a boy attacking him with solid form. The boy looked at our hero and called him old and terrible. Our hero lay on the ground realizing he had spent years of training to lose to a boy. All that effort just to lose to a kid like this? Then he stared at the ground with pure hatred grinding his teeth. The scene shifted, and night had already arrived in the glowing sky, and there was our hero training against a tree. He could not afford to waste time, he just had to train, and so he kept going, attacking the tree until dawn, until he shouted that one day he would become a knight, and then his sword trembled to a stop. Our hero leaned on his knees, breathing hard and exhausted. The sun was already rising between the mountains, and then he faced the tree one last time, ground his teeth unable to contain the indignation, and shouted with everything he had. The scene shifts to 4 years later at a nearby camp. Our hero had become a squadron leader, and then he spoke with the redhead, his squad companion Jackson. The redhead looked at him and asked what it was this time. Our hero, without hesitating, ordered him to take guard duty in his place. The redhead made a face without reacting to what he heard. Then he got up and told our hero he would owe him one. The shaggy one wasted no time and grumbled about the way Jackson had walked off. Our hero called Rem's attention, and Rem came right over asking if there was work for him too. He turned and said a single word, "Heart of the Beast." He wanted to learn it again. The shaggy one stared at him in disbelief, and right after said he had given up last time, and now he thought he could do it. The scene shifted to a blue sky, and right after to Rem driving a strike at our hero. He remembered that last defeat, the one where his eyes burned with indignation. And then we moved to a scene with several soldiers in their positions. They raised their swords and shouted with great determination. The war started again, and our hero was about to be hit by a spear, but he knew. He had already memorized everything from dying so many times. And then he dodged the spear perfectly by throwing his neck back, and right after knocked it down while defending with his shield. He looked out at the battlefield in front of him. One of his allies was shouting toward a soldier. While he faced the enemy, something in the sky was closing in from behind. It was an arrow moving at full speed, but Encrid had already predicted that attack and deflected it at the exact moment. Suddenly, another soldier appeared from above where his ally could not see, but Encred intercepted him with a single merciless strike. And then he noticed something familiar, and there he was. That soldier who had defeated him 27 times in a row. He was pulling his sword from a soldier's chest. He drew it slowly and sensed our hero's presence, and stared back with those inexplicably bloodthirsty eyes. And then he started walking slowly toward our hero. Encred, our hero, did not hesitate, and dropped into position for battle. And the knight wasted no time, and advanced toward him. Encred remembered Rem explaining that he always closed his eyes when under attack. And then Rem grabbed the axe that was in the air, and directed it straight at Encred's face. And as expected, our hero had his eyes closed, scared to death. Rem explained that he needed to be cold, courageous, and confident in himself, and finished saying, "Just like a beast." And there we were again, the same strike our hero had died to. He stared at the tip of the sword coming toward him, remembered everything Rem had been explaining, and then he noticed something, and right after dodged the bastard's attack by a hair. The sword was barely a millimeter from his neck. The heart of the beast training had worked. The bastard who missed the attack stood there without a reaction. Our hero looked back, and the bastard looked back. The two were face to face, ready to attack each other. The bastard's next attack was already coming. Encred screamed as the sword closed in, and suddenly the bastard had already driven the strike and Encred was dropping to the ground. He ground his teeth as blood spattered. The scene shifted with an oar cutting through water. Encred was on his knees in front of that creature. It told him to give up and get in the boat. Encred stayed quiet on his knees, and then he laughed and said he would not accept. And there we went again, back to that same routine. Encred was already getting up while the shaggy one was saying the usual, but this time Encred had a determined look in his eyes. The war started again with soldiers everywhere. Encred was staring at that sword for the 33rd time. He dodged by a hair once more, and the two faced each other again, but his attack came again, just as fast as before. Our hero was on his knees once more. While he slowly fell, the cord of the amulet snapped. The amulet dropped to the ground in the middle of all the chaos. We go back some time to when Encred was up against some beasts. He got up leaning on his sword, and walked away with his arm injured. But suddenly a little old woman interrupted, thanking him for everything. Encred looked at what she had placed in his hands. It was an amulet that glowed blue like stars, and she assured him it was worth every bit of his effort. The scene returned to Encred staring at the amulet while lying on the ground. While trying to get up, the bastard was already closing in, and then he raised his sword to finish him, saying this was out of mercy. He stared at Encred with those inexplicably bloodthirsty eyes, and gave a faint smile of satisfaction, and finally finished Encred one more time. That pot started banging again. Encred had already gotten up and warned the shaggy one about the insect in his boot. While he was already ready to head out, he stopped for a moment, turned back and asked the shaggy one to help him train the heart of the beast again. The shaggy one just stared at him, trying to make sense of everything. And there we were again. Rem was already loading up his attack. Encred was paying close attention to his movements. Then he managed to dodge both of Rem's axes. The dodge looked perfect in Rem's eyes, and then he looked at him impressed, and right after said, there was no way he had learned that so fast. Encred answered he had just practiced before, then tried to steer the conversation somewhere else, and then he picked up his sword and cleaned it, dropped into position, and called Rem for one more round. The shaggy one looked at him, and right after gave a smile and accepted. Rem attacked and Encred dodged quickly. Our hero was managing to dodge several consecutive attacks, but the shaggy one did not hesitate and came at him without thinking twice. The attack almost caught his neck, but Encred managed to dodge. It had grazed him right on the chin. The two were face to face. But then Encred dropped into position. The shaggy one watched that stance carefully. The image of that same bastard strike crossed Encred's mind, and then Encred exploded toward the shaggy one with a frontal attack, but Rem deflected it and knocked the sword from his hand. The sword spun and flew far away. Encred looked at his hand without understanding, and clenched his fist, realizing he still had not mastered the strike. Meanwhile, the shaggy one was already complaining that there had been no blood, and started explaining that his attacks needed to sound something like his own, and said he had to commit to it as if it were a single strike, and confirmed that strike had to connect, or he would be dead. Encred was just absorbing everything being taught. He could understand everything that was said, but not deeply enough. He could see that image, the difference between the bastard's thrust and his own. He saw himself on his knees with no confidence in his sword, and the bastard's sword above his head. And then he finished him one more time. The scene returned to Encred driving a strike, and suddenly his sword was in the air again. He remembered the image of that bastard laughing in his face, of him driving the strike into his neck, then back to him dropping the sword again against the shaggy one, and it cuts to another defeat against the bastard, and another one this time getting dropped to the ground. And one more with the bastard saying the same line as always. This is mercy. Encrid kept training with the shaggy one, and suddenly the shaggy one lost his footing. Encrid was right in front of him, composed and locked in with that strike. The shaggy one asked if he was out of his mind. His hands were already bleeding from the impact, but none of that mattered. Our hero was smiling. Rob charges forward screaming with everything he has. The bastard is caught off guard by the speed of the attack. He stretches his arm out and drives forward with a firm thrust. The blade connects directly with the knight's helmet. Both strikes meet, and the bastard catches him across the neck. Our hero's first real attempt ends in failure. He decides he will not blink this time. He grips the sword tight. He will not let go. Rob hits the ground and the bastard plants his boot on his chest and repeats the same mercy line one more time. He lifts the sword slowly to drive it into Rob's neck. Rob mutters something that makes the knight stop cold. He tells the knight that tomorrow he will not win this fight. The bastard lets out a faint smile and answers back, says the dead do not have a tomorrow, and finishes him with one more stroke of mercy. The scene shifts and the amulet catches the light again. Suddenly the buzz of a mosquito in the air, cut short right away by a hard stomp on the ground. And once again, Rob turns his back on Rem. The shaggy one thanks him for stepping on the insect, but then pauses. Rob had given the order way too casually. Rob calls the wide-eyed one over to get him armor, a shield, and a dagger. The wide-eyed one says he will only do it because Rob is the chief. Makes it clear he does not take orders from anyone. The redhead throws in a quick jab calling Robin lazy. Everyone is ready and Rem picks up on something different in our hero. This time Robin was moving with a sharp and heavy confidence. Suddenly a brutal thrust straight into the tree. Our hero shouts that every time he dies he feels the pain. The image of the bastard flares up hard in his mind. The scene shifts and Robin is staring down at the ground. He says out loud that this time he has to push past himself. Then suddenly the knight appears walking across the surface of the water, and our hero drops into his fighting stance. The scene cuts again to a thrust into the tree. He strikes and punches a deep hole into the wood, strikes again with that same exact thrust. This time he drives straight through the tree from top to bottom. Our hero gets himself ready for battle. He pulls on his boots without rushing, stands up and locks the shield onto his arm, and says out loud that he has to keep moving forward. Several soldiers lift war horns and blast them hard. The whole squadron lines up tight in formation. The battle kicks off and the sound of war tears open. A soldier charges at Rob with a downward strike. He spots the opening and drives his shield straight into the enemy's chest. Another soldier comes from behind swinging a spiked mace. Robin spins around and puts him down with a clean rotating strike. He fixes his eyes on the next soldier already winding up, catches the blow with the point of his knee, and immediately crushes the soldier's head with the shield. An axe comes flying at him ready to split his skull. He dodges fast enough and snatches the axe right out of the air, then hurls it straight into the soldier's head. He clocks that Vel is right behind his back and shields him from the arrow that would have killed him. Vel is shaken by the raw brutality of Rob, who takes a soldier's head off with a single strike. And there it was again, that same wall he always ran into. The bastard's eyes burning with pure insanity right in front of him. This time, Robin's eyes burned back with pure confidence. The two of them lock stares for one tense moment. The knight steps in with a heavy horizontal swing. The blow lands hard, but Rob does not flinch. He pushes forward even as his shield shatters, and blocks the knight's next attack at the last second. The bastard realizes he is being played. Rob drives his forehead directly into the knight's chest. His boots drag through the sand from the force of it. He uses the sand and throws a fistful into the bastard's face, then screams as he loads up a full vertical strike. But of course, the knight was never going to hesitate. He comes forward with that same thrust as always. This time, our hero actually slips the strike. He stumbles for just a moment, and the bastard resets his position. The knight pivots and unleashes a brutal thrust. Rob just watches the speed with which he turned, but this time he knew exactly what he had to do. Both swords close in on each other fast. Then one of the blades snaps clean in half. An archer draws his bow at the back of the battle. The arrow cuts through the air for several meters. The bastard freezes. His sword was broken. Robin had finally won the battle, but the arrow the archer had loosed was still coming. The axe spins through the air straight toward the arrow and cuts its path short, splitting it clean in two. This time it is the bastard taking the thrust to the neck. Rem curses the coward archer with every drop of rage he has. The tip of Robin's sword pushes through the bastard's neck. Blood pours hard from the wound. The war still rages on all around them. The knight is down on his knees before our hero, and the roar of battle keeps echoing from every direction. Rob breathes deep with the feeling of having actually done it. He looks down at the bastard one more time, finds him on his knees bleeding out into the dirt. Robin raises his sword slowly with both hands and repeats the line the bastard always said, "This is mercy." Our hero swings and the knight's head flies through the sky. He takes in the bitter and earned taste of victory. He had finally broken through the walls that had always held him back. Then a brutal kick explodes into his back out of nowhere. Robin rolls across the ground from the impact of the mysterious creature and screams in pain through clenched teeth. The redhead and Rem are stunned by what just appeared, a creature built far beyond any normal physical size. Rem stares at it and names it Frog. The creature that kicked him is right behind Rob. Frog had kicked him for killing one of his best soldiers. The bastard is on his knees on the ground, defeated. Our hero picks up the teeth knocked from his mouth. Frog raises the axe high above his head, and it comes down with terrifying speed. Then Rem lands a parry and counters Frog clean, and follows through with a sharp horizontal strike. Frog blocks the blow with both hands. The shaggy one presses forward with teeth grinding. Frog charges back with the same brutal speed. A sequence of blows erupts between the two. Suddenly, a soldier rushes in to drive a spear into Rob. The redhead appears and cuts him down just in time. From the impact, the shaggy one flies backward. Frog gets pushed back from the clash as well. Both of them reset and lock eyes in silence. The shaggy one lets out a faint smirk at Frog. Frog fires back, calls the commander weak and worthless. Rem says he will have to burn this coward down with magic. Frog asks what someone like Rob is doing in this war. Rem answers that he is here to kill him and drops into stance. Frog pauses for a moment, says this battle is not worth his time. He holds the shaggy one's gaze one last time and turns his back and walks away. The shaggy one calls him a coward. Suddenly, someone sprints across the open battlefield. The redhead pushes forward with Robin on his back. The shaggy one covers them with a fast strike. Another soldier moves in to hit Robin and the redhead from behind. The ponytail steps in and blocks it at the last second. The blondie cuts down the soldier in front of the redhead and Robin. All three line up in front of Rob and the redhead ready. Our hero carries a quiet look of sadness on the redhead's shoulder. The soldiers raise the flag and call the retreat. Rob feels the weight lift and closes his eyes. The soldiers run screaming toward the horizon. The scene shifts and a single drop falls. Rob lies still as the mysterious voice fills the air around him. It says it is impressed he survived another day. It says he will not last against the walls still coming, and that his fate is to break down and give up. Rob tries to get up and answers, "Fate?" The bastard appears behind him, kneeling and defeated. When Robin rises, he says the walls exist for a reason, for him to break through himself. The creature laughs and says it cannot wait to see that. Everything returns to normal, and Encred stares up at the ceiling. Our hero realizes where he is lying and looks to the side. He finds the shaggy one sitting right there beside him. The shaggy one says Robin has not slept properly in 2 days. He explains it was him who pulled Rob out from under Frog. Rem says the bones held up fine, but the head took a real hit, then immediately launches into a speech about being best friends forever. Our hero says they were never friends, and calls him the Noble Hunter. Rem reaches over and shoves his hand against Robin's mouth. Silence fills the room while everyone around them sleeps. Rem explodes at the shaggy one. That secret was not his to share. A new day starts, and the sky reflects the clouds. The guy in red starts hounding Rob for payment. Tag demands to know how much he spent putting Encred in there. He cannot understand how a common soldier got into the infirmary. Rob pokes at Tag, saying he was nowhere to be found during the battle. Tag grins and offers a special deal. Rob only has to pay double. The sky dims toward evening. The redhead walks into the cabin and stares at Robin. Robin is stretched out on the bed, relaxed. Suddenly, the redhead tosses something onto our hero's lap. He tells him to use it twice a day. It was an ointment Jackson always kept on hand. The ponytail wakes up with tears running down his face. He keeps crying while Rob just listens. Robin tells him to get out. He is not dead. Night falls. Our hero starts to drift into his thoughts. He wonders why everyone around him is so worried. Ragnar suddenly appears from behind the curtain. The two of them hold each other's gaze for a brief moment. Rob asks what the commander is doing in the infirmary. Ragnar turns away and goes back to eating his apple. It was clear he did not care even a little. Morning comes and Robin is in the infirmary with 2 soldiers. One was a commander who was always picking fights with Encred. The other was just a soldier staring blankly at nothing. He looked like a low-ranking soldier with nowhere to be. A noise breaks out and Robin snaps his eyes to the left. The other 2 in the room look over as well. A woman with long braided hair walks into the cabin. Her ears were different from everyone else's. She carried a strange sword at her hip. The woman wore full armor with a helmet tucked under her arm. She walks in asking who commands the 444th Squadron. Our hero watches her with a sharp and curious look. The room goes silent, and everyone stares at her. The commander in the room quietly wonders if she is a fairy. She turns the question back, asks which group he belongs to. He answers that he is from Vengeance. The woman fixes her eyes on him for asking that. You do not go around announcing someone else's race. Robin watches her, impressed, and reads her as a superior. He steps forward and introduces himself as the 444th Squadron commander. She gives a small compliment, says he has been leading his members well, then turns to leave. That was all she came to say. Suddenly, she stops mid-step and asks for the name of the soldier standing there staring at nothing. He gets nervous and stammers a name. Krang. Rob catches it immediately. That name was just invented on the spot. The elf woman glances back for one brief, calculated moment, then continues forward without another word. Our hero stays quiet and watches her go. Suddenly, the sun begins to rise behind a mountain. Encrid opens and closes his fist. He wonders if he should start training now. The commander in the back asks where he plans to do that. He turns his back on the commander without answering. The blondie goes back to staring forward. Encrid raises his sword and it catches the sunlight. He resets his footing and opens his combat stance. He thinks back to the last thrust he threw in battle, then closes his eyes and starts to focus. He pictures just how lethal a strike from the shaggy one would be. Suddenly, someone walks up and starts talking to him. It was that strange blondie again showing up uninvited. Our hero says he was trying to replicate the fight against the bastard. The blondie asks why he was doing that, and makes Rob question why he was actually doing it at all. Our hero looks back with a small flicker of doubt in his eyes. He turns forward and sits with the thought for a moment. He lowers the sword, then raises it again, and answers that he wants to become a knight. The blondie looks mildly surprised by the answer. Robin looks back at him and says it was the first time someone had not laughed at his dream. Krang says he simply forgot to laugh this time. He says something came back to him after watching Rob train. Our hero watches him disappear into the trees. Krang calls back, if he ever becomes a knight, remember the name. After dawn, the scene shifts to a man playing a harp. The commander will not stop complaining about the late coffee. The redhead asks how Encrid's wound is holding up. He says the ointment worked well and thanks him for it. Jackson says if he is already good, he can return to battle. The scene shifts to a candle and a cup on a table. The blondie says goodnight to our hero. Encrid rolls over, lies down, and says goodnight back. The commander keeps complaining, even lying in bed. Encrid realizes he let the whole day pass doing nothing. He wakes up to shouting coming from outside the barracks. The commander is at it again, yelling about the late food. Rob realizes he has heard all of this before. Maybe he has been caught in a loop. He steps outside, and the redhead says that same line as before. Encrid breaks into a cold sweat and responds to the redhead carefully. The redhead just says he should return to battle like before. Our hero was completely overtaken by fear in that moment. Suddenly, the creature speaks. Another wall is coming to stop him. He realizes then that he died in his sleep again, and once again a new wall stands right in front of him. He feels an unexplainable surge of resolve rising from within. The night sky glitters with stars overhead. The scene returns to the candle and the cup on the table. Robin is already lying down thinking about who could have killed him. He thinks the killer might be right there among them. The only image that keeps coming to him is the fairy. The fear takes over his body before he can stop it. The fairy begins moving through the forest. He recalls the reason she came to the cabin in the first place. He looks toward the entrance of the cabin and decides to wait there for the assassin. Suddenly, a dart drives into his neck. He starts thrashing on the bed and falls off, unable to move at all. It was a powerful paralytic poison working fast. The commander had already been gone from the cabin for a while. The assassin closes in on Krang. Encrid tries to drag himself across the floor to intervene. The assassin raises the sword over Krang. The scene cuts to Krang taking a blade to the chest. He starts going pale as blood spills from his mouth. Our hero grinds his teeth with pure rage. Suddenly, a sword tears through the wall of the cabin from outside, and another hooded figure in red appears in that same instant. Encrid is already flat on the ground, completely paralyzed. He notices the figure carries the exact same traits as the elf woman. It was literally the same sword she always carried. Encrid thinks, maybe it really is her after all. And then he wakes up, back to the same damned routine. The same madman playing that harp without stopping. Rob sits quietly thinking about what happened the day before. He was not fast enough to catch the assassin's presence in time. This would not be easy. He was not only up against the fairy. Our hero starts to feel powerless against the size of this challenge. He thinks back to the days of that brutal war, that bastard who looked completely unbeatable, and yet he managed to bring him down. That alone gave him enough confidence to believe a way existed. Suddenly, he yanks the commander's blanket back to check underneath. Nobody was hiding there. so he decides to stay sharp and watch what happens outside. The commander kept mocking him, something about low-ranking soldiers, laying the sarcasm on thick as usual. Rob fires back, saying he had no idea the commander cared that much. He turns and tells the commander he was also being sarcastic. The blondie notices and asks with a smile if he should come back later. Our hero tells him it is fine and waves him in. He watches Krang with a quiet suspicion behind his eyes. It made no sense that the assassins would target someone like him. He had to be carrying some kind of importance that was not obvious yet. Back in the squadron cabin, everyone is lounging around doing nothing. The scene cuts to Encrid asking directly who Krang actually is. The blondie looks thrown off by the unexpected question. Our hero is still waiting for a real answer. Krang hesitates and asks, "Who am I?" The commander props himself up a little to listen in. The blondie says it is a long story, and that Rob should not know about it. Rob stays quiet and just stares at him. He lets it go and agrees with the blondie without pushing. The commander gets furious that he just accepted that answer. He points at Krang and calls him a spy flat out. The blondie shifts his eyes to the commander in a different way. The commander starts feeling the weight of that stare. Krang steps toward the commander and the two of them lock eyes. He says he has never betrayed and will never betray the kingdom. Rob believes every word. He could see it clearly in those eyes. The blondie carried the unmistakable presence of a true noble knight. The commander kept grumbling that he should not be speaking like that, but Robin could see he was no knight. He had been useless the day before. Even so, he was clearly hiding something beneath the surface. The scene returns to the candle and the cup on the table. Rob says goodnight to the commander and to Krang. He notices the commander seems calmer tonight, probably because of Krang. He snaps his eyes quickly toward the outside of the cabin, then gets up slowly and grips his sword. The commander notices and asks what he is doing. Our hero is not about to give his plan away. The commander watches him for a moment without understanding, and goes back to sleep figuring Encrid had knocked his head too hard. Meanwhile, the blondie sleeps easy in his bed without a care. Exactly what Rob expected from those two. Then suddenly, our hero jolts from a sharp shock. The dart from before grazes right past his neck. The strike tears a massive hole through the side of the cabin. He scrambles to get into position and reach his sword, but the assassin had already finished off the commander and wrapped it up with Krang right after. He realizes with a hollow feeling that everyone had fallen again. Our hero wakes up to the same harp sound as always. This time he tries to warn the higher-ups about what is coming, but fails completely. Nobody believes a word he says. He looks out from the cabin, tries to stay as sharp as he possibly can. He shouts out that the assassins are already here, but it was already too late. They had landed their mark. He only catches a glimpse of the assassins slipping away into the dark. The next night, he accepts that no one will help him here. Someone launches the dart with just 2 fingers and catches him clean in the neck before he can react. He moves to the next attempt and stands ready searching for the assassin. And once again, the attack comes from nowhere. The assassin turns and walks away without a trace. The scene shifts back to the same morning routine. He holds tight to his sword with rage burning inside. It was the 20th time he had died without doing a single thing. He stares at the floor and then suddenly lets out a laugh, then steps out and starts thinking hard about how to stop the dart. He walks toward the redhead with slow and steady steps. Jackson was cleaning his dagger with quiet focus. Our hero wonders why Jackson never fights his enemies face to face. The shaggy one answers, because he is a filthy creep, the redhead striking knights from behind with precision. Jackson asks if Rob's wounds are feeling better. Encrid can see that Jackson could take out the assassins with no effort, but he could not just bring him along to solve this for him. This was a wall he had to get past on his own. So he decides to think like Jackson would in the same situation. He asks what Jackson would do if someone like him stabbed him from behind. The redhead thinks it over for a quiet moment and answers that he is not sure. Nobody had ever survived his ambushes. Our hero feels the dread hit hard the second those words land. The redhead says Robin needs eyes in the back of his head. He cannot quite figure out what Jackson is trying to say, so he asks the redhead what that actually means. Jackson tells our hero to look at the cart behind him. Rob is caught off guard. The redhead spotted something from that far away. He says something is about to go wrong with that cart. Seconds later, the front wheel drops off and hits the ground. Rob stares and asks if Jackson is some kind of prophet. He just points to his own ear without saying a word, and says he had heard a grinding sound coming from the axle. He says that whoever listens to the battlefield can see what comes next. Our hero is struck by the confidence Jackson carries in his own words. The redhead adds that it is nothing more than training and habit built over time, that with enough time Rob would pick it up and sharpen it himself, and closes by saying the key is tuning the senses and isolating sound. Rob holds his gaze one last time before night comes. The scene shifts and darkness settles over the camp. Our hero lies still with his eyes shut, getting ready. The assassin sends the needle flying through the dark. Encrid is locked in, listening to every sound around him. He pushes to catch every detail within range. He picks up the patrol's footsteps and the crackle of the torches. The assassin drops down along the side of the barracks. Our hero tries to pin down the location through sound alone. The assassin touches the ground without making a sound. Robin feels the dread creeping in. He cannot hear the assassin at all. Then the assassin vanishes like a flash step through the dark. The needle drives into our hero's neck without warning. He tenses up. He never felt the assassin coming. And once again, he returns to another empty morning. He is up immediately and moving toward the redhead. Jackson starts laying out more on how to track by sound. Rob listens closely to everything Jackson puts on the table. The redhead snaps his fingers and a sharp tone cuts through the air. He explains that sound is a wave pushing out in every direction. He closes his fist, showing that Encred needs to isolate a single wave, because that is how he would find the exact sound he needs. Rob turns and opens himself up to everything happening around him. He shuts his eyes and focuses on pulling out a single frequency. He counts the flags in the area using his ears alone, tracks which direction the footsteps around him are coming from. He starts to feel the waves of sound moving through the space. Some of them are completely foreign to him, barely there at all. The blondie shows up and cuts the training short with a light smile. He asks what kind of strange training this is supposed to be. Robin looks at him and asks straight, "A nickname?" Krang had already come up with one and was calling him NC. Robin says he must look like an idiot doing this kind of training. Krang shakes his head, says he is no idiot for putting in the time. Robin watches him quietly and takes that in without a word. Night arrives and the needle is already moving through the dark. Once again, Robin cannot get out of the way in time. He looks to the side and watches the assassin finish Krang without hesitation. The assassin pulls the blade slowly out of the blondie's gut. Krang pours blood from the wound. Our hero is furious. This is already the 33rd time he has failed. The assassin moves in toward the cabin again and sticks a completely silent landing inside. And once again, Krang is finished before anyone can do a thing. The scene shifts to Encred training again after failure after failure. He keeps reading the sounds of the space with his eyes closed. Rob eases up and tells himself he just needs to do this naturally. An eagle appears in the distance lining up its landing and comes down onto the roof of the cabin without a sound. It was the exact same silent approach the assassin always used. Our hero suddenly picks up on a presence closing in from ahead. It was the blondie again, right on schedule. He gives a small smile, surprised that Robin had sensed him coming, and realizes Robin has been actively sharpening his perception, and once again tells him he is no idiot for spending time on this. The scene cuts to the assassin getting ready to launch the needle. For the first time, our hero manages to slip the attack and pulls his sword fast without hesitating, and drives a clean horizontal strike straight at the assassin. The assassin hits the ground in shock in front of Encred. He had not seen that coming at all, and Rob finally gets to taste what it feels like not to die. But that victory did not last. The assassin was still on the ground, grinding his teeth. And even so, he pushes up and drives a diagonal strike at Encred. Rob reads it immediately. This guy is not much of a fighter. He glances back and vengeance had already gone down, but Krang was still standing with his sword drawn. Meanwhile, the assassin was already loading up a strike with his dagger. Encred keeps his guard up and slips the attack at the last second. Suddenly, the assassin flings one of his blades straight at him. It grazes across his chest and tears right through. Encred staggers from the hit, but the assassin does not stop. Then he picks up on someone closing in from behind. It was the elf commander, the fairy, and without thinking twice, Rob decides to move on her first. The elf raises her sword as Rob charges in, but the assassin snaps and sends a volley of needles flying at everyone. Encred realizes too late, they are already coming straight for him. Krang is frozen with dread as the needles close in. Then suddenly the fairy slips Robin's attack clean and drives forward fast, straight toward the assassin. Encred reads it in an instant. She was never the enemy. He spots the opening and moves in on the assassin. Goes for a thrust directly into his chest. The assassin opens his stance to absorb the hit, but the sword goes flying from the impact. The assassin knows it is over and turns his back on Rob and runs. Encred lets him go and stares into the silence outside. Everyone was already on their feet watching from out there. Krang speaks up and says that guy was probably after him all along. Encred says he knew, and Krang asks how. He says no one hires an assassin for someone truly insignificant. The fairy agrees and adds that he thinks fast. She was holding the scabbard of her sword, still waiting for something. Rob stops for a brief moment, thinking she might come at him next, but Krang steps in front of him and says he has a favor to ask. He says he does not want anyone to die today. Encred stays quiet and just watches the two of them. The fairy bows before Krang, and obliges. She says she also has an antidote to bring vengeance back, and Rob picks up on it. She clearly knows her way around antidotes. Krang keeps the conversation going, worried about what happens if someone finds out. Encred says it is fine, as long as there is no trace left behind, and then he decides to share his reckless idea with everyone. Suddenly, the cabin catches fire, and smoke rises from the top. All the soldiers rush over to put out the flames. Meanwhile, Encred stays low, crouched down beside Vengeance, and every trace of the assassin vanished along with the flames. The other soldiers would deal with what came after. Elsewhere in the forest, Krang and the fairy walk together. Krang brings up Robin and asks, "Is he not interesting?" The fairy takes in the question and says nothing, while Krang just keeps walking alongside her in silence. Then the image of Encred raising his sword in the sun comes to her. She keeps walking, quiet and steady, and lets out a faint smile, like Encred had left some kind of mark on her. And then the two of them walk deeper into the forest and disappear. The scene shifts, and a scythe drops into a puddle. It dissolves slowly into nothing. Encred finds himself face to face with the creature again. It says, "You will see him again." He agrees, and says it could happen at any moment now. The next morning arrives like nothing ever happened. The cabin that had burned was nothing but ash and cinders. Rob was already gathering his things. Unfortunately, he had not been wounded, which meant he was going back to battle. The commander turns and asks why Encred saved him. Our hero is caught off guard. The man was actually scolding him for it, but Encred just answers that the two of them are comrades. The commander takes the answer and lets out a quiet sigh. He calls Robin a selfless fool, and right after asks when he is heading back to the squadron. Rob turns and asks if something had happened out there. And Vengeance says there was a rumor going around. The whole base was cursed. The scene cuts to Ragnar, laying into Rem. He shoves the shaggy one hard in the shoulder. Rem grins, the kind of grin that means he wants blood, and suddenly he hoists Ragnar clean off the ground as soldiers scream to get back. Ragnar gets hurled across the area and crashes into a stack of crates. He grabs one of the crates and launches it straight back at Rem. Rem answers with a right cross that lands flush on Ragnar's jaw, then picks up both axes and says he is going to beat Ragnar into the ground. Ragnar does not flinch, says he will split him clean in two. Our hero arrives in the middle of the crowd watching the whole thing. Rob lets out a slow breath with zero patience left. Rem and Ragnar stop cold and stare at Encred in disbelief. Encred jokes that they could not kill him out there, but these two just might. 4 days later, Rob was already back to his routine. Then suddenly he opens his eyes, and there was Jackson standing right in front of him. He had been trying to slip out without waking Encred, but our hero gets up anyway. He was going to train regardless. The redhead gives him credit. Encred had sharpened his hearing fast, and tells him to keep at it because it would pay off someday. The scene shifts to Encred's hand pressed against a tree. He flexes his forearm and pushes hard into the wood. Our hero needed to use every extra moment he had to train, and the sun reflects behind the mountains as he keeps going. A rock said good morning to him. Encred had just finished and looks down to find out why. It was actually the ponytail doing push-ups with a rock on his back. He tosses the rock aside without breaking pace, and Rob has to look straight up just to meet his eyes. The ponytail says his endurance is way too low for someone chasing knighthood, and tells our hero he needs to keep pushing without stopping. He looks up at the ponytail and says he will try, and Auden keeps walking him through his training method without rushing. Suddenly, Rem kicks Ragnar clean out of his bed. He shouts and calls Ragnar a lazy fool. Ragnar starts dragging himself toward his sword without a word, and Rem has no idea what he is even trying to do. Then Ragnar tells the shaggy one to go to hell, and Rem drops straight into his ready stance. The two of them get cut off by Rob asking if they are at it again, while the ponytail muttered under his breath that violence never solved anything. The shaggy one says Ragnar is going to starve them all out, and tells him to go cook right now. Ragnar fires back and tells the shaggy one to go run the squadron, and throws his towel straight at him. Our hero steps in and asks if there is a problem with him. The shaggy one says the lack of battles is driving him out of his mind, and Rob calls him out, challenges him to a duel on the spot. The sky outside had already gone gray. A sharp blow lands clean on Rob's ribs without warning, and Rem follows through immediately with the axe. Robin's sword bounces hard from the impact of Rem's strike. Our hero breaks into a cold sweat from the hit, then the shaggy one comes right back in again, and this time Rob manages to parry just in time. He holds his sword firm and does not let go. The shaggy one stays sharp and watches for the next move. Our hero drives in with a thrust, but Rem slips it by leaning back at the last second. then immediately catches Encrid's sword with the axe and uses his free hand to lock Encrid completely down. Encrid has nothing left to give in that moment. Rem drives him into the ground with everything he has and says he expected a lot more, especially after how much he had improved. Encrid leans on his sword and pulls himself back up. He can feel something is different from before, but it is not enough yet, and challenges the Shaggy One again without hesitation. The Shaggy One thinks to himself, this guy still has a long way to go, but lets out a quiet smile anyway and takes the challenge. Rain starts coming down hard. The two of them look up and see it has already set in. So they decide to head back inside the cabin. The Shaggy One grumbled the whole way, felt like he was coming down with something. Ragnar was already asleep and the ponytail was locked in his usual position. Then Tag shows up out of nowhere complaining about the rain. He is convinced someone actually put a curse on them. Encrid asks what kind of curse he is talking about, and remembers the commander had mentioned something along those lines before. Tag lies down and starts drying himself off without caring much. But Encrid was still standing there, staring out at the rain in silence. He says the higher-ups would not let something like that slide. Tag cannot figure out why he is still standing there watching the rain fall, and Encrid just says he was training his senses. The Shaggy One asks what the hell that is even good for. The redhead says the Shaggy One is smart enough not to understand. And the other two offer to help our hero train. The rain kept falling without letting up. The commanders were gathered around a table, and the elf woman brings up Encrid out of nowhere. The superior dismisses her choice and calls Encrid useless without hesitating. She says Encrid could deliver results no one would ever expect, and says her instincts do not miss. The sun breaks through the sky. The scene shifts to Encrid and the fairy already in conversation, and he asks her straight, why is he being sent to the scouts? The answer did not take long, and Tag was already starting the day asking if Encrid had done something wrong. He wants to know why he specifically was the one chosen. The image of the fairy crosses Encrid's mind without an answer. The Shaggy One appears and asks if he is really going to accept this. He says he can help Encrid get out of it if he wants. Someone could simply go at the superior and end the whole thing. Meanwhile, the ponytail was on his knees praying they would not take Encrid. Ragnar wakes up in the middle of all the commotion without understanding a thing, and asks Encrid if he can go in his place. Our hero says maybe someone else, but not him. The redhead asks exactly what order they gave him, and tells Encrid to pay attention to the shifts in sound around him. The Shaggy One grumbles, thinking he can just reteach Encrid from the ground up. Encrid just closes his eyes and accepts the chaos around him. Outside, our hero was wrapping his arms in silence. Meanwhile, the Shaggy One moves toward the redhead without warning, and the redhead does not hesitate, draws the dagger in the same instant. The two of them are about to go at each other for real, until Rob steps between them and cuts it all short. He tells the Shaggy One to calm down right now. Rem asks if he is out of his mind for getting in the middle, and the redhead says the one who is out of his mind is Rem himself. The scene shifts completely. A group of soldiers moves through dense forest. A soldier picks up on Encrid's presence and stops. Rob looks back at him with a puzzled expression, and the soldier introduces himself as the leader of the scout squadron. Two soldiers start laughing at Encrid without holding back. Andrew gives a faint smile and goes along with them, and then orders everyone to move out along the path. Some tracks are found in the middle of the trail. Andrew studies them and says they are GNU prints, and right after decides they will track it down for food. Our hero reads the situation immediately. This was not a good idea. A soldier with a bow on his back appears behind Robin. He looks at Encrid and introduces himself quickly. Henri comments that this squadron leader is a bit unpleasant, and the two of them keep talking along the way without stopping. The archer says he at least has some basic knowledge of hunting. Night comes and Andrew had absolutely nothing to show for it. Our hero lies there just listening to him complain out loud. Dawn breaks with the sun reflecting across the open sky. The soldiers keep moving, but this time at a much slower pace. Suddenly they hear something stirring in the brush ahead, and then it hits them. This was the location for the recon. A wide field of tall grass opens up before them. The squadron leader gives the order for everyone to advance. Henry is gripped by fear at the thought of entering that brush. Encrid says there is no choice. They have to follow the leader's order. And then the group of soldiers pushes forward into the brush in silence. Andrew moves at the front with a completely serious expression. The archer notices there are no animal tracks anywhere around them, and quickly explains, that means nothing alive has passed through here. Then suddenly a paw descends slowly toward the ground. The creature steps down hard and spreads its claws wide. Encrid already feels the weight of that presence before he even sees it, and then it charges from the side without any warning. He tracks the movement with his eyes alone, and immediately calls out for everyone to get down. Out of nowhere, two soldiers are hit by needles. Andrew freezes from the unexpected attack. Meanwhile, enemy soldiers were already closing in through the brush, and then everyone breaks into a run without looking back. Two more are caught and left behind along the way. The archer is hit by an arrow and goes down. Encrid was the only one still managing to run, but the number of soldiers was more than enough to surround him. Encrid keeps running through the middle of the brush. A soldier aims his crossbow and gets ready to fire. He picks up the arrow closing in from behind and manages to dodge because he had heard it just in time. Our hero stops for a second and takes in everything around him, but realizes that in the middle of all that noise he cannot identify anyone. Suddenly, several arrows are fired straight at him, and they hit dead on without giving him a single chance to react. After dying, he tries to warn Andrew about everything, but as expected, nobody believes a single word he says. The afternoon arrives and the ambush begins again, just like before. And once again, Encrid and the archer are hit without mercy. The soldiers fire at Encrid without stopping, and he is caught by around 20 arrows all at once. On the next attempt, he is attacked and surrounded by several soldiers. Lying on the ground, he squeezes the dirt hard in his fist. He was nearly dead, flat on the ground, completely taken over by rage. He notices then how the soldiers' uniforms are painted green for camouflage. Encrid tries to drag himself across the ground through the tall brush and finds a bonfire with several burned flags scattered around it. He sighs looking toward those tents and suddenly gets stabbed from behind and falls for the last time in that attempt. The routine returns, and Andrew is already shouting like always. Encrid was just thinking about how he was going to get out of this. He thinks that group was hiding something important. He considers giving up for a moment, but decides he will not run from this wall. The squadron leader shouts for him to return to his post immediately. One of the soldiers tries to calm Encrid down since Andrew was far too difficult. But Encrid says there is a limit to the nonsense he can take from an idiot. The soldier just stands there with a dumb look on his face. And right after Encrid moves him out of the way without any ceremony, he walks straight up to Andrew and says he would bring the orders to the squadron himself. And Andrew clearly does not like that one bit. The others are impressed by Encrid's nerve. Then Andrew challenges him to a duel on the spot without thinking twice, and the squadron leader drops into his combat stance. Encrid begins to read Andrew's background in silence. Maybe he was a noble or something along those lines, but he could not keep following his orders no matter what. And then the leader shouts and charges with everything he has. Our hero was completely unarmed in front of him. The leader drives a frontal thrust straight at Rob, and Rob gets ready to take the blow without flinching. He blocks with the palm of his hand, and Andrew's guard opens completely. It was too late for him to reset his stance. And then Rob drives a sharp elbow strike straight into his chest. Andrew feels the blow. It was too heavy to take, and drops to his knees in front of Rob from just that single strike. The other soldiers are stunned by what they just witnessed. And from that moment forward, Encrid was responsible for the entire squadron. The archer watches him with a quiet suspicion and says nothing. The Scarface just stays silent and takes it all in. And Andrew lets out a quiet breath, but does not open his mouth. The afternoon arrives and the soldiers keep moving through the brush. The soldiers were a little lost under Rob's new lead. Encrid suddenly asks what the archer's dream is. Henry asks why he wants to know that right now, and then answers that he wants to marry a beautiful woman who works at a flower shop. Encrid asks the same question to the next soldier. He answers that he wants to see his son be born. The others say they want to open their own business, and one just wants to go back home. Andrew says he would fulfill his mother's last wish. His mission was to revive the House of Gardner. Encrid says all of them should stay alive to see their dreams through, and then states with firm resolve, everyone is walking out of here alive. The squadron looks at him with determination in their eyes, and Andrew was now completely driven by what he had just heard. Encrid orders Henry to fire an arrow at head height, and then the arrow cuts through the air toward the brush and connects directly with the head of one of the enemy soldiers. Everyone is startled by the soldiers surrounding them. Rob orders Andrew to cover his back and then sprints forward without hesitating. The soldiers look back and catch someone closing in fast. Our hero drives a thrust into the back of one of them and repositions himself in the middle of the brush ready for the next. Two more soldiers appear asking what happened, but Andrew grabs one of them from behind before he can react. A soldier attacks Andrew with a spear, but he picks up on it before it is too late. Meanwhile, Rob kept hitting the others without stopping. The other soldiers keep pushing toward the squadron. The whole squadron repositions and faces them ready. And then, our hero orders everyone to attack at once. The chaos erupts, and the sound of clashing swords echoes everywhere. Suddenly, a panther moves silently through the brush. One of the soldiers picks up on its presence and stops. It stares back at him without pulling away for even an instant. And then the soldier decides to attack it without thinking, but Encrid shields him before the strike lands. He realizes the soldiers had been chasing that panther, and that this time they had not noticed the squadron because of it. The rest of the squadron had already finished the job meanwhile, and then Encrid decides to keep moving without looking back. The panther just watches him walk away in silence. After that battle, 6 of the squadron remained. A soldier was standing alone in the middle of the brush keeping watch. and then Encred takes him out quickly before he even notices. The squadron stays out of crossbow range for 1 day and keeps cutting down the number of enemy soldiers along the way. Andrew attacks a soldier who was standing in the middle of the path, but it was not necessary. They only needed to find the way out. Our hero orders everyone to keep pushing deeper into the brush. Scarface thinks that is completely out of his mind. The others just watch the tension rising between the two. Then Scarface confronts him with a sword to his neck. He says he has no intention of marching toward his own death. Encred then tells him he should know there is no going back. They had made too much noise and the way back would be packed with enemies. And then he grips Scarface's hand firmly and says he also wants to survive, and that they will. Andrew had thought Encred would be a worthless squadron leader, just like his father who had given up and burned through all his fortune. But then he realizes he was completely wrong. In truth, Encred reminded him of his mother. In a flashback, his mother was lying in bed talking to him and said she hoped he would become a good leader. Andrew stares at her with a heavy heart. The scene returns to Encred telling him to trust him. And then Andrew, in the middle of the whole squadron, says he trusts him, and for the first time calls him captain. Scarface asks why that all of a sudden, and Andrew says Encred is the captain now, plain and simple. Thor just stares at him with a look that had shifted deep inside. Rob orders everyone to stay crouched until the signal, and then everyone follows him low to the ground without making a sound. Night was already settling over the brush. Everyone was ready in the middle of the growing darkness. Suddenly, footsteps are heard coming from inside the brush. They were soldiers' footsteps, a lot of soldiers. Spears could be seen rising above the brush, countless of them. The archer and another soldier are already gripped by fear. Thor and Andrew just cover Rob's back in silence. The sun was already going down below the tree line. The squadron stayed crouched without moving a single muscle. And suddenly the soldiers pass right in front of the whole squadron, but do not pick up on anyone's presence there. Andrew and Thor were sweating cold without blinking. Rob was tense, holding his breath with everything he had. The soldiers had passed without noticing them, and the whole squadron lets out a breath of relief at the same time. Robin carefully reads the final step. The sun sets, and darkness falls over everything. After some time walking, they arrive at the enemy base. The archer is completely stunned by the sight of it. The whole squadron was inside the enemy camp. Robin kept planning something in silence. The wind beat against the burned flags around them, and there were bones hanging that looked like they came from animals. And then Encred orders everyone to follow him, and the whole squadron follows in position and in complete silence. They hide behind a tent without making a sound. And then Encred asks the soldier with the scar across his eye for his name. He says to call him Mac, and right after Encred warns him that he will not tolerate any disobedience from Mac, Andrew immediately tells Mac to shut his mouth and follows Encred right behind him without questioning. Mac is forced to fall in with the rest. The clouds were covering the moon in the sky that night. The scene shifts to Robin slicing a tent clean in half. Mac breaks into a cold sweat at that bold move, and then the whole squadron steps into the empty tent and keeps pushing forward through the camp. Encred keeps moving through the enemy camp without rushing, and Mac finds all that confidence he carried strange. The front of the camp looked completely empty, but after a few steps they run into soldiers in the way. Our hero orders everyone to hold right there without moving. He remembered the last time he had infiltrated that place. All the soldiers had stabbed him because he touched the flag. Rob states that the main objective is to protect that flag. The flag was positioned in the middle of a bonfire. It looked like some kind of ritual. Mac wonders how he knew that flag was there, and figures maybe the company commander had told him. Our hero cuts Mac's thought short. The soldiers would be too busy guarding the flag, and looks straight at him without blinking, and says everyone will escape while that is happening. Right after that, he orders the squadron to split into 2 groups. Mac says he will take the decoy group without hesitating. Rob finds that strange. He had agreed too easily. And then Mac moves forward toward the decoy group. Suddenly, a soldier takes a rock to the head. Mac runs through the middle of the camp, drawing everyone's attention, and every soldier in the camp goes after him at the same time. Meanwhile, our hero takes the opening and grabs one of the camp's torches with a firm grip. Suddenly, a massive soldier appears from behind him and slices the tip of the torch clean off in one stroke. Encred is already gripped by fear in that instant and then drops into his battle stance. It was the first time he had seen that soldier across all his previous deaths. The soldier stares at him with a completely bloodthirsty look. Suddenly, something happens behind the soldier. One of the camp's tents starts to catch fire. The other soldiers shout warning that the camp is in flames. Andrew and the other soldier were sprinting to the back of the camp. The soldier orders them to put the fire out before attacking anything. Encred plants his foot hard on the ground and positions his sword for the strike, and then drives the thrust directly toward the soldier's head. But Rob is stunned by what he sees. The soldier had pulled off a perfect dodge even with his back turned. And Encred loses his footing completely and ends up with his back to him. His heart jumps into his throat with no idea what to do, and suddenly a wound opens across his stomach. His stance had been broken by that precise strike. He looks back, and the soldier looks back at him and calls him weak as he walks slowly toward Rob. Our hero begins to think about how many times he died to get here. There were countless failed ambushes in the middle of that brush. There were endless deaths before he finally made it this far. But then he realizes this was the real wall. The scene shifts, and the soldier is positioned with the wall right behind him. Encred pulls his hand from the wound and tries to reset, grips the sword and brings his stance back up. The soldier starts to sense something in that moment and asks with contempt if Robin is actually smiling. Encred lifts his stance and tells the soldier he is going to finish him. Then the soldier steps in with a heavy horizontal strike. Encred ducks and positions the sword behind his shoulder and brings it up with a full vertical strike using everything he has. Both swords clash and throw off sparks, and the soldier had stopped Encred's strike cold. Suddenly he tries a direct vertical attack, and Encred barely slips it. Then the soldier attacks from a completely unexpected angle. The sword comes straight toward his face. Rob manages to parry the blow with difficulty and starts sweating cold as he stares the soldier down. The soldier stares back with that bloodthirsty look. Encred tries to attack again, but the soldier lands a precise parry. Then Encred decides to throw a dagger without warning. The soldier simply extends his hand and deflects the dagger off to the side with ease and drives forward again at Encred with a fast thrust to the chest. Meanwhile, the fire was spreading across the entire camp. The soldier's sword had passed very close to his head, and the two of them begin to notice the flames were spreading fast. It was heading straight for the flag. Then a hooded figure shouts from behind the commander, saying he did not understand what was at stake there. And then the hooded figure looks back at Encred, who was positioned and ready to keep fighting. The soldier then wishes him until next time, and turns his back, and starts giving orders to the soldiers around him. But Encred is not satisfied with that. He grips his sword tight and decides to push forward, but is cut off by Andrew, who calls him by name. He says they need to go right now. No discussion. Encred is still staring hard at that soldier through the flames, and the soldier stares back without blinking. Then Encred sheathes his sword and calls the retreat, and the camp soldiers kept putting out the flames as the squadron sprinted toward the brush. Only 5 members of the squadron remained. Andrew shouts that they might follow them through the brush, and Encred just answers that they probably will not. Suddenly, the archer feels his strength leaving his body, and enemy soldiers were closing in along the path. Then the whole squadron repositions to defend him. Encred takes down one of the soldiers without hesitating. Mac drives into another soldier straight in the chest, and Andrew cuts the throat of one more in the same instant, and Encred orders them not to stop, to keep running. One of the squadron members says they should head toward the field habitat, but the archer knew a safe route through there, and then our hero decides to trust him without question. The moon was descending through the dark forest. The whole squadron moved through it in silence. A fox appears and watches them pass without moving. They keep pushing forward as the archer leads the way. Encred covers his face with his hand from the arriving sun. Dawn was already breaking and the sun was climbing between the mountains. The squadron was running across open ground. A soldier spots them coming from far away. Andrew and the archer had arrived out of breath but alive. Encred breathes deep with a heavy relief inside. Everyone was completely drained, but they had made it. The scene shifts to the completely burned flag. The hooded figure stared at the ground in absolute silence, and standing across from him, the gray hound stared back without saying a word, and then he looks again at the burned flags around him. The scene shifts to the banner of a gray hound, and right after to a wolf on top of a mountain under a red moon. The scene returns to the commander talking with the soldier. It was the platoon commander, and they were talking about Encred, and the commander repeats firmly that this would not happen again. The scene shifts to Encred wrapping his fists. He still wanted to keep fighting that soldier. He was not done yet. The scene shifts to the soldier saying he would kill him with his own hands, and Encred answering that he would surpass him. The shaggy one was lying in bed in silence. He grabs the axe that was in the air and sits up, and wonders if Encred had died. It would not be surprising. After all, he was a rookie. Suddenly, Ragnar wakes up right across from the shaggy one, and asks what the shaggy one is staring at like that. Rem just raises his middle finger at him without a word, and Ragnar raises the middle finger of his own foot right back. Rem lets out a quiet smile, and then says he wants to kill him, and Ragnar calls him a crazy bastard without blinking. Meanwhile, Encred was giving the debrief on the last mission, and then bows to the fairy and takes his leave. She had not expected Encred to bring back results that good. Encred was heading toward the exit when Andrew comes up and speaks to him, and thanks him for being alive because of him, and asks if he would ever cross paths with Encred again. And our hero answers, only if the roads cross, and then leaves the squadron behind, and walks away. Andrew is the first to bow to him, and right after the whole squadron bows together. Rob kept walking, wondering if that was really his best. The scene shifts to the sun reflecting across the camp, and Rob decides he needs to push past himself to reach his goal. Suddenly, the thought is broken by several people shouting around him. The scene shifts to Ragnar and the Shaggy One fighting. Rem had a bloodthirsty look burning in his eyes, and Ragnar stared back with the exact same eyes. Encrid had never seen those expressions on them before. A soldier beside Encrid says they did not even look human. They looked like animals, and the two keep fighting without giving a single step back. Then Encrid grips his sword firm and watches everything, and decides he wants them to look at him like that someday too. The sword and the axe clash hard between the two of them. Suddenly, Ragnar glances to the side and notices something, and the two stop the fight at the same time. Then the Shaggy One lets out a shout that sends every soldier running. Encrid asks about the way Rem had blocked Ragnar's attack, and asks Ragnar about his own strike from just now as well. Ragnar asks why he wants to know that right now, and Rob just asks again without backing down. And then Ragnar turns his back and says, "It was nothing." The scene shifts to some soldiers rotating positions in the camp. During the journey, Rob's wounds had healed well. Tag asks where he is heading off like that. Meanwhile, Ragnar and the Shaggy One were just eating soup in silence. Morning comes on another day. Ragnar was too lazy to get up and just stared at the ceiling until he notices Encrid was no longer there. He gets up and stretches out slowly, then picks up his sword and drags it toward the exit, and kept yawning the whole way without any rush. Suddenly, someone plants their foot hard on the ground outside. Encrid was out there training his strikes alone. As he swings, he feels the rib and drops to his knees. He was breathing hard with both hands in the dirt. Ragnar watched and says he had learned the wrong fundamentals, and that getting stronger was impossible with that kind of training. Our hero picks the sword back up without saying a word. Ragnar wonders why he still pushes himself that hard. Rob lifts the sword, loading up a strike, and Ragnar cuts him off. He asks why he keeps insisting like this. He simply says he wants to get stronger, and Ragnar asks what he would do if he got stronger. Rob answers that he wants to become a knight, and explains it is not just about being a knight. He grips the sword and answers that it is also about honor, and lifts it, saying it is for the sick and the poor, and for those he loves. Ragnar just watches him speak without cutting in. He closes his eyes. In his mind, strength was only a tool. Ragnar picks up his sword and rests it on his shoulder, and starts walking toward Encrid, who still had his back turned training. Encrid looks back, and Ragnar asks if he wants to learn how to really use a sword. Ragnar asks Encrid if he wants to learn the art of the sword. Our hero answers yes with a firm and determined look. Inside, Ragnar hesitates. It would be a lot of work, but there was something about that boy that sparked his curiosity. He asks if the Shaggy One had taught him anything. Encrid answers yes, the heart of the beast. Ragnar thinks on it for a moment and says that is good, and so are his thrusts. Then declares he must forget everything else he has learned. Everything except those two things. Our hero frowns and asks if that includes the mercenary sword technique. Ragnar says especially that. Explains that keeping that technique will build bad habits, and that once he starts making the same mistakes over and over, the chances of giving up grow fast. Then puts the choice in his hands: start from scratch or stay exactly where he is. Before he even finishes the sentence, our hero cuts him off and says he will start from scratch. Ragnar looks visibly impressed and asks if he was being serious. Our hero, without hesitating, asks where they should begin. Ragnar thinks to himself that this kid was definitely not normal. He notices he has a solid build and that a long sword would suit him well, and proposes they swap weapons. Our hero finds it strange and asks if there is no problem just handing the sword over like that. Ragnar answers it does not matter. There is nothing special about it, and instructs him to place his right hand above his left on the grip. Our hero grips the weapon hard. Ragnar notices and asks why he is squeezing so tight. He answers that it is so he does not lose the sword. Ragnar asks who taught him that. When he hears it was the Shaggy One, he mutters a curse under his breath and tells our hero to get into position, then drives a full-force vertical strike straight down. Our hero manages to block, but his hands tremble violently from the impact. He asks in a daze what that was. His hands were in pain. Ragnar answers that was exactly what was supposed to happen, explains that if he stays rigid, he will end up breaking the sword, and says bluntly that our hero is behaving like a dry branch or a stone pillar. Our hero does not follow the analogy and complains that his companions have a terrible way of explaining things. Encrid thinks quietly to himself, trying to figure out what it could mean. Did he need to be more flexible? Or was it the way he gripped the sword that was slowing him down? While the sun blazed hard across the sky, our hero takes a kick to the leg. Ragnar, without stopping, orders him not to lose his footing, and fires questions while mocking him, asking if he is fighting or dancing. Our hero hits the ground but keeps his grip on the sword. Ragnar watches him with a serious expression, thinking he had no idea how unprepared he was, barely able to pull off the basics. That kind of thing was not something easily taught. Even so, our hero gets back up, determined, grips the sword again with firm hands. Ragnar watches him for a moment and then tells him to take it easy. Suddenly, the shaggy one walks up asking in a mocking tone where they had been all day, and jokes whether they were out having a picnic. He asks Enkrid if the other one had been giving him trouble, and offers with a provoking grin to sort him out, and leans into Ragnar's shoulder. Ragnar fires back that he will rip his hands off. Then, looking at how the shaggy one was dressed, he asks with a serious tone if something had happened. The answer comes straight. They had been summoned. Enemy forces were on the horizon. The scene cuts to the allies preparing for battle, adjusting armor and gripping weapons as the forces gather. Ragnar wonders inside if it was a mistake to hand the sword to our hero. He was still too raw with the new technique and might not hold up in battle. Even so, he thinks with firm resolve that if it comes to it, he will babysit the kid himself. Meanwhile, our hero cannot stop thinking about the technique he had barely started to learn. There was something in it he wanted to master. Someone asks why they are standing there like that. The scene cuts to a flag being shaken by the wind. The enemy formation seen from a distance is strange, uneven, as if there was a hidden intention behind it. Suddenly, an old man with a suspicious look tells everyone to witness an end, and out of nowhere, a thick fog starts spreading across the battlefield. Enkrid frowns. Could this be some kind of magic? The troops fall into chaos. Our hero thinks to himself that that fog came from absolutely nowhere, and that he can no longer see who is standing beside him. Everyone asks in confusion where it came from. Suddenly, our hero goes on high alert. A sound, something cutting through the air. Before anyone can react, he shouts, "Arrows!" A volley of projectiles crashes down on the troops. Many are hit. The fairy manages to deflect most of them, but her mind races. That is not ordinary fog. There was no way to predict the enemy would use something like this. She orders everyone to raise their shields, and thinks that if they do not act fast, they may have already lost before the fight even started. The scene cuts to the old man letting out a sinister laugh. He explains it was hard to make the magic work because of the requirements. It blinds everyone except those positioned below the point where the magic was cast. In other words, those under the flags. So he concludes with a cold certainty. The battle is already over. He calls the magic the fog of annihilation. A familiar voice rises behind him, commenting in an ironic tone that he seems pleased with himself. The old man answers, of course. He barely managed to make it work, especially with the flag nearly burned to nothing. He curses the situation, saying that if not for that, it would have been so much easier. The scene cuts to the knight, the one who had crossed swords with our hero before. He appears with a look of contempt on his face. Our hero once again dodges a volley of arrows. The shaggy one shouts for him to get his head down. Another voice says it is a spell and curses. Enkrid thinks, that voice is Rem's. He quickly realizes Rem is right in front of him but cannot identify him just by looking, and thinks he cannot fight like this. Suddenly an arrow hits between his legs. His breathing gets heavy and he starts to tense up. He thinks to himself, my legs will not move right. There is no way I can use anything Ragnar taught me like this. He says he did not expect to get it on the first try, and remembers what Ragnar told him and thinks it was all true. He would probably die in this battle. Ragnar then tells him to stay behind him, but Enkrid says he found a way. He thinks, if I cannot do it in one try, and breaks into a run. Everyone thinks he has lost his mind and shouts for him not to go. Suddenly a spear appears through the middle of the fog, and he is stabbed directly in the throat. He thinks to himself, at least with this he can learn more from Ragnar. The enemy soldier thinks he is out of his mind. Once again waking up the day before, he thinks to himself that Ragnar is not a good teacher, and says he is a genius. The words might sound wrong because for him everything comes naturally. Enkrid then, to confirm what he suspects, asks where the center of gravity should be. Ragnar cannot quite say for certain, and tries to explain more or less how it should feel. Enkrid then has no doubt about what he thought, but thinks to himself that observing and listening are among his strongest points. Suddenly, once again, a volley of arrows comes in from the front. Someone shouts. Our hero manages to block some of them, but still thinks he is too rigid. Another arrow appears right in front of his face, and he thinks it is fine to keep dying and keep learning. Once again, he comes back and continues learning with Ragnar. On his 31st try, he manages to move more fluidly. Ragnar says that step was good and asks where he learned it, and says he should already be able to start learning the basics. He goes on to say the 3 basic attacks of a sword are cut, thrust, and slash. As he swings the sword, he says to use the tip of the blade to defend, and that if the sword is high quality, the sides can be used as well. Then he points the sword at Enkrid and says the shortest distance between you and your opponent is called the attack line. To put it simply, the use of the sword is all about blocking your opponent's attack line while opening your own. You need to picture your opponent in your head and reach them with the sword. Once again, a soldier aims at his neck with a spear, but this time our hero manages to dodge and says his feet feel lighter. Now he can dodge with ease. But then another formation of spears appears aimed directly at his chest. Our hero thinks, little by little, my today is starting to change. Once again, the next day, he is training with Ragnar, and this time he manages to block the attack. Ragnar, surprised, asks if he saw the sword coming, and once again the cycle repeats, death and training. He thinks to himself that his progress is steady with every repetition. On his 100th day, he manages to parry one of Ragnar's attacks. Ragnar is completely stunned and asks, "Who are you?" The intensity in his eyes shifts entirely, and he no longer looks at Encred the same way. Once again, in the middle of the fog on the battlefield, he thinks to himself that he used to believe he could not improve any further because of his talent. Ragnar watches him with concern, but he pushes forward bravely into the attack line, dodges a spear, and says his final goal is the path to becoming a knight. Dies once more, and says, there is something beyond this pain. While thinking, this is fun, so fun it could drive him mad. Another day and Ragnar comes to him and asks if he wants to learn the art of the sword, and he thinks, if I can get stronger, of course I will. I will die as many times as it takes. Ragnar then thinks, there is no way you are this good. Squadron leader, you are coming back on purpose. While Encred considers it, Ragnar says it is not quite that, but says he has a solid foundation, and if anything, what he lacks is experience. Once again, with a volley of arrows, he thinks he has already repeated this same day over 200 times. As an arrow appears in front of his eyes, he takes a low step and thinks, I will see how far the techniques I have learned will take me. He dodges a spear and drives a strike into an enemy soldier's neck. He knows this because he knows one of the enemies will appear behind the fog, and he can finish each of them even without being able to see them. An enemy soldier freezes in shock and says, there is nobody here, and suddenly his leg is cut. The rest ask what is happening as they shout to watch the ground. The scene cuts to Ragnar saying, remember, eyes, feet, and hands. Observe with your eyes, anticipate, move with your feet, and finish with your hands. Our hero then lets out a dark smile and says, it is different. The feeling is completely different compared to when I had no idea what the principles even were. They are all coming at him. He pushes forward, and they say he made it this far. But if he thinks he is getting out alive, he is very wrong. Then he says, let us fight with our swords like men, and thinks to himself that he wants to keep testing himself. The enemy soldier in return curses him, and our hero takes a volley of crossbow bolts. Once again, they are in that space. And the ferryman entity says that every mortal who walked into their own grave must have lost their mind. Waking up the next day, he thinks, he only showed up to insult me, then asks if Encred has his head in the clouds. Encred remembers the Shaggy One saying it was a spell back on the battlefield, and remembers the enemy formation that was very strange. To make sure of his suspicion, he asks the Shaggy One if he knows anything about spells. The Shaggy One is surprised and asks why. Our hero says he just thinks it would be interesting, and tells him to say what he knows. Rem then says it could be, and asks if our hero knows the difference between magic and spells. Our hero answers uncertainly that magic is more common. The Shaggy One says that is not wrong, but goes on to say that spells need a medium, and that the medium is far more important. Spells cannot exist without one. Encred then says, that is it. The flag is the medium of the spell, and thinks to himself that if he destroys the flag, the fog will dissolve. He then asks if the Shaggy One's tribe use spells. Since spellcasters come from the west and the Shaggy One is from the western frontier, the Shaggy One says there are not many true spellcasters, and that most of them are actually sorcerers. Then asks where Encred is going, and he says, to train. The scene cuts to Ragnar. He says that luckily they both share the same basic training, and asks if Encred knows the Oniak sword technique, then tells a story. About 500 years ago, there was a prodigy, a child born on a sword farm who killed 12 bandits, who attacked the farm with nothing but a fire poker. Having lost his parents early, he learned the sword arts very young. A noble who had heard the rumors took him in, and that prodigy came to be known as Leonesis Oniak, but he was as cursed as he was gifted, for he began losing his strength at the age of 10 and was completely paralyzed by 12 and then faded from history. Ragnar then says that even completely paralyzed Leonesis made himself immortal in history. He compiled every sword technique in the land and categorized them into 5 kinds. The elaborate and precise sword art, the strong and heavy sword art, the fluid and disorienting sword art, the fast and relentless sword art, the gentle and deflecting sword art. With those achievements, the Oniak family became the greatest house in the empire, and the foundations of their techniques can still be felt in the sword today. Ragnar then says that every technique Encred has learned has roots in the heavy sword, and says he will teach him something more advanced than the heart of the beast taught by the Shaggy One. Then says, concentrate. forget everything around you, and focus only on your own sword and the enemies of it. Says he will show him how it feels, and launches an extremely fast attack that Encred cannot dodge, cutting across his neck. Encred says, a little faster than the Shaggy One's axe. I almost died, then asks if he felt anything. Suddenly the Shaggy One appears. You degenerate! You are trying to kill the squadron leader. Ragnar says people concentrate better when they are close to death, and says he is only helping. The Shaggy One says Encred will not learn anything that way, because he took a very long time to learn the heart of the beast himself. Ragnar then provokes him, saying he would not learn anything easily from a stupid barbarian. While the two begin to argue, Encred says both of them are terrible at teaching. One says the other is from the far north and that his people are more barbaric than anything. The other says he is from the barbarian tribes of the south. Rem says, fine. On your grave it will say, I lost my head to a barbarian from the south. Encred then cuts in, saying he is here because of the retreat order. Ragnar then tells him to always stay sharp in the moments just before death, once again out on the battlefield. Our hero thinks it is similar to the heart of the beast, but still completely different. The heart of the beast makes you lose yourself in the face of death, but focusing on a single point keeps you sharp, and says he needs more experience to recalibrate, while thinking to himself, if the flag is the medium, I just need to destroy it. Once again the fog rises, and our hero thinks that this time he will set a goal above gaining experience. Destroy the flag. He thinks to himself that it will be easy to get there with the Shaggy One and Ragnar, but first he will try alone until he cannot anymore, while being stabbed in the throat. Our hero thinks that focusing on a single point is very useful, and says he died many times while unprepared. To survive the assassins, he trained his hearing. To survive the battlefield, he learned the heart of the beast to concentrate. The scene cuts to Ragnar asking if he understood, and saying he should be able to feel the tip of the blade slowing down. Our hero thinks he understood nothing, and wonders if the boldness of the heart of the beast is interfering with it, but considers that probably is not it. Ragnar then says he should feel everything around him disappear, everything except the opponent's sword, and asks if he really felt nothing. Encred thinks to himself that channeling his fear of death might not be the right thing to do, and asks how Ragnar learned this. But he says he always knew how to do it, and says it is in the name. Just focus on a single point. Our hero then says he got no useful answer from that, and will have to figure it out on his own. He thinks to himself that he must not get impatient, and that his priority should be destroying the flag while continuing to practice. Our hero shouts, "Everyone get down," and shouts for them to raise their shields. This time, everyone manages to defend against the volley of arrows, then says he has repeated this same day 300 times, and knows where the attacks will come from with his eyes closed. He then stabs an enemy soldier in the neck from behind. All the enemy soldiers around him curse at him and shout to catch him. Our hero keeps pushing through everyone along the enemy defense line. An enemy soldier shouts to stop him and to hold their positions. Our hero, with a dark grin, keeps moving forward, and then manages to destroy the flag, and says it took him 10 days to reach the flag, but the fog does not clear. Our hero is confused. He was certain he had destroyed the flag. Suddenly, he is impaled by several spears. One of the enemy soldiers says he knows a little about spells, but got it wrong. He then thinks to himself, there is only one real flag. The others are just decoys, and he needs to find the real one among them. Once again, the next day, same battlefield. He pushes through everyone and says he has a 1 in 5 chance of getting it right. On the next try, he shouts for everyone to get down, but nobody hears him. The result, only he manages to defend against the volley of arrows. He thinks, why did they not hear him this time? And considers whether it was the timing or if he needs to let them recover first. He then manages to destroy the second flag. After passing through 3 days, it was another copy. 4 still remained. This time he spends 5 days reaching the third flag. Another copy. The fourth flag took him 7 days. Another fake. Suddenly only 2 flags remained, and he wondered which of them was real. If he had to guess, it would be the one furthest away. The day repeats. The fog is there once again. He shouts for everyone to get down and raise their shields. The arrows come. This time, our hero tells the Shaggy One to follow behind him. The Shaggy One, surprised, asks if he has lost his mind. But all Encred thinks about is that he must not tire himself out before reaching the flag. The Shaggy One then drives his axe into an enemy soldier, and our hero pushes forward, drawing the enemy's attention, and uses the opening to push through them. The Shaggy One then asks the soldier on the verge of death who cast the spell. When he is sure they will not answer, he moves on to the next, expecting that one to talk. While our hero pushes forward, he thinks that the equivalent of a full year has passed repeating the same day. He then loads up a horizontal strike aimed at the flag, but is cut off. A familiar face appears. He says that God answered his prayers because he truly wanted to kill our hero with his own hands. Our hero in return asks, "Who are you?" He then says, "You forgot about me in these few days that passed?" and our hero is left confused. Encred asks awkwardly, "Who are you?" And he answers with suspicion, "You will remember when I cut you," and advances. Encred slips it and the sword passes, then takes a fast step forward and drives in with the sword. The enemy soldier is surprised and asks if this is the same guy he saw before, and says he got incomparably better. But what was surprise turns into indignation, and he asks himself if he is actually trying to reach him in just one step. Our hero advances this time with a vertical attack that is blocked. The swords clash hard against each other. Our hero manages to identify the fluid sword art through the way the attacks are deflected. With every second that passes, the fight grows more intense. Encred thinks he needs to focus every one of his senses on what is in front of him, because if he gets distracted for even a moment, the balance will collapse, and says he has to give everything he has. The flag does not matter anymore. Everything around me disappears. All that is left is the sword, and once again they collide. Our hero is stabbed in the chest. He spits blood and says with conviction, "I remember you. You were guarding the flagpole out on the field, right?" Then he says his name, Mitch Hurrier, commander of the platoon of the Greyhound Squadron of the Principality of Aspen. Our hero then introduces himself. "I am the commander of the squadron of the Kingdom of Naulilia." Encred, an enemy soldier, appears and asks, "Is he the enemy?" The commander says, "Yes, he is a specialist at staying hidden." His subordinate says he looks harmless. Mitch then asks why he is smiling. Our hero thinks to himself, "Ragnar, you were wrong. It was not concentration born from fear in the moment of death that I needed. What I needed was a good rival, an opponent who would risk everything and give everything to fight and push me forward." Mitch, confused, asks if he is just a madman. The scene cuts to Ragnar saying that focusing on a single point is similar to the tension of when you are dying. Encred says, "I understand now." Ragnar asks why then he looks like he is not listening. Has he already given up? The Shaggy One appears once more saying they have been called to regroup, and Encred calls out to Ragnar. Ragnar is confused, because now he seems more fired up than before, which he finds genuinely strange, and wonders if he should push the warm-up a little harder today. The fog rises once more. Encred shouts, "Everyone get down! Shields! The arrows come!" Once again he asks the Shaggy One to come with him, and this time Ragnar follows alongside the Shaggy One. The two curse each other quickly and keep moving, while fighting fiercely. Our hero, upon finding Mitch, this time says, "Good to see you, friend," and calls him into the fight. Mitch asks if he came looking for him, and our hero says, "Do you have a problem with someone confessing because it was love at first sight?" Mitch fires back. If the squadron are the Greyhounds, then the lovers are persistent, and says it is the first time anyone has ever come looking for him. Encred asks if he is upset about it. He says not at all, and the fight begins. Our hero tries to enter the state of concentration to feel the sword, but is stabbed in the chest once more. Mitch then says with disappointment that he did not think he would lose so easily, and that he thought something was going to happen coming at him like that. Encred then thinks his approach was wrong. It cannot be intentional. He needs to be drawn into the fight naturally, and he repeats the day to find that feeling. On the nth time, he managed to see the tip of the sword again. On the 28th time, he learned to enter the state of concentration intentionally. On the 48th time, he managed to see Ragnar's sword and dodge it. Ragnar is completely stunned and asks how. Our hero thinks internally, pure concentration. It means controlling your body and the sword completely, and thinks about how far he has come before repeating this day, and says, "This time, it is finally time to surpass this today." The scene shifts to our hero talking with the fairy. He says he had seen a spellcaster among the Aspen soldiers, and the fairy asks him to explain further. The scene shifts to a thick fog spreading among the soldiers. Everyone was positioning their shields on the ground. Meanwhile, Rem, Rob, and Ragnar were repositioning themselves. Encred pushes forward determined through the soldiers, and finds in front of him a soldier radiating aura. Mitch looks directly at Robin, and Rob just stares back at him. Then he grips his sword and drops into position. He advances with a fast vertical strike. Mitch was quick enough to slip it by moving to the side, and tries a horizontal counter. Rob closes his stance fast, and manages to absorb the impact of the sword, which breaks Mitch's footing. And then Rob drives a frontal thrust, and Mitch barely manages to block it. The two of them gain space to reset, and explode toward each other. They lock eyes with bloodthirsty stares. In the middle of the stare down, Mitch asks our hero his name, and immediately after explodes and breaks Rob's stance, then does not hesitate to attack again. Robin stares Mitch down and time begins to slow. He can see Mitch loading up the attack perfectly. He can see the balance point between his feet. Then Mitch drives a diagonal strike. Rob sees it coming and dodges with ease, and Encred opens space to counter. The two attack at the same time, and both swords pass each other's necks. Mitch sees the next attack coming and ducks, and is stunned because he should have finished him long ago, and starts grinding his teeth in rage. He lifts his sword again and drops into position. The space was wide enough for him to use his technique. Then he starts the strike, tearing across the ground. Rob reads it. It was that same strike, the same strike that had killed him countless times. And then he lifts his sword to meet the blow, and this time he smiles. The swords crash brutally against each other. Mitch is impressed by the way he parried the strike. The scene shifts to a blue flag and a silhouette of Mitch. It was the time he had been recruited by a regional house. He had faced several knights at only 15 years old, and had become one of the 3 strongest fighters of the Grey Hounds. He looked at those soldiers in a different way. One of them falls to the ground defeated. Mitch looks at him lying on the ground, and the scene shifts to Rob loading up a strike. And then Mitch is hit in the left shoulder. Incred keeps pushing the sword in, and then pulls it out of his shoulder. Mitch lowers his sword and holds the bleeding. He stares at the ground with no direction. Encred was already turning to leave, until Mitch says he had underestimated him. Encred simply says he is right. Then Mitch opens an expression of sadness, and Encred slowly begins to raise his sword and tells him it was fun. And Mitch just watches him as the sword closes in. Suddenly a soldier arrives, stopping Encred's attack, and another soldier arrives, stopping Mitch's bleeding. And then the blonde soldier orders them to take him somewhere safe, and starts talking to Encred, and threatens him, saying he will not have a peaceful death. And Encred suddenly finds himself surrounded by several soldiers and beasts. He looks at the flag, and the environment shifts back to the wall. So this was the wall he had to overcome today. Right after that, the soldier orders fire, and the arrows head straight toward Encred. Encred just ignores them and pushes toward the soldier. The arrows pass all around him, and the soldier loads up a vertical attack. The 2 swords clash and they lock eyes, and Encred looks at his sword, which was already cracking. Then the 2 of them separate from the impact, and suddenly he throws a dagger toward the flags, and ducks under the soldier's attack right after, and keeps throwing daggers toward the flag. And one of them connects and cuts the flag. The scene cuts to the fairy driving a strike into a soldier, and then finishing another one right after. There were several soldiers defeated on the ground. The fairy looks toward the horizon, and then the fog was beginning to clear. One of the soldiers wonders what happened to the flag, and right after is caught off guard by the fairy, and the fairy shouts for everyone to advance in a counterattack now. The soldiers shout with excitement and determination toward the enemy. Things were now more favorable for her after the fog lifted. The scene cuts to Encred spent with his sword split in half. He knows he messed up and will have to deal with the consequences, and other soldiers started closing in on him. The scene shifts to Rem talking to the soldiers, and orders them to bring the spellcaster to him or everyone will die. Ragnar was among the allied soldiers. All of them were watching without understanding anything. Ragnar was just silent and composed, and quickly gets confused by what is happening, and cuts to Encred surrounded. One of the soldiers gets ready to land a strike, but suddenly the puma pushes forward toward him. Encred looks at the puma and she stares back at him. One of the soldiers freezes with fear, and the puma keeps pushing through the soldiers. Suddenly all the crossbow strings snap. The puma had quickly cut through all of them, and she comes back in front of Encred, protecting him. Suddenly, that blonde soldier approaches and stares with a look of disgust, and out of nowhere, someone taps Encred on the shoulder. Then Vengeance arrives, calling Encred an idiot, and pushes toward the soldier. The 2 clash, but the soldier was clearly stronger. Vengeance hits the ground hard and his sword flies away, and immediately shouts for them to shoot the soldier, but the soldier does not back down. Then the puma appears, surprising him from behind. The soldier drives an elbow into her chest. She flies back and the soldier keeps advancing. Suddenly, Encred reads it again. He can see where the attack is coming from. Then he pulls a dagger from his pocket and gets ready to absorb the impact. The 2 swords crash brutally against each other. A short flashback of Mitch appears. This was the same defense Mitch used. The blonde soldier notices and is stunned, and asks how he knew that. Encred just laughs, staring at him, while Vengeance tries to attack the soldier and fails miserably. The soldier looks forward and sees the number of soldiers coming toward him, and then turns to Encred and says he will not forget him. Encred just answers, "Feel free, feel." The soldier orders everyone to retreat. Vengeance runs toward Encred to help him. Encred leans on the commander's shoulder and takes the puma with him, and they also walk in retreat. Encred was a little dizzy because he was losing blood, and suddenly closes his eyes hearing Vengeance saying something. The environment shifts back to that creature in the boat. It asks Encred what it is that drives him, and cuts to Vengeance holding him and celebrating. The scene shifts to Encred with his hand on the puma. The 2 of them were lying on the bed, and then he looks forward and everyone is staring at him. He asks everyone what is going on. The redhead just asks if he is feeling all right, and without any reason, Encred spills water on the puma. She just grunts and wipes herself off. Tag and the redhead were already heading out, and the rest of the squadron had no more worries. And Rem was staring at Encred. Actually, he was staring at the beast. Then he asks how Encred knew the flag was a spell. He answers that he had a friend who suspected based on what he had heard from him. Rem stands up and just says he should not get too interested in spells. And then Encred asks what he was doing in the battle. He looks back and says he had gone after the spellcaster, but that he did not take a liking to him. Tag appears wanting to pet the puma. She roars very loudly in anger, and Tag tries to hide behind the bed in fear. Encred looks again at the puma, who was cleaning herself with her tongue. And then the afternoon arrives at the camp. The scene returns to Encred getting up from the bed. Ragnar says he should not be moving around too much. Rem comes from behind and says it is better he not spread his laziness to Encred. Ragnar just ignores him and goes after his sword. Encred brings up a subject with Rem, asking about the ability he had never practiced before. The Shaggy One answers that this is normal, and Ragnar adds that it must have been easier since he learned the basics first. Encred looks at his own fist. Rem and Ragnar were already about to go at each other, until Encred cuts them off asking for a duel. The two look at Encred, calling him out of his mind. Suddenly, the fairy arrives at the entrance and walks in asking if it was him who broke the spell. Our hero confirms it was him. She says there were 5 replicas. There was no way he could have hit the real one right away. While she looked at him, he simply answered that he guessed. She turns, and Encred asks if that is all she came to find out. She looks back and answers that she also came to see his face. Encred looks forward, embarrassed. Rem cannot hold it and already puts on a mischievous, curious look. Tag appears in the back saying he can count on him, and also says that a squire from the Order of Knights is here. The scene shifts to a knight among the flags. Then 3 types of knights are introduced, and at the end, the knights who surpass humanity. The squadron was already heading out, and Rem finishes telling Encred to rest. Encred does not accept and says he wants to see the squire. The Shaggy One says they have no choice. Then several soldiers were positioned that afternoon. Among them, Encred's squadron. In the back, Encred was watching the squire. He walked as if nothing could shake him. The enemy soldiers were pointing their bows at him. They seemed to be avoiding attacking, and the squire kept advancing. Suddenly, a soldier orders the attack. The arrows fly through the sky. The squire stops in the middle of the field and watches them, and then they begin falling toward him. He kneels down, gripping his sword, and uses one of his feet to build pressure in the ground. Ragnar notices that movement. Meanwhile, the squire kept loading up his attack and explodes toward the enemy soldiers. Encred is impressed by what he sees. The squire reaches the soldiers and pulls out the sword. The impact was so massive that all the soldiers began to fly. Encred keeps watching everything. Encred is left speechless. It seems absurd to him. One of the soldiers nearly soils himself looking at the squire. Then the squire gets ready for a new attack and explodes again, clearing the entire field. Meanwhile, the other soldiers are trying to retreat, but suddenly a soldier shouts to stop him. Until he has his head taken off, Rem watches with admiration. He had already expected this result. Ragnar was analyzing whether he could do the same, and the redhead says the enemy commander is incompetent. Tag is beside the ponytail while he looked at those poor souls. Encred analyzes the style of that squire. The scene cuts to a demonstration of the precise sword art, and then to the heavy sword art, then to the disorienting sword art, and finally the fluid sword art. He states that the heavy sword art and the fluid sword art are opposites, but that he could see both in that squire. The scene cuts to the soldiers advancing. Rem looks at Ragnar. Ragnar looks at Rem, and then he gives a faint smile. The soldiers keep advancing. Encred was being protected in the middle of his squadron. He closes his eyes, and the environment shifts around him. He faces that wall in front of him. Meanwhile, Encred's squadron was protecting him. Our hero begins to climb the wall. The soldiers kept fighting. Encred pushed himself to climb, and the soldiers shouted with determination. Night arrives, and the scene shifts to an unknown city. At the center were the king and that blonde soldier talking. He was quite worried. Rio looked at the sovereign in silence. Adkins was the third between the two. The sovereign kept fuming about that incompetent commander. Adkins says this would not have happened if the spell had worked, and suddenly the sovereign says the Greyhounds will pay for this, and Rio states that this is not going to end well for them. The scene shifts to an open field with several soldiers returning from the war, and Encred's squadron was among them. They arrive at the city fortress and were all lined up in formation. Encred is called to the front to receive a reward. Meanwhile, some soldiers were wondering how that idiot had broken the spell. Suddenly, Scarface appears telling them to shut their mouths, and Angel agrees with him. Then Encred receives a pouch. He looks at it without saying anything. Tag asks what he is going to do with all that money, and then he asks for the best blacksmith in the city. The scene shifts, and Tag is stunned, asking if he is going to spend it all on a sword. Encred pulls out the new sword and draws it from the scabbard, and answers that he is going to take the soldier promotion exam. Tag thought he was not interested in promotions, but it actually makes sense to him. Then Encred gets ready to start the ranking process. Tag was the organizer of the event. The first soldier approaches Encred with a mocking look. He looks at the betting box and says, "Who was the idiot that bet on Encred?" Tag says you cannot guess the result until it is over. The two begin the duel, taking their positions. Suddenly, the soldier advances toward Encred, calling him an idiot, and then tries a fast horizontal attack. The impact was strong, and the soldier loses his balance. His sword flies out and one of his fingers breaks, and he runs off screaming in fear. Rob shuts him up with an elbow to the face. The soldier stays on the ground without saying anything. Encred wonders why he was so weak. Tag is left speechless because it was so easy for him. He just wanted Encred to have some bets placed. Suddenly, an old man arrives saying Encred got lucky, and says this time he will be the opponent. He starts moving the spear up and down, then suddenly attacks with a frontal strike. Encred cuts the tip of the spear off. Our hero waits to see if he has another card up his sleeve, but the old man was already scared stiff with his spear broken, and Encred finishes it with a kick to his stomach, and the old man flies straight to the ground. Several soldiers were watching the duel, and Encred was standing among everyone in silence with his sword not even in his hands. Tag keeps asking who would be the next to duel. Vengeance was mocking him but changed his mind. Angel stands up and says he wants a rematch. Scarface says no. Encred had gotten much stronger than him. Then Angel goes back to watching the duel in silence. Suddenly, someone appears encouraging one of the soldiers who was watching. It was the shaggy one, and this was one of the soldiers who had been making fun of Encred. Encred was just watching the shaggy one messing with the soldier. He stops for a moment in the middle of the field and remembers the first soldier who defeated him, that assassin who killed him in his sleep, and Mitch, who had absolutely brutal strength, and even his own squadron. He looks and thinks those were the only ones who gave him real trouble so far. Suddenly, a soldier comes up behind him, and then Encred does not hesitate to push forward against him. The two swords clash, and the soldier is left speechless. Encred loads up a vertical strike and splits the soldier's sword in half. The soldier is left completely shaken. Encred loads the attack again and stops right before hitting the soldier. The soldier stands there looking at him and collapses, drooling on the ground with no reaction. Encred looks at him, while everyone around him was sweating with fear. That soldier who had been mocking him was now lying drooling on the ground. Suddenly someone says, "That is the one who broke the spell." Encred was standing among everyone composed. Then Angel shouts, calling him the Spellbreaker, and out of nowhere motivates everyone to call him that, and everyone starts shouting, calling him the Spellbreaker. Encred just watches the crowd without reacting. He lets out a quiet breath. Tag comes to him saying good work, and that he is now a mid-rank. And then our hero tells him he still has to reach the higher rank. Tag is surprised and asks if he is still going to keep pushing. Suddenly, a man in the middle of the crowd stands up. He had an eagle badge on his shoulder and starts walking with his hands in his pockets toward Rob, and then challenges Encred to a duel. Rem gets to his feet, already reading that this one is going to be difficult. Ragnar says this guy is on the same level as the Greyhounds and states he could be as strong as Mitch. Then Encred grips his sword firm and calls out to the soldier. He is surprised because Encred is not afraid. Then he draws his sword from the scabbard, and the soldiers who were watching start shouting with excitement. The two take their positions on the field. Then the soldier loads up the attack and advances toward Encred with a frontal strike. Encred reads the attack. It was coming straight for his face, and then he manages to slip it perfectly, but the soldier does not hesitate to keep attacking and uses his other hand to grab onto Encred's clothes. And suddenly, Encred grips the soldier's hand firmly and lifts his sword to finish him. The soldier stares back, surprised by the nerve. Then Encred throws the sword quickly, and it drives straight into the ground. The soldier had managed to dodge at the last second. He then grinds his teeth and keeps attacking, and drives a strike directly at Encred's face. Then Encred grabs the sword with his bare hands and drives his knee straight into the soldier's stomach. The soldier falls back and Encred is without his sword. Then he takes the opening to advance again. Encred pulls a dagger from his chest, and the two attack each other at the same time. But suddenly the fairy appears and throws both of them off balance with a single strike, and right after tells the two of them to settle down. Encred keeps standing there, catching his breath, looking at her, and the redhead was already behind the soldier, ready to finish him. In fact, the whole squadron was behind him. At that moment, Rem is impressed by Encred's luck, and the soldier says not to get excited. It was just a duel. Then the two are face to face, and the soldier says he did not expect this, and introduces himself as Torres and extends his hand to greet him. Encred extends his hand and greets him. The other soldiers were surprised. That was a special rank soldier. Then almost all the soldiers start shouting and celebrating for Encred. Encred looks back, watching the crowd cheer, and wraps up the exchange, shaking Torres' hand. The afternoon arrives at the fortress. The scene was at a place with wooden barracks. The commander of the first company invites Encred to join it. Encred apologizes and says he cannot accept, and asks if he can at least send Rem. The commander says he would not take that lunatic and leaves, thanking him. Tag appears, asking if he should pack his things. Then Encred walks in and says he is not going, but is interrupted by someone walking in. Torres appears in the doorway asking how things are going, and says he will get straight to the point, and calls him to join the frontier guards. Encrid is surprised and keeps looking at Torres. The rest of the squadron just watches the conversation. Rem notices that before Encrid could not even dream of this. Torres says he noticed it in the very first strike. He continues saying that if he joins, he will receive intense training and insane challenges, and extends his hand to Encrid. Rem lets out a quiet breath. Ragnar was lying down listening. The ponytail and the redhead were listening too. Encrid, without reacting, tries to open his mouth to say something, but then answers that there is no better place than here for intense training, and Torres stares at him without understanding. Another day arrives and it was colder than usual. Rem was in bed trembling from the cold. Encrid gets up and was already ready to head out, and suddenly the ponytail pulls Rem's blanket off, calling him to train. He gives up and then tries to ask Encrid, but he was already heading out on a job. Then Encrid leaves, hearing Rem's shouts behind him. Our hero arrives at a very busy location. 2 patrol soldiers arrive and greet him. The 2 introduce themselves as Jack and Bo. Encrid looks back as if he had already heard those names before. Then the 3 of them start walking forward. Bo starts talking about the rank he had reached, and talks about high-rank soldiers. The cold keeps coming down through the barracks. The 2 behind Encrid were complaining quite a lot about the cold, but he keeps walking through the crowd. Encrid stops for a moment and looks at that hooded figure. He staggers and trips in front of Encrid. Encrid walks over and asks if he is all right. Suddenly, the hooded one pulls out a hidden blade. Encrid cannot react in time and takes a stab directly to the chest. He is startled and asks what is happening. The other 2 who were behind him pretend nothing is happening. All of this was happening in the middle of the crowd. The assassin asks if he is still surprised with the knife in his chest, and then says, "This is for breaking the spell." Encrid is stunned by how little warning there was. Then the assassin cuts across Encrid's chest. Encrid immediately loses his strength, and the 2 walk away while Encrid bled. Bo signals that the mission was a success. Meanwhile, Encrid was already piecing things together. He remembers Tag saying those 2 were badly hurt, and before falling, he realizes it was their excuse. A woman who was carrying cloth notices Encrid falling. She looks at him and is startled. Suddenly everyone starts shouting while Encrid was dead on the ground. And then he wakes up again and gets up in a rush. He reaches Auden. He was pouring hot water over his body. Then he looks back, greeting Encrid. Encrid asks about the training method to warm the body up, and immediately asks him to teach it to him. Our hero remembers he could not react because of the cold, and the scene returns to him stretching. Auden says muscles go slow if they cannot stabilize, and then it returns to Jack and Bo introducing themselves. Encrid says it is a pleasure to meet them, and the 3 continue walking forward. The scene repeats with the 2 complaining about the cold. But this time Encrid had his body warmed up, and there he was. The assassin appears again. Encrid is already ready and extends his hand, and hits the 2 directly in the eyes. Bo is impressed by how he had sensed it. Meanwhile, the assassin was just standing there watching. Encrid ducks down and tries to draw his sword. The assassin throws something toward Encrid, and a blade hits directly in Encrid's chest. It had pierced exactly through his heart. He looks at the assassin again, and there he was with that damned smile. Encrid falls to the ground with no strength. The same woman was screaming again. Encrid was lying on the ground bleeding. Then he gives one last smile before coming back again. The scene returns to him stretching his muscles, and the ponytail forces his spine to stretch further. Ragnar and Rem ask what the hell he is doing. The redhead arrives talking about the job, and is immediately interrupted by the whole squadron stretching. He stands there with a blank look watching everyone. The scene shifts, and Encrid was sitting down. He was sketching the shape of the dagger. Suddenly the redhead comes and sits beside him. Encrid asks if the name of the dagger is the whistling dagger. The redhead explains it is because of the sharp sound it makes when thrown. Encrid just nods, saying he will remember that. The scene cuts to that assassin again. Once again, Encrid extends his hand, hits both of them in the eye the same way. He grabs Bo by the neck and tries to use him as a shield, but before he could manage, he is hit by the dagger in the ribs, and right after another one hits Bo in the back, and one more pierces Jack in the throat. Encrid looks at him and wonders why there were 3 daggers, and there he was again positioned, and he opens that damned smile again. The 3 were already on the ground, and everyone around was screaming. The assassin comes close and compliments him on the attempt, and says again that the persistent lover never forgets his target, and Encrid confirms. The assassin cannot understand. He was cracking a joke at the edge of death, and then he grabs the dagger and pulls it from Encrid's ribs, and he smiles again, heading into one more chance. The scene shifts to that creature in a boat. A lantern was swaying in the middle of nowhere, and cuts to Encrid staring at the ceiling in silence. and then he gets up already determined to finish those bastards. He reaches Jackson and asks him to explain the whistling dagger. Jackson asks where he got that idea from, then gives up trying to find out and starts explaining. He explains it is a dagger that can only be heard and is hard to track. Encrid asks if there is any way to dodge it, and then the redhead asks if he really needs to know. Encrid looks at him and just says yes. Then the redhead notices he is making that same expression again, and starts explaining that he needs to watch the thrower's hand. Encrid asks if he can learn this technique. Then the redhead asks if he wants him to teach him how to throw, or if he did not want to, that was fine too. Encrid, without thinking much, says he wants to learn, and the scene goes back to that busy place. The two were talking nonsense behind him again. Then Encrid remembers the redhead's explanation. Our hero takes 2 steps forward and grabs his sword fast and quickly finishes Jack, then goes toward Bo and finishes him too with a strike to the stomach. Everyone around starts shouting. Encrid had already finished the job with the two, and once again the assassin appears, with that damned blade in his hands. Encrid starts focusing on him, but the blade was too fast for his arm, and then for his chest. Encrid staggers without reacting. He laughs because this time he had managed to see it, that assassin throwing in the position of his hands. Then the assassin says, "The persistent lover." Encrid cuts in finishing, never forgets his target. Then the assassin looks terrified, asking how he knew. Encrid looks at him and shouts, "See you soon." And once again, Encrid grips his sword and finishes Jack in the throat and drives a thrust into Bo's chest and is already getting ready for the next one. He looks at the assassin and that blade and perfectly sees him spinning it in his finger. The blade flies, making that whistling sound. And Rob defends by putting his forearm in the way. The assassin, desperate, gets ready for the next attack. Rob pushes forward, certain he will attack differently, but the assassin switches it up and fools him. While Encrid was advancing, he is caught off guard by the dagger in his chest. His knees hit the ground again. Both daggers had driven into the middle of his chest. And then he pulls both of them out and says this is incredibly good. And the scene shifts to him spinning a dagger in his finger. He tries to throw and misses the apple. The redhead asks what he is doing. He just explains he was practicing. While he was spinning, one of the dagger's threads snaps loose. The blade grazes right past the redhead's side. The two stand there looking at each other in silence. Then the scene cuts to the assassin throwing 2 daggers one after the other. Encrid was already advancing toward him. Suddenly he is caught off guard. An arrow hits directly in his back, and there was a crossbowman up on the lookout, and cuts again to Encrid throwing a dagger, which hits the crossbowman directly up on the post, and the assassin throws a blade in his direction. The scene cuts to Encrid hitting the apple in the redhead's hand. The throw was perfect, and it drops to the ground. The redhead watches with an impressed look. Encrid asks what he is doing wrong. He says it is enough and asks how he learned to use daggers, and then he says he had seen someone throw in a fight. Jackson just stares at him silently impressed, and asks if he has ever heard of the blade-throwing technique, and then starts explaining how the idea of using daggers came about. Encrid says he did not know there was a story behind it. The scene cuts to Jack and Bo looking at Encrid. Then he says they will patrol a different location today, and says he will take responsibility. The two behind Encrid whisper, asking what they will do. The 3 arrive at the location. Encrid asks what they got to betray him. The 2 look shaken and quickly get ready to come at him. Encrid finishes Jack with a cut to the stomach and drives the sword into Bo's stomach, and there were the 2 lying on the ground. Encrid looks forward, and the crossbowman and the assassin were already positioned. The 2 look at the situation confused. Encrid tells them to bring it. The assassin does not hesitate and throws 3 blades in his direction. Rob ducks, dodging the attack. The crossbowman was already positioned to attack him. Rob quickly spins around and throws one of the daggers into the crossbowman's forehead. Then the assassin takes the opening to throw another one. Encrid reacts by defending with his forearm. The assassin is left without a reaction at that moment. Encrid had his back turned without even needing to look at him, and turns toward the assassin with a bloodthirsty look. The assassin starts stuttering, asking who the hell he is. Encrid gives a quiet smile and pulls the dagger out. The tip of the blade comes out of his forearm, then looks at the assassin laughing and asking how many he still has. The assassin answers he only has 2. Encrid says he is jealous because he only has 1. The assassin says he is a dead man once he throws it. Encrid says they will only find out if they fight for real. The assassin is positioned in front of him. He quickly pulls a blade from his pocket. Encrid is caught off guard by the speed, but manages to dodge it with his neck and throws a dagger, but the assassin dodges, and he pulls out 2 more from his pocket. Then Encrid gets ready to throw one in his direction and launches the dagger toward the hooded one. He barely manages to dodge and shouts, calling Encrid a liar. Our hero notices he has drawn a sword, and he advances toward Rob. Rob stays still waiting for the right moment, and then the assassin attacks with a thrust, and Encrid manages to stop him by grabbing his wrist. The assassin looks at him without reacting, and Encrid looks back at him, lifts his sword with a bloodthirsty look, and drives it into the assassin's head. He drops to his knees with the sword in his forehead, and Encrid pulls it out, dropping him. After 10 attempts, he finally did it. Our hero lets out a quiet breath and smiles up at the sky without a care, right after he looks at the assassin, and opens his pocket full of daggers. After some time, he arrives at the camp. Inside, Encrid was telling everything to the fairy. She still cannot believe everything that happened. Encrid just explains that the goddess of luck must have been on his side. She looks at him in silence. Encrid looks back at her, and then sends him back to his post. He steps through the entrance, but suddenly the axe comes flying in his direction, and he barely manages to dodge. It was Rem testing his reflexes, and Encrid hands him the hot stones he had been asking for in the morning. Rem thanks him with great excitement, and Rob looks at his hair and negotiates with Tag to cut his hair. The two head out of the camp, and Tag was already cutting his hair, and suddenly snow starts falling, and the whole squadron was outside watching. Rob goes back to analyzing that earlier fight, and asks Tag if he knows where the 3 who died were from. Tag explains that Jack had been exiled after being caught stealing, and Bo had insulted a noble. And Rutan, the assassin, he was a mercenary. And then Rob asks Jackson for more information. He says he had lost contact with that mercenary guild. And right after Tag finishes cutting Rob's hair, and the snow would not stop falling, Jackson says he will stand guard in the city tonight. Rob looks at Rem and Jackson, and asks if they do not want to go on a mission so they do not have to stay in the snow. Rem, without hesitation, accepts the proposal, and Tag accepts too. Encrid says he needs to ask the commander for permission. Then the whole squadron heads inside the cabin to get ready. The snow was already falling, and Encrid was talking with the fairy. He starts by asking for permission to start a mission. She looks at him for a moment, and tells him that he wants to do all this just because he does not want to clear the snow. Encrid with a straight face says that is not it. Outside, the snow would not stop falling. The whole squadron was already heading out to gather information, until Rob orders Jackson to find out where that thieves' guild is. Tag asks what kind of order that is, and Jackson just accepts without a fuss. Then Tag starts thinking he is going crazy. Meanwhile, the rest of the squadron stayed at the tavern. Tag was thinking about something, until he calls the waitress over, and starts whispering something in her ear. Rob looks back and notices Jackson is taking too long, and soon starts feeling a little sorry for him. Outside, the snow was falling while Jackson was on top of a house. He stayed focused, trying to pick up on any movement, until 2 hooded figures passed through the street. Inside the tavern, it was quite busy. Jackson opens the door and says he found their location. Everyone looks at him while eating meat. Jackson stands still in front of the door. Encrid looks at him while holding a piece of meat and offers some to him, but he declines. And they ask why they are taking so long. Rem says there is absolutely no way he is going out. It is too cold. Encrid cuts in saying he wanted to go now, but the snow would get in the way. Then he looks outside and decides they will go now. Then everyone heads out of the tavern. There was a beggar sitting on the ground, and suddenly he pulls out a dagger. Another one appears, and the two advance toward Encrid. Rem steps in front of one of them with a sincere smile, and drives his axe into the enemy's forehead, and finishes the other with a well-placed punch to the nose. Tag says those guys are probably from the guild, and right after the redhead found the hideout, but it was locked. And then the ponytail asks permission, and says he will knock to see if anyone answers, and suddenly he blasts the hideout door open with a punch, and asks if they do not want to come in. Rem asks if he knew what knocking on a door meant, and then they walk into the hideout. The door was right at the back. Everything seemed quiet and the door was closed, and inside was a gang of mercenaries just waiting. One of them motivates the gang, saying he can take them down. Another asks if everything is really all right, but the conversation is cut short by a kick from the ponytail blasting the door open, and then he goes quiet. Rem shouts that he is going to kill everyone while Encrid just negotiates. He says all those who prefer to be arrested instead of dying. Before finishing, he pulls out his sword, and finishes by saying all those who do not want to die should cross that line. Rem, disappointed, asks if he is not going to kill all of them first. Encrid says he changed his mind. The gang leader laughs in his face, and the ponytail says they will not listen without brute force. And then Encrid says he will force them to listen, and calls out the strongest one there. The gang leader laughs with interest, and right away introduces their strongest swordsman, who goes by Ivern. Ivern just watches and follows the order, and then starts asking if Encrid will be able to block his sword. But in the middle of his speech, he lunges trying to attack Encrid. Encrid blocks it perfectly, and counters with a thrust into his shoulder. The gang leader watches in silence. Encrid says, "If that is the strongest, I do not want to see the rest," and orders them to surrender, giving one last chance or they will die. and the whole squadron watches him with blank looks, and Rem just watches him trying to show off. Then everyone in the place goes quiet, staring at Encred. Suddenly, a weapon drops to the floor. One of the men in the gang raises his hand and surrenders, but the leader does not accept it and gets ready to attack him. The sword comes very close to hitting him, but the leader is stopped by a dagger thrown into his forehead. It was Encred who had thrown it. Then the leader drops crashing to the floor, while Encred just watched it all, and Rem says he unfortunately just found him incredibly cool. Tag's eyes light up, calling him cool. Jackson just says, not bad. Ragnar unfortunately also agrees that he is cool, and Encred says that must have been very cool indeed. Right after that, everyone there surrenders, and then Rem and Encred start deciding what to do with everyone. One of them says, please do not kill them. There were people there with sick mothers, and that if he had to kill someone, then kill him. Gilfim. Rob is impressed, so he was the guild leader. The guy answers that no, he was actually the boss himself. Encred asks, so the guy on the floor was not Gilfim? And Tag answers that they name the guilds after random people, and the bald one keeps saying their leader was a terrible person. Then everyone in the gang starts crying, saying not to kill Gilfim. Rem shouts, are you really going to kill them? Encred was a heartless bastard, and the bald one says he will hand over the entire guild fortune if they let them live. Encred goes quiet, and Tag already had that money smile of his. Night was already coming and the snow kept falling. The ponytail rips the vault door off, and then the whole squadron goes ahead to look at the fortune. Everyone was looking at everything in there. Meanwhile, Encred finds something. He wants a flexible leather armor that is highly resistant. Tag turns and calls him over, and asks if he does not want to turn this into a guild. Encred asks if Tag is telling them to become thieves, and then keeps looking at Tag, and explains that if they stay in this guild's place, no other one will appear. Rob starts putting the pieces together. Tag had brought them all here. It was at that moment when Tag had spoken to the waitress, and then Tag realizes Encred has finally figured out what happened. Tag asks permission to reform this organization. Rob considers it and sees it is not a bad idea. And right away Tag shouts at the bald one saying, from now on they do not kill, and explains they will use them to remove the bad apples. Then the bald one says, it is not that simple. Someone always comes every spring to audit the guild, and could easily kill them if they see the changes. But Tag says it is not a problem because they have worse monsters than that. Encred warns everyone they are heading out. Rem looks at him and asks if they finished clearing the snow. Encred grabs his things and gets ready to go. Ragnar was lounging on the floor, and the ponytail was praying in front of the fire. And the redhead says he has something to do and will only be back tomorrow. Then Encred closes his eyes and says he had no idea they were all so busy. And then half the squadron drops to the ground, sleeping. The next morning, the cold continued, and frozen drops hung from the trees. The fairy asks if he had fun skipping the snow removal task. Encred, with a straight face, says he has no idea what she is talking about. The fairy says she heard he never turns down a duel, and then calls him to practice. Encred drops into position and accepts the challenge. Suddenly, she strikes at Encred's feather, and he drops with no reaction at all. Then she tells him to get up. He tries to grab his sword, but she cuts in with another strike, knocking it away. Rob looks at her sword with indignation. Her sword was so thin it looked like a whip. Rob stays on the ground while the fairy analyzes him. She was certain he could see the future. Then she looks up at the sky and it starts to snow. She turns and says she will keep watching. Rob stayed quiet as she walked away, and sits thinking about what he should have done to avoid her strikes. Then a silhouette of the ponytail appears. The answer was martial arts. The scene cuts to the ponytail training while holding a tree, and then throws it to the ground, and smiles at Encred. He just watches in silence. And then the ponytail says he has a training method, and that it is going to be quite painful. And Encred answers that is his specialty. The scene cuts to Encred doing squats while holding a giant rock. Then the ponytail starts explaining the whole training. Encred kept pushing himself with the rock on his back, and the ponytail decides to help a little by pressing him further down, and tells him he seems to regret not having done this earlier. And Encred answers he has no time for regrets, and asks him to teach him something while he is in this position. The ponytail thinks, how does he manage to be this driven? And then gives a faint smile of respect toward Encred. Then he picks up the rocks and moves on to the next step. Meanwhile, the puma was watching Encred train. He was training with 2 rocks hanging from his arms, sweating and trembling under the weight. The scene cuts to Encred collapsed at the entrance of the camp. Rem asks if anyone had messed with him, and why he always comes back so wrecked. Encred lies down on the bed, and Rem asks why he does not just give the puma a name already. She starts growling while Encred was running names through his head, and the shaggy one says he is terrible with names. Then Encred lies back and decides he needs to think a little more about the name. He closes his eyes and starts to dream. The scene shifts to several pink petals. Encrid opens his eyes and gets up without understanding anything. It was a vast field of petals and a glowing sky. He starts wondering if this is a dream. This time he was not seeing the ferryman, and this place was not his vibe. Encrid looks back, feeling a presence behind him. A woman was behind him in the distance. She looks at him, and he stares back, and suddenly she says a name, Esther, and repeats again that her name is Esther. Encrid opens his eyes, and suddenly he was lying beside another woman in his bed. She looks at him in silence, and for a moment even seems embarrassed. Encrid does not notice, and just says goodnight to her. Then the two were just lying there. Morning comes and the snow stops for a moment. Encrid was already getting ready to train. Rem asks if he is not still hurt from yesterday. The puma had used magic on him. Encrid had not noticed, and keeps talking to Rem, saying he had dreamed about a woman. He stays still while Rem asked what kind of woman she was. The image of the woman comes to his mind, and then tells Rem she was a beautiful woman. The puma huffs, thinking, at least he has good taste, and starts explaining that she was cursed in the middle of her journey as a mage, and that she was drawn in by the smell of Encrid's curse. The scene cuts to Encrid training and the ponytail talking about how to recover. He sets the rock down and sighs, and calls out to Esther. The scene shifts to her explaining that magic is affected by the power of names, but that she did this at the wrong moment. She keeps looking at Encrid, and confirms that he is definitely carrying a curse, and that if she stayed beside him, she would eventually recover her powers. The day begins to pass. The ponytail and Encrid had already started training. Suddenly, the ponytail attacks with a knee to his stomach. Then Encrid tilts his torso to dodge. Meanwhile, the ponytail takes the opening and grabs his head, and then throws it to the ground. Encrid lies there staring up at Auden. Auden says the body must always be ready, just like gripping a sword. Encrid just accepts and starts listening to his explanations. The fields were already turning green again. Encrid had spent days training. He looks at Rem without hesitating, and Rem smiles, seeing that he has genuinely improved for a real duel. The scene cuts to a plate hitting the table. Encrid had gotten up and calls Ragnar to train. After training, the two stayed talking. Ragnar says he has improved in the fundamentals but still lacks adaptability. Encrid sighs and stays quiet for a moment, then lifts his face and says that is already his specialty. Night arrives and the moon rises in the sky. Encrid was sitting looking at his sword, when suddenly he hears a sound, and barely manages to catch the redhead's attack. Then the redhead says he has genuinely improved. Tag wakes up to complain about all the noise. The puma stretches and growls low. Tag desperately looks around, hoping to find one of her claws to sell. Encrid notices movement at the entrance, and right after the fairy walks in calling him, and immediately says she has a new mission, and then starts explaining everything to him. In the back, that guild leader was walking around yawning, until suddenly he sees the two. Encrid asks how many people she will need. Then she explains it would be her Encrid and one more from the squadron. He wonders why she would get involved in this herself. The guild leader overhears, already thinking Encrid and the commander have something going on. The commander asks if Encrid finds it uncomfortable to go on a mission with her. The guild leader's eyes light up at what he just heard. The conversation spreads through the rest of the camp and everyone talks about it. Two strangers were saying the two even had children together. The day arrives and the sun is rising between the mountains. While Encrid was training, some soldiers were talking about him and the fairy. Encrid listens to all of it with a blank look in disbelief. He reaches the cabin entrance and opens the door. Rem already looks at him, asking how many months before the baby arrives. Encrid cuts in, saying seriously it was a misunderstanding. Auden was praying for their relationship and Ragnar saying it is a good thing. And Rem asks when the date is going to be. Encrid asks if he is talking about the mission and answers he is not going. The shaggy one asks who is going then. The redhead appears beside him, saying he is ready, and then the two turn to head out. And Rem stays behind, shouting, calling the redhead a stray cat. The two head out talking, and the redhead asks why it had to be him. While Encrid was answering, the redhead cuts and asking permission for some advice. Then he says to never share too much of your heart with a woman. And Encrid answers with a blank look, saying he does not need that advice. The two reach the ferry and wait for the commissioner to arrive. Encrid feels relieved she had not heard the rumors, until she brings it up and asks what they did to make people think they have children together. Our hero answers no, while the redhead barely hides a laugh. Then Rob looks back, asking if that was a laugh. The fairy asks if her questions make him uncomfortable. Encrid answers no. While the fairy was asking more questions, the carriage arrives. Encrid was sweating beside the redhead, and the fairy finishes saying they arrived just when it was getting interesting. Encrid right behind her, nervous and confused, not understanding what she meant. Then she starts describing the mission. The mission was to protect the daughter of a wealthy merchant. Right after she begins to step out of the carriage, and she introduces herself as Leona, and says it is a pleasure to meet them, and then they start walking. Encrid notices she does not communicate with the squadron. The attendant starts explaining where they are going. They were really there just to escort her and nothing more. And then he remembers Auden explaining that it is necessary to understand the enemy's strategy. Encrid does not hesitate and starts observing and analyzing right away. He sees that one of the guards is left-handed, and that her steps are heavy. He concludes none of them are of special rank. The redhead asks if he is bored and if he does not want to play something, and that the game was to identify sounds. Then the two keep walking and saying everything they could hear. Rob analyzes for a moment and the redhead answers before him. The three reach the location and are told to wait there. The fairy sits beside them and says she wants to join too. Then the three close their eyes and start describing everything they hear. Encrid loses the rhythm of the other two. He starts to realize it is not just a game. Then the redhead says with his eyes closed that someone was watching them. The fairy adds that someone was behind him, and then the two attack the assassins who were behind them. The redhead gets up and had already suspected it was an ambush. The fairy just answers she thought so too. Suddenly, one of the assassins runs toward Encrid. Encrid turns and attacks him. He hears a scream coming from the second floor, and then he runs up the stairs. One of the assassins tries to block him by throwing several daggers. The redhead jumps and covers Encrid's back, and the fairy finishes one of them. The assassins who were there start to freeze with fear. Jackson had just finished another one. The fairy was watching him, until one of the assassins tries to catch her off guard, and then she finishes him by driving her sword from his shoulder to his throat. Encrid up top pulls the sword from one of their chests and heads toward the room. Suddenly, an assassin leaps toward him. Encrid readies his body for a spin and lands a kick right in the enemy's stomach, blowing out the wooden column. Meanwhile, one of the guards flies out through the door. Encrid stands in front of the door composed, and the enemy leaps toward the target screaming, "Glory to Aspen." The attendant screams, warning him to watch out. Encrid realizes he would not have enough time to throw a dagger. He looks at the distance between himself and the target, and suddenly remembers the squire's ability. He positions his foot to explode forward with the strike, and manages to push forward toward the two. The assassin was still loading up the attack, and Encrid appears like a blur between them, and the assassin hits Encrid in the back. He is startled. The cut was deep, but thanks to that leather armor, it did not pierce through. Encrid had his back to the enemy, and then pushes into him and decides to grab him, and throws himself off the second floor. He lands on top of the assassin with a brutal impact. The assassin groans in immediate pain. Encrid gets up after the impact. The two up top could not believe what they had just seen, but the assassin still managed to get up and asks if Encrid was a frontier soldier, and he answers no. So the assassin fills with confidence, thinking he can beat him. Encrid looks at his stance. He realizes that was the fluid sword art, and then does not hesitate and calls him into the fight. The enemy advances with both swords in hand. Encrid sees him coming and opens his stance. He spreads his balance between his feet and gets ready with excitement for the fight. The sword comes close enough to his face. He slips it by moving to the side, and then ducks under the second attack, and steps back from the third. He takes the opening to advance, and quickly cuts through the fourth strike. Encrid stays with his back turned, while the assassin was left without a reaction. He was terrified because Encrid had dodged everything. Our hero answers he was quite impressed with the strikes. The enemy ignores it and advances out of control toward him. Suddenly, Encrid's eyes light up. He sees the assassin coming at him in slow motion. Encrid can predict the direction of his attacks, and positions his stance to counter, and drives a horizontal strike, which then meets the enemy's chest. The strike had hit the middle of the chest, but Encrid had wanted to hit the heart. The assassin screams in pain. Then Encrid pulls the sword from his chest, and the assassin falls to the ground defeated. In the back, a door opens, and the ones who were left were fleeing. Encrid thinks about going after all of them. The redhead ignores it and says his fight drew attention. Rob asks if Jackson is not going after them. Then he answers they were not hired to chase criminals. And Encrid looks at him as if he had accepted that. The fairy arrives saying that was not bad. Encrid asks if she is all right. She looks at him in silence and says he is worried about his beloved. She would not be able to sleep well at night. The scene cuts to Leona asking if the two are a couple, and Encrid answers no. The fairy looks at him asking if all of this was just a joke to him, and Encrid wonders what is wrong with these people. After that, Leona asks his name, and then thanks him for protecting her and says she will pay. Encrid just answers she does not need to. It was all part of the mission. And as he was saying goodbye, she watched him in silence. Late at night, back at the same bar where everything happened, several guards were positioned outside. Encrid was alone, wondering who those assassins were, that maybe they had been sent by a noble. Leona comes down the stairs looking at him, and right after says he woke up early. Encrid answers that this is his shift. She sits with him and asks him to come with her and join her forces. and explains that her company Roquefried leaves much to be desired. The scene shifts to the wilderness shepherds, then to the Black Leather Guild known for hunting dragons, and finally the Glacial Guardians who were defenders. There was also a map with main routes and regional specialties. She explains all of this was too much to leave with the previous owner's idiot children, and that she would give him anything he wanted to come with her and her forces. Our hero answers he will have to decline. She is surprised because he did not even hesitate. The redhead cuts in saying it is rude to ask again after he already said no, and the fairy appears agreeing and says it is inappropriate. Leona accepts and agrees with the two, and says the other heirs were arriving and that she would get ready. Meanwhile, the two make their way to Encrid's table. The redhead says he needs to stop seducing these women. The fairy says she will cry over him having a lover. Rob grinds his teeth and apologizes to the fairy and says he thinks she no longer fits his type. The redhead listens with a serious expression. The fairy is impressed that he finally responded. In the back, 3 curious onlookers were stunned that Rob had charmed another one alongside the commander. And then after that, she gives a faint smile. The two left and Encrid stayed there alone. The day arrives at the same place as before. Tag says out loud that he heard Encrid stayed with Leona last night. One of those there says he was not a spellbreaker, but a heartbreaker. Encrid asks if Tag only came to mock him, and then says he is going to need him for something, and plans to capture the assassins who escaped. The scene shifts to the previous owner of the Roquefried Association, and then to his adopted daughter Leona, and finally to his son, and then without a clear successor, he passed away. A carriage was making its way through the crowd. One of those present says the assassination was a failure. The owner's son just listens carefully to what was said. The other says he will sort it out and that their deal is still on. The son answers, stuttering that yes, and he will reward them. The bearded one listens and stays quiet. And then they appear in front of the bar where Encrid was. Encrid and the redhead look directly at the door. The son was complaining about the dust and wanted Leona to show up quickly. Encrid analyzes one of them carefully. He sees the bearded one is a strong man. The bearded one cuts his eyes toward Encrid, and Encrid looks at him from the corner of his eye, and then the bearded one returns to his composure. The owner's son orders Jackson to call Leona. Encrid sees he had chosen well bringing Jackson. If Rem had come, he would have split the son's head in half. The redhead pulls out his knife from behind his back while the son was shouting at him. Encrid cuts in, telling him to go already. Leona appears ordering him to stop shouting, and that he was quite late. He answers that late is your ass and that she should educate her bodyguards. And suddenly she slaps the son across the face. Encrid says no one he knows is normal. The two start arguing and the son calls her crazy, and she asks if he wants to rot in prison for the rest of his life, and he answers stuttering that he did not know that. He flinches while a soldier coughs behind him. Then he starts explaining it was not him and that she is not family. Leona answers that she knows she is adopted, but he barely knows how to analyze the trade routes or even calculate the finances. He stutters, saying that is work for his servants. She answers she would not be wasting time if not for the will, and tells him the only argument he has to be the successor is blood, and then she grabs his chin and says he looks nothing like his father, and asks where he got that hideous face and ignorance from. Then he loses patience and draws his sword to attack her. Encrid tries to step in and draw his sword, but is caught off guard. The bearded one was covering the son's back. Everyone behind them was ready. Encrid reads it one more time. The son looks at him in fear. That bearded one was using the fluid sword stance, and Encrid calls out to him asking him to show his technique. The bearded one draws his sword without thinking. Encrid smiles and draws his too, but they are interrupted by someone at the door. It was the frontier guards along with Torres. The son looks completely terrified. Encrid sheathes his sword without a word. The redhead looks at him and remembers what he said. No one he knew was normal, and then confirms that Encrid was the strangest of all. Torres says the assassins were paid by an association, and pressures the son asking if by any chance it had not been him. One of the soldiers says there is not enough evidence to blame them. Torres asks if he really thinks the frontier guards are stupid, and Leona makes an offer. The two will be held until the real culprit is found. And the son shouts that he does not agree with that, and she finishes saying there are still people to be interrogated. Then the scene returns to the enemies who had fled the day before. She says one of them might have been the leader based on the details. Torres says there are chances they will not find anything. And finally she answers that they will return to the city until the frontier needs them. Encrid realizes they will not be protected if they leave the city. And the biggest problem is the bearded one with that sword. He knows Leona has this in mind, but it must be a plan. And then she picks something up, offering it to whoever catches those who fled. Rob looks at the redhead, who is surprised. Leona pulls a dagger from her hands, and right after orders everyone to go look for them. Jackson calls Encrid over quickly, and asks him to leave this one to him. Our hero is curious about why the redhead got so motivated, and looks at the dagger in Leona's hands. Then Encred asks if this dagger is really that impressive. He answers that the dagger was forged by the legendary weaponsmith called Carmen, and explains that she was once a slave who sought revenge, and that she had created 7 weapons she used herself, and this dagger was one of them. Torres orders everyone to stay inside the inn, and that custody would remain with the frontier guards. Encred tells the redhead not to worry about the dagger, and that he had ordered Tag to retrieve it. Meanwhile, the bearded one was just standing there in silence, watching everything. Encred was a little distracted, but suddenly he noticed something, and right after the two locked eyes again, and then the bearded one turned his back to him, and kept moving forward, while Encred just stayed quiet. Meanwhile, night had already settled over the place. The 3 of them were talking about the possibility of being caught, and the one with the goatee explained to the owner's son that the decision over successors was not in his control. Then the bearded one turned and confirmed it would be fine, and that he had already sent a letter. Outside, Encred was training with 2 bags on his back, already sweating cold and trembling quite a bit, until suddenly the 2 bags were thrown to the ground. Encred sat there while Torres and the others watched that uninspiring training, and Torres asked him if it was not a golden opportunity to rest a little now. And then Encred just sighed. Time was different for him. He knew that what others learned in a week, he could learn in days. And that was exactly why he should not waste his time, and that he would use every day to build a solid foundation for his future. Then Torres and the other guy with him started talking, wondering if Encred was strange or if they were just lazy. Torres went quiet for a moment, and suddenly he called Encred's attention, telling him to ease up on getting stronger, and said they had only drawn because he had not expected anything from Encred. Encred let out a sigh, looking at him, and then lifted a faint smile. Suddenly the moon rose in the sky and war cries from a battle could be heard. Torres was already ready for an attack, until he managed to immobilize Encred with a stick fight. Torres celebrated with the people who were watching the fight. Encred, without hesitating, asked for a rematch, while Torres asked if he was not tired already. And suddenly, one of those watching asked to join in too, and the one sitting down asked to go next. Meanwhile, the fat one and the bearded one were just asking each other what they were doing. Suddenly, the scene cut to Encred taking a fall. His back hit the ground hard, and the bearded one was watching it all. And then Encred asked what that was and told him to do it again. The bearded one noticed that his pride was not wounded when he lost. Then the scene returned to Encred's face, as if he had found something new to play with. The image of Encred came to the bearded one's mind, that look of hostility, and he realized that Encred was genuinely someone unique. Then once again, Encred was taken down to the ground, and the bearded one concluded that he truly did not have the talent. The scene cut to Encred, but this time he managed to defend. Then he gripped the soldier's arm firmly and threw him down, and the soldier landed flat on his back, and everyone there, including Torres, shouted in surprise. The fairy complimented him while Leona asked if they were really dating, and the fairy said no, they were married. Encred, hearing that, immediately shut down. Suddenly someone arrived asking permission and whether he could join. Encred looked at who had just shown up. It was that black-haired bearded soldier from the fat one's group. Torres arrived right away, watching him with a bad feeling. The bearded one asked if our hero's name was Encred, then looked directly at him as if he could not hold himself back. A soldier said he was not with them, and that it was better for him to stay quiet and seated. Encred, without thinking twice, said no, and that he had been waiting for this. The bearded one listened to those words, and then gave a faint smile. Jackson was up on the roof watching everything in silence. He looked at that man, and looked at that stance of his as he received the wooden staff, and concluded that even with a wooden staff he was still dangerous, and that it was better for him to stay ready. Encred was already in his stance, and the bearded one was walking toward him with no guard at all, and stopped right in front of him, dropping into his guard. Encred felt an inexplicable tension run through his body. Then the image of the bearded one appeared, and it was as if he were back in war again, that attack coming toward him. He could clearly see the path of his strike. The attack carried a small feint mixed in, but was aimed at his neck. But suddenly, Encred's thinking was cut short by a precise strike. The bearded one already had the branch pointed at his neck. Everyone watching went completely silent. He said Encred had read his attack well, but was too slow. Encred looked at him and realized he was much faster than he had imagined. He thought he had gotten stronger, but he had not. And then he found himself face to face with that wall again, that wall that had been walking away. And then Encred smiled. Then, without hesitating, asked for a rematch. The bearded one turned and complimented it as an exceptional attitude. Night continued and the moon was in the sky. Most of the soldiers had already fallen asleep. The fairy was the only one still sitting there watching. The scene cut to Encred grinding his teeth, and suddenly he dropped to the ground from a strike by the bearded one. His back hit so hard he let out a groan of pain. The bearded one kept not understanding why he would not give up. He had shown an unreachable gap in skill between them, but Encrid got back up and stood there composed. Jackson was already analyzing the fight and concluded it was impossible to win being that slow, and that he would need to teach him something about his speed. The bearded one then stopped the fight and said that was enough. It was better for them to sleep a little. Encrid kept staring at the ground, sighing, and told the bearded one he was incredible. That fluid sword art of his, he would learn it one day. The bearded one smiled, impressed by him. The day arrived at that same location. Torres and Encrid were sitting together until someone called Torres over. It was his people who had captured the escaped mercenaries. Then Encrid complimented Tag on his work, and Tag started bragging, saying the job was simple. Leona came down the stairs thanking Encrid. Torres immediately cut in, asking who had hired them. The fat one was already sweating in fear. The mercenary hesitated and stuttered, but then finally said it was Aspen. He told Torres it was the Aspen Association market. The fat one kept playing it cool without understanding anything. Leona then concluded that Answer placed responsibility with the frontier guards, and one of them said strangely she seemed satisfied with that result, because it was not that ugly bastard who did it. Leona said it was clearly there, and that the dagger was enough proof. Then Torres just gave in and agreed with her. And then our squadron that had been on the mission headed out escorting a carriage. Jackson was pulling out the scabbard of the shining dagger. Encrid cut him off, saying it was not good to draw that in public. Tag jumped in, telling him not to fall for Leona. She was terrifying, and quickly changed the subject, saying it was obviously not Aspen who hired those mercenaries. The scene cut to Tag and the defeated mercenaries on the ground, and suddenly, a hooded figure arrived calling him over, and told him he was one of Leona's servants. But Tag had no idea what was happening. And then it cut to Tag explaining that the mercenaries already had leads. But Encrid cut in because Leona would be at a disadvantage because of that. Then the two were interrupted by Leona saying it was a relief knowing the fat one was not behind it, and that it would have left a bad record on the former leader's achievements. Then Encrid connected the dots. This was done out of loyalty to the former leader, and right after he asked Leona if everything would be fine, since they would no longer be providing protection. Leona just answered that she was already handling it. The carriage and the squadron arrived at the location. A captain and several soldiers were positioned in front of the gate. His name was Met, commander of the corporate guards, and then everyone knelt in reverence to Leona. Encrid observed her, concluding that everything she had done was part of her plan, and that she truly was a terrifying woman. Leona then told him she would not ask him to accompany her again, then raised her hand toward him, and said she hoped they could help each other in the future as friends. Encrid looked at her hand in silence, and then shook it. In the back, the fat one was already shouting at the commander. Then he cut the fat one off, telling him to stop dishonoring the former leader's name. The fat one looked at him completely scared. The two in the carriage were talking about how it had been a failure. Then the bearded one looked out towards something outside the carriage. He was looking at Encrid. To him, he seemed like someone quite different. The scene returned to the surroundings of the fortress. Encrid was already bothering the shaggy one, asking him to train with him. Encrid asked him again, saying he needed him. The shaggy one stood up completely excited, asking if he really needed him. Then it cut to the two already starting the fight. Encrid already had that analytical look on the situation. He could see the direction of Rem's strikes, and then he loaded up to execute the explosive movement, and suddenly exploded with a frontal attack grazing right past the shaggy one's neck. Encrid was startled by what had just happened. Rem's neck was bleeding from the graze. The shaggy one touched his neck and looked without understanding, and it was in that moment that Encrid realized he was faster than him. The shaggy one said he was genuinely surprised, and said that from now on he would also be faster. Encrid looked at him with the face of someone who had no idea what that meant. Then suddenly the shaggy one drove an attack that Encrid barely blocked with his sword against his shoulder. Encrid looked at his shoulder trembling from the impact, but the shaggy one did not hesitate and was already attacking again. And Encrid barely managed to dodge without having his head cut off. Then he wondered if that axe of his had always been that fast, but the shaggy one was already loading up another attack. And then the two were face to face, about to hit each other. Then the scene cut to Encrid training alone with his sword, until suddenly he noticed something, and Jackson arrived trying to attack with his dagger, and said his ears and eyes were very sharp. And then from behind said that was all he had come to say for now. And then Encrid let out a sigh without understanding anything. But suddenly Jackson attacked Encrid's neck. Encrid started choking without being able to breathe, and dropped to his knees while Jackson stayed right behind him. The scene cut to Encrid listening to Jackson. All of that was just his explanation. He continued explaining and said that this ability allowed one to detect something that surpassed the five senses, and told him he would teach this, called killing intent. Then Encred straightened up, saying they would start over. Another day arrived, and the sky was blue as always. Jackson was already explaining that he should not rely solely on his perception. He explained that the way predators hunt their prey was part of their instincts, and that if Encred fought repeatedly with all his senses at maximum, he would also start to detect malicious intent. Jackson walked past Encred, saying he would not get it on the first try, but that if he kept training, his sixth sense would certainly awaken. Night arrived at the camp barracks. Encred looked at the shaggy one who was saying something. He said Encred seemed different. The ponytail cut in, saying it was because he was smiling more than before. Tag jumped in, saying it was because he was crazier than usual. Then the whole squadron agreed, saying that was exactly it. Encred sighed, saying he was the only normal one among all those lunatics. After that, the whole barracks went quiet, with just a single lantern lighting the place. The shaggy one was talking to the puma, asking if she was going to sleep with the chief again. And then it cut to her noticing that Encred had worn his body out again, and she growled, confirming he wore himself out almost every day. Encred would certainly be in worse shape if not for her magic. Then suddenly she looked at a piece of clothing on top of a chair. She placed a paw on top of the clothing, and then cast a magic on it. The scene cut to a new day with Encred stretching, and jumped to him training with Ragnar at night, and then with the shaggy one and the ponytail helping with exercises, and then to another night of him alone meditating. Until the next day he noticed something. Encred kept training with Jackson on killing intent. Inside the cabin he pointed to where there was danger. Outside in the camp he kept pointing as well. The whole squadron was already quiet without understanding why he spent days talking and pointing. And then the shaggy one told him to forget he ever said he seemed different. He actually confirmed that Encred had not changed even a little. The ponytail said he had improved a lot in just one day, and Ragnar agreed with him. Jackson and the shaggy one thought of a way to improve his training since this one was not working. The shaggy one said that maybe if he were called out to hunt beasts or something like that, it would be a good idea. The scene cut to Encred standing in front of several mission papers. He remembered the squadron talking to him and realized that even he knew he was not improving at all. Suddenly, someone offered one of the missions to him. Encred grabbed the paper and looked at it, trying to understand. The mission was to investigate the basement of a shoemaker. He looked at the soldier who had offered it and asked why investigating a basement needed a shoemaker. He explained that a reconnaissance team would not be enough, and that there was some kind of undead in the basement. Encred looked at him and asked, "Undead?" He looked at the mission and found it all a bit strange, but thought it would serve as a good experience. The soldier begged him to do it since nobody wanted to accept it. Encred kept listening to him, and then told him sorry, but he would not accept. But then the scene cut to Encred accepting the mission and already at the house. The girl then guided Encred to the basement. An old man was already waiting for someone to show up and call him. He said he had been digging up the floor and found this hole. Encred was impressed. Maybe it was a tunnel in the middle of the city, so he grabbed a torch and descended into that hole, which seemed to have been made by someone. The hole was very large and there could genuinely be monsters in there. Suddenly Encred stopped, noticing something. The two came face to face with 6 paths in that cave, without knowing where any of them led. Then he realized this had been made to be a labyrinth. The old man would not stop saying there might be an undead in there. Encred just told him to be careful, and then he decided to keep going ahead. Suddenly the two stopped and a blue light began to glow. A massive beam of light started closing in on Encred, and everything began to heat up. The beam was strong enough to melt Encred where he stood. The light kept expanding to the point where nothing could be seen, and then it cut to our hero waking up startled. He realized he had been burned instantly with no chance at all. The shaggy one was saying something to Encred, but he ignored it and kept moving toward the mission. An image of a mysterious mage came to his mind, and there was Encred thinking about what kind of skill he could train to overcome this. Suddenly, that same soldier offered the mission to him again. He looked at the mission, thinking about what to do. Then he had the idea of calling the fairy to hear his request, until he realized that old man might be entering the hole at that very moment. Encred arrived at the location and kicked the door open. He came in asking where the girl's father was. She startled and answered he had gone to the basement. Encred did not hesitate and jumped into the hole. He came sliding down through the gap and tried to run as fast as possible to save him, until he saw the old man entering one of the holes. He screamed, running toward him, ordering him to stop. The old man looked at him completely confused. He stayed standing right there at that entrance, and suddenly that same beam of light appeared. Encred screamed, asking him to run, but it was too late. The magic had already melted them both. And then the scene cut to Encred sitting in a dark place. That creature in the boat was behind him holding the lantern. It told him he must have felt the pain of being melted and turned to ash, and that even so he intended to keep going and head back toward those flames. Encred confirmed he really had felt the pain. But then he slowly got up while the creature watched and said it would hurt him far more to let an innocent man die Then the scene cut to Encred getting up from his bed. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his coat and headed out of the barracks. He just told the Shaggy One he was going to save the irritating old shoemaker. The Shaggy One understood nothing and asked if there was some kind of boot monster or something like that. And then it cut to Encred descending into the hole and telling the old man not to follow him. He would go alone. On the way, he tried to think about how he was going to handle this. This was a mysterious trap he had absolutely no information about. He knew that if he entered any of those holes, he was destined to die. So he decided to find out as much information as possible, and then moved forward into one of the holes, betting that maybe this one was clean. He analyzed the entrance and thought whether there was a clue or something like that. He paused, wondering how many times he had already died here, and then started walking, counting the times he had died. He took the first step, thinking about when he felt a blade pierce his throat. While taking the second step, something came back to him, there in the darkness. That bastard who had defeated him at the very beginning of everything. He was advancing with killing intent. Then the scene cut to Jackson explaining that killing intent was something that wanted nothing but his death. And then it returned to our hero walking in the darkness, when suddenly an axe came flying in his direction. But then it cut to Encred impressed. He stopped in the middle of that cave, and then started walking, realizing he had felt it. He had felt that something was wrong, when suddenly Encred was cut in half. The cut had been too fast for him to perceive, but there he stood laughing, because he had finally felt the killing intent. The scene returned to another day at that same house. Encred was already going down the stairs, but there was nobody there. He realized that today's wall was detecting killing intent in the traps. So inside he decided he was not just going to enter, he was going to analyze. And then he started with the first step. He looked at the bottom of that cave. Encred had not gone down that path yet. He wondered if that was the right path since he had not felt anything. Then he took his second step. He kept going forward, and then turned back, saying it was from here that the blades had come. The path was quite dark and narrow. Encred decided to keep walking, until suddenly the image of the axe came to his mind. He extended the torch to see what was at the bottom. He had not been able to sense anything, but he remembered what was going to happen. Suddenly, the old man appeared there, asking why he kept going back and forth, but right after Encred convinced him to leave and kept analyzing on his own. Night arrived at the location. The old man wondered why he was still there, having not eaten anything. Encred said he would come back tomorrow, and the old man begged him to please take care of it. Then right after said that if he saw his wife wearing that exact same wedding ring, to please let him know. Encred looked at him and said he could count on it. Back at the camp, everything was quiet. Encred was with his puma meditating, until suddenly he pointed to a spot and said, "There." Jackson went quiet and the Shaggy One said he was going crazy, and then told him to give it up and sleep. So he lay down and realized that this time he had not died and would move on to the next day, and that there was only one way left to figure this out. And suddenly, the scene shifted to a puddle of water in that dark place where the creature dwelled. The day arrived at the camp. Encred was already getting ready to head out while the Shaggy One was saying something. The scene cut to Encred in the middle of the cave, realizing he had looped back to the previous day. And once again, he arrived back at the camp, alive and safe. Morning arrived at the camp. Encred had stayed there watching through the whole night, until a heavy sleep hit and he closed his eyes. Then it cut to him lying in bed. He got up realizing he had blinked and appeared in the bed. The Shaggy One got up and said that same line as always. Then Encred realized he could not let the day pass without defeating the wall, or everything would repeat. And then it cut to Encred walking toward that cave. He decided to take the first step, then slowly lowered his foot trying to feel. He lowered it a little more trying to analyze, then hesitated, sensing imminent death, and when he stepped right after, he dropped the torch to the ground. The days kept passing and he kept walking and turning back in the cave. He walked 60 days. Suddenly hands emerged from the ground. Encred grabbed without expressing anything, and right after was swallowed by those hands. But all of that was his perception. He stopped and smiled, realizing he had managed it. The scene cut to an image of Jackson. Then Encred dodged. The two stood still staring at each other. Jackson, impressed, wondered how he had managed it in such a short time. And then it cut to day 72. He was already heading out while the Shaggy One repeated the same line as always. The puma looked at him, noticing something. The scene returned to that cave. He looked at those 6 paths, confirming all of them had traps. And then he came face to face with every hole and every trap. But there was one, as long as he did not step wrong. And then that flash of light came to his mind. He sighed, analyzing the situation, then decided to move forward. When he was almost finishing the second step, the beam of light came to his mind, so he froze his foot and did not step. He He stayed there staring into the darkness, then decided to extend his step a little further forward, and right after stepped with confidence. He looked around and nothing happened. He stood there with a serious expression, and then took a step. The darkness of the cave stared back at him. He kept going forward. It was as if he could see the correct steps. Encred had awakened his sixth sense, and then he closed his eyes and kept walking forward until he reached a location brighter than usual, and then decided to open his eyes and found himself in a place full of torches and a mine. He looked up, realizing he had overcome a wall, when suddenly a creature advanced toward him. All we could see was a quick cut, and right after Encred forming aura having just cut that zombie down, and then he laughed with confidence, and right in front of him several zombies started running in his direction. The undead were screaming loudly. Then Encred opened his stance and started delivering strikes in the middle of that chaos. He pivoted on his feet and used the momentum from his hips and cut through the zombies right in front of him, and then loaded up for another strike and hit 2 more zombies. He kept advancing and leapt toward another one, cut it, and right after drove another strike into the next, then finished 2 more that were attacking him. He dropped to his knees out of breath. He thought, not bad at all. Then the image of the squadron appeared in his mind. Encred wished they could have seen it, but suddenly a strange creature screamed in his direction. He wondered if it was a demon wolf, then looked forward. That was no demon wolf. Suddenly the scene cut to the puma leaping from rooftop to rooftop. She kept running toward Encred, having noticed something was off about him. She remembered he had gone armed just to visit a shoemaker, and she kept running at full speed since it would be bad if he died. Until she arrived at the location and noticed something. The house smelled like a spell. The scene cut to Encred driving a strike at the creature. That had been the last one he defeated. Then he realized right ahead he could hear breathing. He started walking toward it, and right after was startled by what he saw. It was a location with several undead. Then he noticed a hanging hand. There were several zombies hanging there. He looked up and saw a creature begging. She was begging for him to kill her. In her hand, she had the old man's ring. Encred remembered him explaining that his wife wore it too. And then, our hero froze. Suddenly, someone in the back started saying something, and then a hooded figure appeared, mocking Encred. Encred asked if he was the one who had made all those bodies, and then the hooded one confirmed that those scraps of garbage were failures. He pointed, calling that creature Bamillo, and said that was art. Then looked at Encred, saying he would do something beautiful with him too. Encred went quiet without saying anything. All he could imagine was running from that mage and hoping for luck. But then he reconsidered and looked at him with pure hatred. And suddenly he threw a dagger in his direction. The dagger bounced off the shield he had created, and without giving time to react, he appeared right in front of Encred. Encred hit the barrier and was immediately thrown back. But then he managed to stabilize himself. In the back, the puma was watching everything. Just as she had expected, he was facing a mage, and then she released energy between her claws. The mage slightly extended his hand toward Encred and suddenly released an invisible ball of air that came straight for his face and tore half his cloak, but Encred dodged it with confidence. The mage kept pointing at him without understanding. How had he dodged that? Then Encred stared him down. He could see the trajectory of every one of his strikes. Not long ago, he had asked the squadron for tips about facing a mage. Then it cut to the shaggy one saying to throw an arrow at him. Another strike hit Encred's cloak. It cut to Jackson explaining to kill him when he was not looking, and then to the ponytail saying to calmly get close to him. Encred was advancing in his direction, and then it shifted to Ragnar explaining that everything that breathes can be cut. The scene returned to the hooded one, scared to death, and Encred was loading up a vertical attack, and then he brought the sword down with everything driving the strike. The mage laughed, telling him to come on, but suddenly a flash of light appeared beneath Encred. The puma appeared looking furiously at the mage. Something was coming toward Encred's chest, but then Encred held his attack while the mage defended, and suddenly the mage's barrier broke, and he stood there without a reaction. And then Encred brought his sword down with everything, and the strike connected from his shoulder to his chest. Encred dropped to the ground after delivering that brutal strike and stared at him with hatred. Then he looked at his sword and saw that only the sword had been damaged. That impact had been strong enough to tear him in half. He looked and thought, maybe it was that armor. Then he turned around and saw that creature trapped in a cage. It seemed that weak breathing of hers had stopped. Encred looked at that creature one last time, looked down, and went quiet, then walked away without feeling content. The mage was still on the ground, defeated, until the puma appeared walking toward him. Then she went to the back of his cage and looked at some of his creations, then extended her paw and decided to take something for herself. The scene cut to another location at the camp. Encred was explaining to the fairy everything that had happened in the mission. She realized there would be chaos if this news spread. Encrid told her it was better to keep it under wraps, and said that people's lives mattered more than merit. Then it cut to some workers covering the hole. Encrid and the fairy were outside while other workers were running toward the place. The gentleman arrived beside Encrid, impressed that they were not people but monsters, and right after he presented a gift to Encrid saying he deserved it. It was a pair of shoes. He said his looked worn out, and said that was one less thing to worry about, and that he only hoped his wife came back safe. Encrid looked at those words from the old man. He kept talking and begging for him to please find her. Encrid could not get out a single word, and then he laughed and said to leave it with him. The scene cut to a nearby mountain where he was watching the sunset. He wondered if he had made the right choice in giving the man hope. He looked at his sword and asked himself, if he became a knight, could he prevent this kind of thing? And then he planted it in the ground and said he was not sure, then left his sword behind and walked forward. Then it cut to another day with creatures charging toward something. Then we saw our squadron and the shaggy one looking bored. They were taking down some creatures that were there. They had accepted a mission to hunt a monster. One of the soldiers attacked one of the creatures with a spear. The other advanced to defend it, and was taken down right after. Encrid thought this was not going to make him any stronger, while the shaggy one was dying of laughter. Then the shaggy one looked at Encrid and noticed he was not interested, and then told him to let those things be more fun for our hero. And right after took off his coat and ran toward the creatures with his axe, and drove an insane spinning strike. One of the guards called Encrid's attention, telling him to give orders to that lunatic, but he ignored it and went along with the shaggy one. Encrid loaded up his strike, and then drove it into the two creatures. The shaggy one then told the soldiers not to get the wrong idea. All of this was Encrid's idea. Encrid said right, like the craziest one in the squadron would say that, and then he kept attacking the creatures. The two were massacring them on their own. The soldiers stood there speechless, calling them lunatics. Encrid threw his sword back to clean it, and then the two had finished the job on their own. The shaggy one told him that Encrid still did not look satisfied. A soldier said that if he wanted more excitement, maybe he should go to the armored units. And then the scene cut to creatures screaming. The soldiers were in position asking for the archers to attack, but one of them noticed something, frightened. Suddenly, a flying creature appeared right in front of him, and it was not just one. There were several attacking the whole group. Several soldiers were being thrown into the air. The height was enough to do serious damage. Encrid and Rem were running, and Rem looked over cracking a joke. Looks like it hurt. Our hero looked up and concluded those creatures were harpies. He had faced them before. They had been completely wiped out by them. Everyone who had been defeated back then were good people. Then Encrid pushed forward and drew his sword, and advanced toward a harpy, saying that nobody else would die today. Encrid and Rem were positioned for combat. The harpy screamed loud enough. It was enough to disorient the soldiers. Encrid did not care and kept going anyway. The harpy was right in front of him, ready to attack. Then he stared it down with confidence and drove a strike directly into its left wing. The strike was so strong it tore the wing clean off. The momentum was so great that Encrid was already at its back. The shaggy one said he was doing great, and that maybe a bet would be fun. And right after, threw himself to the ground, saying to bet on who kills more. Encrid had his back turned while the harpy was closing in. The claw was approaching his head. Then he answered Rem, saying they were not there to have fun, and dodged sideways from the harpy's strike, and finished it with a precise strike. The soldiers stood there with their mouths open, saying Encrid was impressive. Rem was going absolutely wild, taking down harpies. He hit the foot of one of them, and dragged it to the ground with his axe. Encrid took the opening and finished it. The scene cut to Torres saying Encrid had gotten better. One of the soldiers asked whether it was right for them to just watch, since they had come to help. Torres answered they were not needed there. The harpies came in low in the sky. One of them hit Encrid's fist, making him drop his sword. It flew far away, and Encrid drifted even further. The harpies turned in the opposite direction and attacked him, but one of them was hit directly in the forehead by a dagger. Encrid had been ready for that. The second one came in with another low pass, directly toward Encrid and his sword. The claw was close to his face. Our hero managed to grab the sword. He used the momentum and brought the sword up with everything cutting through the harpy. The others in the sky were agitated and fleeing. The soldiers were impressed by the way Encrid and Rem had scared the monsters off, and in front of the defeated harpies, Encrid stood there. He remembered what had happened before. One of the soldiers had come to him saying it was because he was weak and an idiot, and that those poor bastards had died saving him. Encrid stayed quiet after remembering that, and said that from now on, it would be him saving the others. The scene returned to Torres's soldiers, saying things would get rough if they came back empty-handed. The other soldiers thanked them and warned that support had already been called to clean up the location. Encrid said it was still too early to go back. Torres's group looked completely unimpressed, not believing what he had said. Later at the camp, our hero was training walking squats. Some soldiers passed by, calling him a madman for pushing so hard. The next day, he appeared asking for 2 missions, and that night he was training sword strikes. One of the soldiers at the location was impressed because he trained every single day and wondered if it was fun to live that way, and maybe he should try it too. And there he was, training at night alone with a wooden dummy. The day arrived at the camp, and then another night came, and now there were 2 soldiers training, and so another day passed. And this time, there were several soldiers training that night, and so another day passed and the fairy was watching the soldiers. All those men looked very different. The soldier behind her said that following Encrid's style had become a trend. Then the fairy sighed and said she could no longer ignore it. The scene cut to her saying she had had a long meeting about him, and started talking about Squadron 444, saying he would be promoted to an independent platoon, and that from now on, Encrid would be the leader of the independent squadron. He said he only had 5 men under his command, and that was not a platoon. And then he realized it was going to be a headache having all those lunatics in the squadron. The fairy cut in saying he would have more time to train that way. Encrid looked at her, and then circled back saying he would do his best in that position. She said it was a shame to let him go like that and called him to a duel, and right after extended her hand and said this would be for his soul. He remembered the last time he had lost to her, and also having trained himself to death with Auden, so he decided to drop his sword to the ground, and raised his guard to see how much he had progressed. The 2 stood face to face. He analyzed the situation carefully and remembered what Auden had said. Auden explained that in hand-to-hand combat, all that mattered was speed, and right after the fairy exploded toward him, Encrid managed to defend with his right arm and counterattacked with his elbow, but she defended. And then he decided to use her weight against her by throwing himself in her direction. That was enough to make her lose her balance. Encrid dropped with his elbow, immobilizing her, and said, "Looks like I won." He looked at her while she agreed, and said that humans had an aggressive way of proposing to a woman. Encrid went quiet hearing the same story again. Suddenly, the fairy hit his leg against Encrid's thigh, and rotated her hip, throwing Encrid to the ground and reversing the position. Then she said he had identified her weakness and broken her stance with it, and complimented him saying, "Very good, my fiancé, keep improving." Encrid said he was not her fiancé and asked her to get off. The 2 got up, Encrid awkward and the fairy dusting herself off. While Encrid had his back turned, she apologized and explained it was because she had not protected him. Encrid asked what she was talking about, but while things were heating up, the battlefield had come back to life. It was a full war movement. Everyone on standby. A soldier was climbing the stairs. He had his back turned and wore a red cloak, and arrived saying a new battalion commander had been named, called Marcus. Tag behind Encrid called Marcus a war monk. He was standing there in front of everyone composed. In his own mind, he confirmed that Aspen was no easy opponent, and then he looked at the crowd of soldiers, directly at Encrid, saying he had a pattern in common, then returned to him asking Encrid to prove his worth to him. The afternoon arrived under an orange sky. The squadron was talking about the escort mission near the river. Tag said that maybe that was the location, but was interrupted by someone completing, "It was the Aspen Fortress City." It was the new squad member called Free. Then the 2 reached the conclusion that this was a reconnaissance mission. The shaggy one was already telling him not to go, but Encrid said he could not refuse the commander's order. The scene cut to someone saying all members of the platoon except the leader were ordered under the new leader's command. Then the scene pulled back, and we could see Angel saying everyone obeyed him. He noticed something in front of him. Suddenly Rem was licking the tip of his axe, and licked it all the way to the end, and asked why they had an insect in their unit. Angel was trembling while the ponytail calmly said he was shaking too much. Ragnar stopped what he was doing, and asked if he was the squadron leader. Angel said if he had a problem he could come at him. The shaggy one called him brave and was already getting ready. The ponytail affectionately cracked his knuckles. Jackson was in the back staring straight into Angel's soul. Encrid cut in telling everyone to take it easy and focus on training. Thor came to Encrid begging them to stop, but Encrid said they seemed to be getting along fine, then asked if that was really a friendly fight and not an execution. Angel was provoking them while Thor was dragging him away. Then Free was saying the location was quite dangerous and that maybe he could explain. Encrid did not think twice and asked him to explain. Night arrived at the camp. The sky was calm with no stars. Encrid was walking alone outside the fortress. He walked with confidence without showing anything, and right in front of him was Torres asking if he was also going on that mission, and said they always ended up running into each other. Maybe it was fate. Then said he had heard he got promoted and that they were now the same rank. Torres stopped and asked how old he was. Encrid answered 30. He stood there without a reaction, that face, and said he was older than him. Encrid stayed quiet without saying anything. Torres was indignant, saying he was the only one who aged in this place. Then the two kept walking forward, talking about how they would proceed with the mission. When they arrived at the location, there was no boatman who could take them across. So Torres sat down and said they would have to rest while they waited. Encrid agreed and said that was fine, and drew his sword. Torres asked if he had not heard him right. Encrid said this was his way of resting. Torres looked at the sword and realized he was genuinely persistent. He watched Encrid training hard even when he did not need to. Torres saw that he looked young and was good-looking. Then he exploded, saying that was just unfair. Encrid asked if that was maybe killing intent, but it was not. It was just Torres disappointed with life, and then he sighed, and then he brought up that last stick fight between them. Encrid said that was old news. Torres drew his sword and said Encrid was not the only one getting stronger here. Encrid looked at him and said he was glad to hear that. Torres did not hesitate and attacked Encrid. The swords clashed and Encrid managed to defend. Then our hero used the momentum and pulled Torres' sword out of the way, and right after they attacked each other again. Torres felt the impact. He realized Encrid had gotten stronger. Our hero was pressing against Torres' sword, and then Torres ground his teeth, and right after exploded through Encrid's guard, and loaded up to throw a punch at him. The punch came directly at his face. He did not expect that. But as the fist came in, Encrid noticed a hidden blade, and then he dodged. There really was a hidden blade in his fist. It had grazed right past his face. With that, Encrid was impressed and asked where that blade came from. He answered that it was his secret. Torres asked if he was going to say that was unfair or something like that, but Encrid actually smiled and said he thought it was incredibly cool and asked him to teach him. The ferryman had already arrived at the location and was watching the two of them talking alone. Torres was trying to explain to him how it worked, and then the ferryman asked if they were not going to cross the river. The three of them continued on the boat while Encrid was still trying to practice. The boat arrived at the location. The two got off the boat walking forward, and Encrid asked where the platoon was. Torres said that before anything else, it was better for them to take a bath. There was no reason to show up sweaty. Then Encrid sniffed his own clothes, and right after they got ready to take a bath, Encrid was already lowering himself in with a clenched fist. Torres could not believe what he was seeing. He had even lost the will to compete. He just wanted to take a nice bath. A woman arrived asking what they were doing, wasting time taking a bath. Encrid looked and wondered how long she had been there. Then she kept going, saying they needed to approach the crossed guard today. Torres asked how they would get past with them watching. She answered there was nothing to watch, and without hesitating, Encrid stood up from the water. The woman was impressed by what she saw, and then said it seemed Encrid had something worth looking at, and right after told Torres she was only looking at his abdomen. She introduced herself to Encrid as Finn, leader of the reconnaissance platoon. Encrid shook her hand without saying anything. Torres was in the back wondering if he looked that bad. Sometime later, they moved forward along the path. She said their spy had something important to pass on, but she had not shown up at the meeting point. She had disappeared. And then she said they would infiltrate the crossed guard to rescue her, and explained that the crossed guard was close to the land of monsters and beasts, and that there were 3 different infiltration routes. The first was a tunnel that outlaws used to enter the city. The second was scaling the walls at night, exhausting but the safest option. And the last would be them disguising themselves as merchants to get inside. And she explained that only the 3 of them would be the ones entering the guard. The platoon would continue forward. Encrid looked at her and stayed quiet. And in his head, he said she explained it as if it were simple. Torres suggested they take Route A since she knew the region. And right after she ordered, they would leave tomorrow and enter through the tunnel. A red moon shone in the sky that night. Encrid was training the rotating punch with the hidden blade, throwing a rock directly from the fist. He missed, and Torres asked how he could even wield a sword if he was that bad at this, and said eventually he would get it, while Finn told them she had been trying to figure out where they were since they had not gone to dinner, and then asked if that was all they were doing. Encrid said they were training. She told him to eat first and said there was a member of their group who wanted to be a cook and was very good. The two enjoyed the food, saying it was genuinely good. Finn said not to train near there, under that brown rock there was. Before she finished, Encrid answered that there was a viper, and she asked how he knew. Encrid answered that there was a hunter in the platoon, and he had learned from him, while Finn listened to everything, and suddenly said, "I like you after all," and asked if he did not want to train a more adult kind of training with her. Encrid went quiet without saying a single word. He had no idea what she meant, and Torres told him she was hitting on him. Torres, constrained, begged them not to talk about that in front of him. Right after Encrid declined, she asked if he was committed. Encrid just listened while she said she had heard he was with that fairy and that it was a shame. Our hero could not believe it. Finn was already leaving, asking him to talk to her the same way he talked to Torres. Torres was left sad. She had ignored him right to the end. The red moon was almost covering the other moon. Encrid was lying down with his eyes closed. His vision began to blur, until suddenly the environment shifted and a drop fell into water, and the creature was there holding a lantern as always. Then Encrid woke up, opening his eyes. It had been a while since he had seen that, probably meaning something to him. And then the image of the fairy apologizing came to his mind. Right after he laughed, seeing that this mission would be an enormous obstacle. The three had arrived at the hole. Torres asked why they were going in the morning when the usual was to invade at night. She answered that even if guards ignore movement at night, it was easier to detect in an empty place. Encrid added that they would never expect a morning approach. Torres just stared while Finn agreed, saying good-looking guys were smarter. And then she went in first. Encrid watched her. He could tell she was a scout. Scouts could move in silence and for that reason used light weapons. He watched her steps and noticed she barely made any sound when walking, and right after wondered if he could do the same, when suddenly several soldiers appeared in the darkness. The three were caught off guard. Finn shouted that it was a trap and ordered them to run. The guard cut in, saying they would not run. They were surrounded, and ordered them to kill all three. Finn shouted for them to attack. The crossbowmen fired the arrows. Encrid got ready first, then cut through the arrows. Finn blocked with her own arm, pushed forward and finished one of the crossbowmen. Torres finished another one in front of him. Encrid looked at the two and realized they were not used to this kind of combat. A crossbowman was behind Finn about to fire. Torres was occupied defending a soldier while another was at his back with a spear, until suddenly Torres was pierced from behind and Finn took an arrow to the head. Our hero was cornered, but he was not going to go down that easily, so he threw his daggers, which took down 2 crossbowmen and finished a soldier in the back. He kept attacking, had already taken 4 soldiers with him. The leader shouted, ordering them to surround him. When suddenly Encrid took a blow to the chest, he dropped surrounded by lancers. Several spears pierced him. He stared at everyone with pure hatred, when suddenly his vision blurred and he was almost hit in the head. Another day arrived after his defeat. Encrid was sitting thinking. There was no way that troop had appeared from nowhere. He realized the enemy had anticipated their infiltration plan. Finn and Torres asked why he was like that. He said something was off, and then recommended they try going over the walls. Torres told Finn that the last time Encrid had done something like this, he had managed to destroy that spellcaster in the war. Finn agreed with what was said, and so they would follow the walls. And right after, said they would go at night. So what were they going to do until then? Encrid asked if they wanted to spar with him. Finn got all shy, calling him a tease. Encrid cut in, saying it was just a duel. Finn said that was a shame, and then said they could duel, but no swords hand to hand. And right after, said she was confident about that one. The two positioned themselves in the middle of the field. Encrid asked if Finn was ready. Without hesitating, she told him to bring it. Encrid drove a downward punch and extended a jab that passed right beside Finn's neck, which right after landed a knee strike into Encrid's gut. Finn returned to her position while Encrid was off balance. She took the opening and drove a kick at his head. The kick was about to hit him, but then he thought of using the same strategy, and then he dropped his body weight dodging the kick and threw Finn flat on her back. She used Encrid's extended hand and grabbed it, then locked his body in to set up a triangle choke. The move had locked in perfectly. She only needed to extend her arm and squeeze. Encrid felt pressure on his breathing. Just as things were about to get complicated, Torres stepped in and said it was over. Encrid stayed on the ground, sighing, small but genuinely strong. She turned on her back and told Encrid he had won. He laughed and realized she was an excellent training partner and asked for a rematch. And then she laughed a little shyly. One of the soldiers said he thought it was just going to be a normal duel. Torres agreed, asking if they had only just noticed now. The sun was already going down behind the mountain. Encrid was already ready and asked what was wrong with it. Finn said he had brought too many weapons and that it would wear him out on the way. Torres asked about his too. She looked at him in silence, then turned and said he could analyze that himself. The scene cut to Torres face down, looking miserable, while the soldiers were dying of laughter. Encrid said he could handle it even with that weight. She called him naive, and said it was not just that wall they needed to climb. There were still all those mountains along the way. The two looked at how high they would have to go, and then Encrid laughed. Nothing had ever been this easy for him. He was already used to it. The scene cut to several magic stones in a cave, and then to Tag with his mouth open, not believing what he was seeing. Encrid, without hesitating, said he was going to buy a new sword with that money, explained that the edge of a sword's blade was like the thread of life to him, and it was something he would never leave behind. Finn said that was exactly why he should not have brought everything. Carrying it all would drain all his energy. Encrid stopped in the middle of the climb and sighed. It really was quite heavy, but he did not give up and decided to keep going. He said that after all, that was what muscles were for. He kept climbing, and that red moon kept reflecting in the sky, and finally, he reached the top, and said nothing could stop him now. Then, Encrid leapt and crouched down. Right after, stood up and looked at the sky-forming aura. Finn said he just created problems for himself. Torres was already used to it. Then he thought that maybe Encrid had done it on purpose to train, but he could not believe it. That would be insane. Some wolves were howling at the red moon. You could see them running down below. It was rare to see them running as a pack like that. Finn told them to stay alert and not let their guard down. They were already getting close to the walls. Finally, they had arrived, but there was nowhere to hide. There was a guard making rounds with a torch. Finn said that on nights with 2 moons, everything became brighter, and the guards let their guard down. The guard was already passing through the middle of the wall block, and then the 3 of them used the opening and ran toward it. The wall still looked quite far. Encrid watched that guard on the wall, and the soldier seemed like he had seen something moving, but he decided to take a look down below and found nothing. The 3 were sweating cold. Then Finn said it was easy and sighed. Encrid had thought they had been caught, but maybe it was just his imagination. Finn cleaned her hands and said behind that wall there was a slum, and that if they managed to hide there, they would not be found. Then she said that before going, Encrid needed to leave his sword here, but he said there was no problem. He would train with that weight too. Torres gave his verdict. He was genuinely out of his mind. Then everyone started scaling the wall. Encrid genuinely believed this was the safest option. He saw Finn up above and started wondering if there could be a trap here too. Torres was right behind her, already climbing the wall. Suddenly a step right in front of them, and that person said they must have worked very hard to get there, and that now it was time for them to rest. Suddenly she cast magic, pulling thorns from the ground. Finn screamed for everyone to get down. The thorns passed right above all 3 of them. The 2 were retreating while Finn threw her small axe. And then the witch sent the thorns through the middle of the axe, and split it clean in half just like that. Encrid had not expected that. He confirmed it was a good trap. But then he drew his sword and decided to advance toward her. But some thorns came out of the wall, exactly at Encrid's feet, and then he hesitated. He opened his stance with confidence. He had already defeated a spellcaster before, and then he attacked, but several thorns appeared. The sword was about to reach her neck. Then the image of Jackson came to his mind, saying the opponent could sometimes fool your senses. Encrid had already been caught by a bunch of thorns and dropped his sword. The situation was getting quite bad. He was being pushed back. Meanwhile, the other 2 were descending the wall. Finn looked at him, asking what he was doing, and called him an idiot. And then the thorns started coming down the wall and hit Finn and Torres directly. Meanwhile, Encrid was trying to break through the branches. He could no longer move. They were too resistant. The witch then looked at him and congratulated him on the courage to not have run away too. Encrid was surrounded by the branches, already grinding his teeth in hatred. And then she introduced herself as Letitia of the Thorned Rose. And then she closed her fist. Encrid took one last look at her before being crushed. Then a massive blue explosion happened in the middle of the vines, and the scene cut to Encrid sitting in that dark environment. He realized he had been very naive, thinking he had gotten stronger. And then the creature appeared behind him, asking if he knew what level he was now. And then it said that before this great wall of life, he was still nothing but an ant. The creature kept looking at Encrid while he answered, "Thank you," and said that thanks to it he was able to think clearly, and this was exactly the wall he needed. Then it laughed, saying it wanted to see how far he would manage to climb this time. And then we returned to Encrid, saying he wanted to enter disguised as a merchant. Finn said that was fine, and they only needed to blend in among the merchants who entered there regularly. Torres then asked if they were going to have to wait a whole day. Finn answered exactly that. So how about they throw a little party? Then she ordered them to organize everything while Encrid stood in the back, not understanding anything. It was a full banquet, drinks, and everything. Encrid genuinely could not believe they planned to drink near the enemy, and right after asked if it was not dangerous to lower their guard like that, but Finn answered that being too tense was not good either, and said that when you got too tense your body hardened and you lost focus, and offered him a drink, saying his shoulders were rock hard. Encrid realized she had a point. His focus was not in good shape, and then he started walking toward a spot and slowly began to draw his sword, and then extended it and said it was time to stop and clear his mind, and gave meaning to that day. Finn could not believe it. She had told him to rest. Torres answered that was the only way he rested, and then she just huffed. And right after we saw Encrid training, and then Finn said it was no problem. After all, his body was very nice to look at. The 2 moons were at the top of the sky. The group was sitting around a fire. Encrid had noticed something rare, and it was enough to make his day better. He looked forward. At this hour, they would have already been caught at the wall. And then, in the middle of the moonlight, there were blurred silhouettes of what appeared to be wolves. The wind beat hard across the field. The steps of some animal were approaching the location. Suddenly, a wolf howled, gleaming under that red moon. They were startled by the wolf. Torres went serious, getting ready. Encrid also wasted no time and shut down. Everyone was there waiting for something to happen. And suddenly, the pack of wolves they had seen before up above came running toward them. Finn shouted, ordering them to run. The wolves stopped for a moment. They were right in front of our reconnaissance group. Torres said fighting one of those required about 10 soldiers, and the worst part, they were 3 and there were 20 of those humanoid wolves. And then he laughed, saying they were done for. Finn was trying to understand where they had come from. There had been no sign of them at all. Our hero then considered that maybe it was that witch's doing. The wolves were screaming, hungry and bloodthirsty. Then Encred got ready with that analytical look. He could see exactly where the wolf was going to attack. Suddenly a strike came from his right. Then he managed to dodge perfectly. The wolves were attacking from every possible direction. He could not counter any of them. Suddenly, a wolf charged in his direction. Encred blocked with his sword and the wolf bit it. Then he analyzed. If the problem was his focus, then he needed to expand it. While Encred was immobilized, the rest of the group was being massacred by the wolves. One of the soldiers had taken a bite to the neck. Torres was already being devoured, and Finn had been finished with a bite to the neck too. Encred watched, knowing everything would repeat, but watching deaths that brutal still hurt him. The wolf kept pressing him and his sword, but he grew furious and cut it clean with a single strike, and then raised his sword for a downward thrust, and finished the wolf at his back. Suddenly a wolf advanced with a closed fist and hit Encred's gut dead on. It was hard enough to make him spit blood and lose his breath. That wolf was the most intelligent, the leader of the pack, and right after it advanced and bit our hero's arm, it pulled Encred with everything it had in its jaws and launched him far away. Encred looked at the direction he was falling. It was right in the middle of the gathered pack. He looked one last time at the group. Everyone was defeated on the ground. The scene returned to that dark environment. The creature asked him if this was fun. Then Encred answered, yes, this was getting to him. Torres and Finn looked at him confused. Encred stayed quiet while the two asked if he was sick or something. And right after he answered no and that everything was fine, and then he got up, decided that he did not want to go through this anymore. The scene of all 3 paths crossed his mind. Encred had decided this time they would go with option 1. While walking, he was trying to plan what to do if they got surrounded, and confirmed that the best way to get through there was to not get surrounded in the first place. Encred closed his eyes, trying to detect where the enemy was hiding. Suddenly, the soldiers appeared again in the darkness, and once again the 3 were surrounded with no chance at all. Encred looked and realized he still could not detect their presence, and then it repeated again. Encred cornered and finished by the Lancers. The scene cut to Encred fighting the witch. He looked at her and thought maybe she was the one who had used magic on the guards, and then she said, "Damn, they caught me in the end. Doesn't matter anymore." And right after, Encred was pierced by the vines. The scene cut to another day. Encred was looking at his hand. He wondered why he could not use his senses, and concluded it had been the witch, those beasts of hers. There were too many for just a small group like theirs. The scene advanced to Encred trying to fight them, and then to him gripping his sword and looking for an opening. He said he could not keep repeating this every time, and then it cut to a sword and a spear in conflict. Encred was surrounded again and had finished a soldier, and continued, this time cutting through the witch's vines, and once more being attacked by the wolf leader, and once again finding himself finished by the spears, cornered by the witch's vines, and then his sword shone in the red moon. Encred cut the wolf's head, using every attempt to sharpen his skills, and then another wolf landed a bite on his neck. The environment shifted. That lantern with the blue flame was there. The creature appeared in the boat, asking how long he would keep this up. He answered that the more he tried, the more he understood that all the paths were good, and lifted his face laughing, saying it would be a shame to choose just one of them. The sun was rising between the mountains. Torres had just woken up. He called Encred's attention. It was very early. Suddenly, Encred drove a punch strike. He had perfected the hidden blade punch. Torres could not believe what he was seeing. He said, just yesterday he did not even know how to do that. Encred answered straight-faced that he had practiced for 30 days, but Torres did not understand. He looked at Torres and said he would finally overcome this and live to see tomorrow. Then he went to Finn, saying they still had time to enter through the hole, and asked a soldier to sew a small pocket onto his glove. He talked to Finn, said her boot felt a little strange on the inside. She answered that her boots were made like that to muffle the sound of her steps. Without wasting time, Encred said he and Torres would use them too. The scene cut to them walking through the cave. Finn asked if he had ever worked as a scout, because even with the boots it was hard to stay silent. But Encred already knew, because he had practiced the same situation countless times. While walking, he was planning a way to survive in that hole. He knew they had a professional in that field, so right away he asked her, what if there were enemies waiting for them in the hole? She answered that the chances were low, but Encred kept asking. He asked what they would do if all the exits were blocked. Torres noticed he was asking a lot of questions, and finally he said, that means we could die. Finn said he could go back if he was scared, and he answered he just wanted them to be more careful. Finn looked at him in silence. The image of Encred crossed her own mind. She remembered that blonde who was intimidating and could convince others, and then she looked decided. No matter what he said, this was the best option. Suddenly, Finn admitted she thought she had been keeping her guard too low, and then the three moved forward. But this time, Finn had started working. She noticed something right on the ground. They were footprints that had clearly been tried to be erased. And suddenly she ground her teeth, damn, and ordered everyone to get out. Something was off in there, but suddenly a step was heard. There were several soldiers with crossbows. Torres and Finn were hiding from them. Then, Encred started running toward them. He knew there was a captain called Roger, thanks to what the witch had said, and the soldiers could not see our hero's face or clothes in the dark. One of them turned, asking what he was talking about, but then Encred got closer. Drawing his sword, he finished the first soldier with a strike to the gut. The soldiers got into position, realizing he was not one of them, when suddenly, Encred grabbed one of them by the neck. He used the soldier as a shield, screaming for the others to come attack him. The captive soldier screamed for them not to shoot. However, Encred cut in, saying they did not even seem like soldiers. He was alone, and they were doing nothing. Meanwhile, Torres and Finn were hidden while Encred kept provoking the soldiers. Finn looked around and realized if they stayed there, more soldiers could show up. She lost patience because Encred kept instigating, until she stopped and noticed something. Encred was still there, calling out to Roger, the leader of the idiots. Then, Finn appeared behind one of the guards and finished him with a strike to the neck. Torres used the opening and attacked a guard through the chest. Finn finished another, complimenting Encred on his cleverness. The soldiers turned and screamed in surprise as Torres cut in, slashing one across the neck. The soldiers were being massacred one by one while Encred kept them distracted. One of them could not even focus on the fight because Encred would not stop shouting until he pointed his crossbow at Encred, completely out of patience. The arrow hit the forehead of the soldier Encred was holding, and then all of them advanced to attack our hero. Encred watched them closing in and realized his time was up. Right after he threw his daggers, which hit directly in the foreheads of two soldiers. Finn screamed for them to fall back while Encred regrouped with them, but suddenly several people arrived behind him. Encred slowly looked back. Roger's dogs had arrived. Our hero then screamed, saying he had come to deliver the witch's words. The soldiers were shaken by what he said, and then Encred turned, screaming for them to run. Roger completely lost his patience and screamed for them to grab him. Finn was already about to reach the exit. The three had managed to get out, but were still being chased. Then suddenly a snake appeared in front of one of the soldiers, and several venomous snakes emerged from under the rocks. Finn turned and warned Encred that things were going to go wrong if he started making noise again. He looked at the two and laughed. The three kept climbing the mountain at full speed. Encred had a plan for once the moon rose. Suddenly, a wolf paw came down fast. The night of the monsters had arrived. Encred looked at them down below, and while running, he asked Finn and Torres to get out of the way. Torres asked if he wanted them to abandon him, and Finn screamed that he could not go alone. But our hero screamed at them to go quickly, because he had an idea. Then, Encred stopped running while the soldiers closed in. Roger ordered the rest of the soldiers to go after Finn and Torres. Encred was surrounded, waiting for those dogs to appear. Our hero started breathing in deeply, knowing this plan was risky. Then, suddenly, Encred released all his breath and focused, completely determined. Roger turned, sensing the massive presence Encred was giving off. The wolves also turned, noticing something. Roger ground his teeth and screamed, pointing his sword at our hero. Suddenly, a wolf claw appeared. The wolves were slowly climbing up behind Encred, and right after, two wolves appeared suddenly. Encred turned quickly and dodged the wolf's attack. He returned to his stance, telling himself that from this point on, there were no enemies or allies here. In truth, everything that existed here was chaos. Meanwhile, Torres was running, asking if they should go back until they turned, hearing the wolves roaring. The two looked at that disorganized chaos. Torres screamed that they had to do something, until he stopped, stunned. He rubbed his eyes while Finn wondered how Encred was doing that. Our hero was easily dodging attacks in the middle of that mess. Encred was surrounded by soldiers and wolves, but remained completely calm. He dodged a right jab from one of the wolves, focusing only on his senses. Our hero concentrated on everything his eyes could not reach. Then, suddenly, he turned his neck, dodging an arrow with minimal effort, and started slowly turning with confidence and a smile on his face. Roger screamed, ordering the soldiers to hold their positions. Meanwhile, Encrid was analyzing the soldiers. They were elite, but then he remembered when he had attacked Roger in a previous attempt. One of the soldiers had called him an idiot, saying Roger never took off his helmet, and finished by saying Encrid was nothing compared to him. Encrid was wondering why he never took off the helmet, and then our hero attacked on purpose, knocking Roger's helmet off. The helmet bounced across the ground. All the soldiers stood there with mouths open, stuttering. Roger touched his smooth, shining bald head. That was why he never took off the helmet. Our hero then said Roger did not need to be ashamed of his baldness, but Roger was seething with hatred. Of course he would be ashamed. Back to the present, Encrid screamed for Roger to take off the helmet. He said Roger had already killed even the few hairs he had left. Roger ground his teeth, but then told himself to calm down. Encrid went quiet for a moment, and, right after, showed off his beautiful hair flowing in the air. The light reflected on our hero perfectly. Torres went quiet, and Finn said he had crossed a line this time. Roger could not hold it and completely lost his patience, advancing at our hero with a lateral attack. Encrid laughed, saying he could try if he wanted. Then the two swords clashed quickly. Roger tried to return to his stance from the impact and drove a vertical attack. Encrid did not hesitate and drove a thrust straight toward his eye. Roger dodged by, throwing himself backward, but our hero used the opening, saying it was time for him to take off the helmet. Roger looked up, completely stunned. A wolf claw was close to striking, but suddenly the wolf cut Roger's head off before Encrid could do anything, and then gained distance from the impact. The soldiers screamed Roger's name, completely disbelieving. That wolf had just been waiting for the right moment to attack Roger. Suddenly, Encrid saw the wolf passing him. He turned quickly as the wolf circled him, waiting for an opening to attack. Then, it appeared at full speed behind Encrid. Encrid turned by instinct, looking back, and blocked the wolf's attack by putting his sword in front. Right after, he pulled the sword, making the wolf hit nothing but air. The wolf repositioned for a right straight. Encrid used the movement, raised his sword, and cut the dog's right arm. Then, without hesitating, he drove a cut across its chest. The wolf screamed uncontrollably and drove a jab, but Encrid dodged by, crouching. Encrid held his sword firm and loaded up the attack with everything. The thrust went through the wolf, leaving our hero standing still in front of the defeated beast. The chaos was still going, with soldiers fighting wolves. Finn noticed the wolves had stopped going after Encrid, just as the wolf dropped to the ground. Encrid looked at the sky and sighed. Finn did not think twice and said to help him. Our hero then noticed someone calling him. He saw Finn screaming for them to get out of there. Encrid ran toward them while a soldier screamed to grab him, but was interrupted by a wolf biting his spear. And so, the three used the situation to escape. Finn asked if that had been his plan, but Encrid answered it was pure luck. Torres cut in, asking how he had gotten so strong and how he knew that guy's name was Roger. Encrid stopped, analyzing and telling himself that it was strange for both of them. But then, he told them there was something more important now. It was not over yet. Encrid turned toward the mountains right behind them and laughed, saying they were going to the wall. Suddenly, someone was approaching. It was the witch responsible for defending the wall. The scene cut to someone climbing. Actually, all three were climbing the wall. Finn asked how he could climb so well, and Torres said he had no idea. Encrid was already almost reaching the top. He stopped behind a cover, looking for the witch. She was in exactly the same spot as always. Encrid raised his fist, alerting Finn. He whispered, saying there was an enemy and that he would go up first. Finn whispered back, asking what he was saying, but Encrid was already advancing toward the witch. The witch turned, sensing his presence. Encrid's sword was already about to reach her neck, but he was stopped by the witch's vines, which then launched him far away. However, Encrid cut the vines, stopping her attack. The witch asked how he had gotten this far. Encrid answered that her soldiers were playing with the dogs, asking if she had not trained them properly. The witch ignored his question and decided to attack. Encrid started jumping backward, preparing his guard. He blocked one of the branches coming toward him, but right after, several were coming at him like spears, weaving together. Still, Encrid managed to cut through them easily in half. Finn could not believe he was managing to fight the witch, while Torres asked if he should help. Suddenly, some guards appeared to defend Letitia, the witch, but one of them was hit with an axe to the neck. They turned and saw Torres and Finn, ready to defend Encrid. The witch was furious, asking how he dared cut her branches. Then she started drawing several roses in the shape of arrows. Encrid watched. He had learned her fighting pattern last time. He analyzed that, in the end, she was also human. If she was cut, she would die. Our hero had a very good plan, and it was held in his fist. He He decided to advance toward the roses, cutting the ones entering his path. He got close to the witch, who could not believe his speed. Then, she started forming a barrier with the vines. Encred was immobilized, with only his fist pointed in her direction. Suddenly, we went back to the past. Tag was asking about those materials. Encred grabbed one of them and said he would keep it, as it could be useful later. The scene returned to our hero's fist glowing with that material. The stone flew toward the witch and started to glow. A beam of light between the two began to expand. Torres and Finn covered their eyes, and the beggars on the other side of the wall looked on, stunned. The light was absurdly intense, as bright as day. The witch was screaming and covering her eyes, and then Encred's sword was closing in. He drove a vertical attack into Letitia's chest. The witch was completely lost and without reaction. Encred stood still because he had finally understood. He did not need to choose just one path. All three obstacles had been good. Then, the witch dropped to the ground in front of the red moon. Encred laughed while rose petals flew through the air. Meanwhile, a sword was pulled from a soldier's chest. Finn was disoriented from the light, but decided to run, calling out to Encred. The guards were walking near the wall, searching everywhere for the three, but they had managed to infiltrate. Finn showed that this location was where the informant had been staying during the last contact. Torres looked inside, a little suspicious. The place seemed to have been attacked, and the informant had been discovered. Finn said the answer was obvious. The informant had certainly died. Encred answered that this operation must have been a trap set by Aspen, meant to draw their attention. Torres hid while one of the guards screamed, asking if they had found them. One answered nothing yet, and the other asked them to keep looking. Finn said they needed to get out of there alive, and Torres answered it would be difficult with the guards. Encred replied he knew a way, and asked if they wanted to try. Sometime later, one of the houses was on fire, and the three used the distraction to run. Encred told himself he was getting good at this, but if he did it too much, he would become an arsonist instead of a knight. A cloak dropped to the ground as the three successfully escaped. Meanwhile, the house was in ashes. A soldier was saying the intruders had used the fire to escape. The unknown figure answered that all his traps had been dealt with. He started tapping his finger against his thigh, not believing the witch had died. He told himself his plan had been perfect, but then he laughed and answered the soldier that it was fine. He still had other options, and they would stop there. The soldier went quiet and bowed to him. That was Abner, the brilliant strategist of Aspen. Sometime later, the squadron was seen returning on a boat. Torres and Finn were completely drained, but Encred was intact and fully energized, asking Torres if he could train with him when they got off the boat. Torres screamed that they had already dueled about 10 times on the way there. After about 10 minutes, the boat reached the other side. The three were heading out while Finn said the mission was done. Encred asked what she was going to do. She answered that even if she tried to seduce him, in the end, Encred would only think about training. Suddenly, an old man was screaming, saying he needed to speak with the squadron. Torres asked what that guy was doing, and Encred cut in, saying he knew him. The bald one turned, screaming Encred's name. He ran toward him, saying that Mr. Chris was in danger, and that an informant had ratted out the guild. Then, Encred remembered the bald one mentioning the informant's name, Frog. Our hero went serious. The scene shifted to about 3 days before. Tag sighed. The administrative work at the guild was finally done, until the bald one appeared, saying he had a message. He warned that the inn owner thought there was a spy, and Tag ordered someone to go check. The guild now had night guards responsible for the security of the alleys. Tag confirmed that thanks to that, the guild's situation had improved a great deal, and if they kept it up, his power would also increase. He touched his chin and wondered, in a year or half a year, he could fully control the alleys. Outside, a guard was on patrol at the door when suddenly, a hooded figure entered the corridor. The guard asked them to wait and step back, but then the guard was thrown against the door, dropping directly in front of Tag. The hooded figure stood in front of him without saying a word. Tag was startled, and so was the bald one. Then, Tag stuttered the hooded figure's name, Frog. Suddenly, Frog stomped the ground with full force and slowly pulled back his hood. Tag realized he had not killed the guard, which meant they could still talk. Tag laughed and told him to come this way. The frog stayed quiet, looking at him. He laughed and said Tag knew who he was then. Tag answered that was not important right now, and asked if he had eaten. The frog touched his chin, said he was funny, then suddenly hit the bald one and followed up with a right hook to Tag's chin. The bald one dropped to the ground while Frog attacked. He grabbed Tag by the shirt and answered that, for him, people only listened when they got hit. Tag laughed and said there was no need for that, he just had to say what he wanted. Frog said he really was funny, and asked where the old guild leader was. Tag answered he was dead and said the soldiers outside should be able to explain. Frog asked which ones. Tag paused, sweating cold, then said it was Ragnar. He thought it was a soldier called Ragnar. The frog licked his lips with excitement. He looked at the bald one and ordered him to bring Ragnar. Tag spoke to the bald one, asking him to call the leader. Gilpin, the bald one, had no reaction, dropping to his knees and staring at Tag. Then, he ran quickly to call the leader, and that was how he had reached Encred. Encred analyzed the situation and called Tag smart. After all, Ragnar was the laziest one. Almost nobody could get him out of bed. Encred then asked if he was still alive. The bald one answered yes, then asked if his arms and legs were still in place. Encred rephrased, asking if he had been tortured. The bald one answered no, he was fine. Our hero remembered the time he had been defeated by a frog. He looked down and thought this time he could fight. Encred laughed and said he was actually certain he could fight him. He then told the bald one to go back and warn the frog. Encred turned and said Ragnar would be there tomorrow. Our hero knew one more day would not kill Tag, and he knew the frog was using Tag as a hostage and observing the situation. Sometime later, Encred brought the report, and the commander warned that the rest of the squadron had gone on a mission. Encred told the commander that he was tired and would go in 2 days. The scene cut to the barracks. Encred was resting his body for the fight against the frog. In the morning, he ate, and right after started training. He prepared his weapons. Encred only had 2 throwing blades. Suddenly, Esther, the puma, came close to him. Encred crouched and said it was rare to see her like this. Then, he opened the door, asked if she wanted to come with him, and asked her to pay attention. The puma looked at him, and Encred laughed, saying he might end up getting into a fight. Sometime later at the guild cabin, the frog was waiting. They had promised he would come today. Tag laughed and answered he would come, suggesting that meanwhile, he should keep eating. The frog laughed, saying Tag knew him very well and it would be a waste to kill him. Tag laughed, saying he would take that as a compliment, and then quietly asked himself for someone to come before he died. The frog kept eating, and the atmosphere between the two was bizarrely strange. Tag asked himself what they were doing to take so long. Then the frog asked him to bring a little more food, and Tag caringly handed him the apple. Meanwhile, footsteps were approaching. Encred was walking toward the door, preparing his 2 daggers. The frog was still eating the apple until he slowly lowered it, sensing something. Then, the door exploded with Encred charging in, getting ready to launch his 2 daggers. Tag was completely paralyzed, then screamed, saying he should not have come, that he was the weakest. Encred advanced, launching the daggers, but the frog dodged by, jumping over the table. The 2 stood face to face. Encred drove a horizontal attack, but the frog leapt over our hero's head. Encred ducked, dodging the attack, and the 2 gained distance from each other. Encred was completely focused, watching him, and the frog was too. Suddenly the 2 clashed. Tag watched, confused because the leader was actually managing to fight a frog. Encred lost his footing from the impact of the strike, realizing he could not fight without thinking, or he would end up cut in half. The frog advanced, driving a frontal thrust. Encred blocked the strike. For now, all he had to do was hold. The 2 swords kept clashing against each other. Encred used the moment to push the frog's arm to the side, opening a weak point, and attacked directly at the frog's heart. But then, he received a brutal kick. The impact was enough to send him flying, and right after he fell, breaking the table. Tag screamed as he had almost been hit. The frog walked toward Encred, asking how he had aimed at his heart. He confirmed that, even so, he was very good at recognizing someone talented. He looked at him, but could not read him. The frog then said it was as if Encred had already reached his limit. Our hero slammed his sword into the ground and got up, leaning on it. He laughed, saying he could now take his kicks. The frog lost patience and advanced, saying he would kill him. Encred did not think twice and advanced too. Again, Encred was aiming at his heart. The frog's attack was coming at his head, but he ducked, gripping his sword tight for the next strike. He hit the enemy's left arm, which immediately went flying. Encred used the opening to attack again. The frog said he could kill Encred using only one arm, and then drove an attack directly at Encred's sword. Encred felt the strike, letting go of his sword. The frog was completely terrifying in front of our hero. Encred looked, completely startled, as the frog's attack was already coming, until suddenly it stopped right at his forehead. The 2 stood face to face, completely still. The frog began to sigh. Encred looked at him, wondering why he had stopped. The frog sensed a strange feeling behind him. There was an intense energy right at his back. The puma was there, watching the fight. It was as if a beast had warned the frog that killing this human would cost him his life. The frog was irritated. He wanted to kill Encred because he was a human who had surpassed his limits, and he could not read him. He got ready to attack Encred, and the puma watched his movement closely. Then, suddenly, the frog turned, sheathed his sword, and told himself his life was more important. He stopped and said to remember this human. His true name was Merlin, and he would kill him next time. Encred stayed quiet, without saying a single word, and then, The frog walked away, passing by the puma. The three stood there, processing what had just happened. Tag asked if it was serious and if he had really left. He got up, saying he thought he was going to die, but Encred cut in, saying that was not enough. Encred looked at his hand and realized that last attack had made him drop his sword. Then he clenched his fist and said, 3. He added with determination that he could have won just by dying 3 more times. The scene cut to Tag saying he had not expected that lunatic to just leave while they were walking through the market. Encred agreed, saying neither had he. Then Tag asked why the frog had done that. Right after, Encred looked at Esther and asked if it was her who had done it. Tag asked if he had lost his mind, talking to animals now. Then the commander screamed, asking where he was and if he had been hurt. Encred answered he had just been in a battle. The commander said he would have to come in. There was a request from the ferry commander. Encred then stopped, wondering about the ferry commander. In a somewhat distant location, the ferry was in the middle of a war. She said now she understood why that squadron was called lunatics. 2 soldiers were finished in sequence, and Rem finished the 3rd with his axe. He then turned, saying that was the daily quota done, while a soldier said there were still more enemies. Then, one of the enemy soldiers was grabbed by the arm. It was the ponytail, who had broken his arm just by squeezing. In another location, Jackson was dodging several soldiers. He looked at those soldiers in silence, then turned and walked away while a soldier begged to be hit just once. The fairy was watching all 3 of them in silence. A moment later, in the commander's cabin, she appeared, asking them to fill the battalion leader position. Angel answered they would do it, but was interrupted by Rem, saying they had come all the way here without Encred because of her, and now she wanted them to fill his place. She asked if they wanted to cause problems for Encred. Rem stared at her in silence, answered quietly, 3 days, and got up, warning her they would only fight for 3 days. The scene cut to the ferry in a meeting, already grateful those lunatics were helping. The other commander said depending on that battle, they would have a massive impact on their forces, and asked her how long Aspen would keep provoking them. She answered that unless a skilled soldier appeared, they would never win. Then, the commander answered they needed to send their men to resolve it quickly, and that it would be great if those lunatics did something. She answered they refused to fight, and the commander asked if there was really nothing that could be done. She got up, saying the only way was to bring their captain. Sometime later, the commander was alone, thinking about Aspen's strategies. He knew there was a rumor that a genius had allied with them. Afternoon had arrived at the camp, and 3 members of the battalion were walking. Angel was now the current leader of the lunatic squadron. The archer asked if Angel was all right. He answered he was handling it, adding that every time he got hit, he felt his skills improving. Scarface said it was a little frustrating, but it helped. Fortunately, Ragnar, Rem, and Jackson were occupied and had not caused problems. Suddenly, Angel saw a guy screaming, asking if they were really soldiers from the battalion. He asked Rem if he did not see that everyone was fighting to survive. Angel had absolutely no reaction. That guy was talking to Rem and had to be crazy. Then, Angel stepped in, saying they were there under direct orders from the commander. The soldier screamed, asking if he was really going to defend them. The atmosphere grew heavy, and Rem stood up, saying his mood would improve if he saw the soldier's neck up close. Angel then told the soldier that if he was angry, he could fight him. Rem was quietly listening to Angel trying to save the soldier, until he watched Angel being dragged away. Rem looked at the sky, bored. He walked away, wanting that guy to come at him, but Angel had gotten in the way again. Rem opened the cabin door, saying there was nothing fun to do there, until he looked at the cabin with only his axes on the bed. He then said to himself, guess it is time to retire. Meanwhile, the ponytail was praying, and Ragnar was lying down. Ragnar wondered if Encred had died, as there had been no news of him. Axion just wanted to leave. There was no reason for him to stay. Jackson was saying it was useless, adding that he had already fulfilled his purpose and it was a waste of time now. Everyone, discouraged, said at the same time that if he did not show up today, they were leaving. The scene cut to someone walking through the camp. The fairy told Encred that his battalion was waiting and called him fiancé. Encred approached the entrance of the cabin. Angel, who had been struggling, looked at him. Our hero looked inside the cabin, seeing all his squadron members down and defeated, and then he said, I'm here. Rem got up, not understanding anything. Suddenly, Angel appeared at the door of the cabin and started crying with emotion because Encred had finally arrived. He threw himself at our hero's knees, saying he could not take the weight anymore. Rem gave a faint smile, saying, pathetic, and then tapped Angel, saying he had managed to become even more annoying. Right after, everyone outside the cabin said he had taken too long. Sometime later, night arrived. Encred told everyone in his squadron to obey the others' orders too. He looked at everyone. The problem was they only listened when they felt like it. Rem got up, saying that was not important now, and laughed, asking if he had gotten stronger. Encred stared at him without saying anything. Then suddenly, someone tapped a sword scabbard. and Ragnar called for them to fight. Tag got up half asleep to warn that the captain was injured. Ragnar and Rem started fighting each other, but Axion appeared, separating the two and telling them to calm down. He said it had been a while since they trained, and they should start with stretching. Encrid cut in, telling them to stop, and said he would fight each one of them, while Tag screamed in the background, not believing it. Jackson arrived to help him, saying he needed to take his injuries seriously, and asked Encrid to remove the bandages. He remembered the mission where he had defeated the witch. He had gotten a little stronger after that mission, and after dealing with the frog, but the road ahead was still long. He started sharpening, saying he might have reached a high level, but the path he needed to follow had also grown. Then he said with determination that he would show them what he had managed so far. Jackson told him not to overdo it or the pain could get worse. Encrid just laughed without answering. Then he started approaching the first opponent. Rem said he seemed confident as he approached. He laughed, asked if he had really gotten that strong, and advanced, saying he would take a look. The axe was already coming at Encrid's face, millimeters from his forehead, until suddenly he blocked, breaking the Shaggy One's stance. Rem was impressed. He really had improved. He looked at Encrid and analyzed that he was moving without hesitation and with a higher level of confidence. Right after, he laughed, saying it was great, and he wanted to see what he was capable of. Then, he raised his axe for a vertical attack. Jackson said it was impressive that he had evolved in just 1 week. Axion said he was getting tired of waiting for the two of them. Ragnar was quiet, but impatient for his turn to come. The three were completely anxious watching. Rem looked back and said it was better he did not disappoint them, while Encrid advanced with a thrust. Time had passed at the camp, and all of them had finished. Jackson asked what had happened to him. Encrid answered it was nothing major, but he had gotten into it with a frog before coming. Angel looked at Encrid impressed, because he was better than the rumors suggested. Rem answered it was hard to believe he had come out of a fight with that thing alive. Axion asked Encrid how the mission had gone, and he answered there had been a trap, and then he had fought guards, wolves, and a witch. Angel realized it was strange. He had fought all kinds of bad people. Then, someone said it was good he had come out alive, and Encrid answered it had been luck. Sometime later, the lights were already out. Encrid was resting, telling himself there was still so much to learn. He looked at his fist, saying he wanted to recover quickly and fight. Rem suddenly said that from now on, they could not let the frog push them around like that. Ragnar answered they still had a lot to learn, and Axion said training was the only solution. Jackson answered there were many things they needed to consider. Encrid finally answered they just needed to beat him. And so, the barracks went silent with everyone sleeping. Encrid was already starting to drift off, when suddenly, Rem said that as soon as he recovered, they would fight again. Ragnar in the back said they needed to correct some strikes, and Jackson noted there were several effective training methods to consider. Encrid replied they would do that when he was better, and again, the barracks went silent. But once more, Encrid was interrupted from his sleep by Rem talking about the frog. He sat up, saying that when he was better, he was going to turn Encrid into a frog hunter. Ragnar got up, saying they needed to focus on basic techniques again. Axion talked about doing proper stretching, and Jackson added not to let his guard down. Then, Encrid cut in, asking if they were not going to sleep, and so everyone went silent in the barracks one more time, deep into the night. Sometime later, the sun was already rising over the mountains. Encrid got up, but he had slept too long. He turned and asked if Esther had already woken up. Outside, Encrid asked if the others had already gone to the front line. They had indeed advanced into battle, and only his support unit had stayed behind. Encrid started doing a plank. He crouched and looked at his fist, noting it seemed to have gotten worse from yesterday's training. However, he could not ignore the determination they had shown when they saw him. He then looked at a long sword in front of him. He picked it up and analyzed it, noting that long swords were usually used with 2 hands. Still, he decided to train with only his left. He stopped for a moment and realized it felt bad. It was like picking up a sword for the first time. Then he started laughing, because this was an opportunity to train something new. Right after, Encrid opened his stance and drove a horizontal attack. Vengeance was watching and thought he was injured. Encrid turned and asked if he had not gone to the front line. Vengeance answered that his squad was in charge of defending the camp. Then, the strap on the handle of the sword Encrid was holding started coming loose, so Vengeance offered to help fix it. While Vengeance was fixing the sword, Encrid noticed he was being nice to him and asked why Vengeance had hated him before. Vengeance looked at him while tying the handle, then suddenly said a name, Jenny. Encrid repeated the name, asking who that was. While Encrid kept wondering, Vengeance shouted that Jenny was the herbalist, but then he slammed the sword against Encrid's chest, saying he did not want to talk about it anymore, and walked away stiffly with his hands in his pockets. While Vengeance was leaving, Encrid called out from behind that he had not liked her, adding that she was the one who had liked him. She had a herb shop, and since her herbs were good, Encred bought a lot. He figured she must have developed feelings for him afterward, but it turned out Vengeance had feelings for her. Encred clarified that he had been more interested in the herbs than in her. Vengeance said he knew, since Encred cared more about swords than women. He looked at Encred's face, turned, called him a lucky bastard, told him to take care of the sword and walked away. Encred sighed, saying he was quite strange. The scene shifted to the squadron cabin, where the puma was stretching after waking up. Encred sat beside her and asked if she was sick, as she seemed tired. Esther looked at him, saying it was his fault. Yesterday, she had used her magic to ease Encred's pain, but had overdone it. Encred told her they had plenty of time to rest and that everything was fine. The weather was calm at the camp, and guards were checking the entire area. 2 of them were passing by the river when a strange movement appeared in the water. One guard asked the other what that was, but he answered it was nothing. In the blink of an eye, however, the guard was hit in the forehead by an arrow. Encred heard the sound in the background, and Vengeance alerted everyone of an enemy attack. Our hero came out of the cabin while everyone was running to defend the camp. Tag screamed for him to go back inside. Then suddenly, someone came out of the water. Encred froze for a brief moment, startled. He never would have imagined meeting him again. The enemies continued coming out of the water, until suddenly, Mitch appeared once more, commanding the enemy group. Encred repeated his name quietly, Mitch Hurrier. Mitch turned his eyes, looking at him. The two stood face to face. Mitch then said the gods had heard his prayers. Encred answered, impressed that he had remembered his name. Mitch explained that thanks to him, he had realized his mistake and trained until he reached a new level. Right after, he raised his sword, saying he wanted to put an end to things with his own hands. Encred screamed, telling Tag to get out with Esther. Then, the two attacked each other at the same time. Their swords clashed with massive pressure, and the impact broke Encred's stance. He froze, startled by the force. While he stood there, Mitch asked in a terrifying tone if Encred was hurt. He then loaded up an attack, saying it was his bad luck. The attack was coming down with full force until the tip of another sword appeared. Vengeance had stopped Mitch's attack and screamed for our hero to run. Encred screamed for Vengeance to get out of there, knowing he was not capable of fighting Mitch. Suddenly, Mitch's sword hit Vengeance's neck. Encred froze as Vengeance's head flew through the sky and dropped beside him. Our hero slowly turned his eyes to Vengeance. Mitch looked at him, calling him a cursed insect. Suddenly, Esther roared and advanced at Mitch, while Tag screamed for her to come back. Encred could not believe it. If they went toward Mitch, it would be a disaster. The puma leapt to attack, but was quickly hit in the stomach by Mitch's sword. Encred ran to try to stop it, but Tag was already in front of the blade. Our hero extended his hand, screaming, but all he saw was Tag being pierced through the neck. Time froze for Encred. Suddenly Mitch appeared, saying it was a shame Encred was injured, since he wanted to show how strong he had become. Blood poured everywhere as Encred was finished, losing his head to Mitch's attack. And so, we returned to the camp. Esther was sleeping while Encred stroked her. He looked down, thinking he could not do anything, and glanced at his own injured fist. Beyond that, his squadron members were not there. Only Tag remained. Knowing the enemies would invade later, Encred kept training. The tip of his sword scattered his sweat. He remembered a soldier who had said everyone died trying to save him because he was a weak worm. A drop of sweat fell to the ground. Encred sighed without saying a word. Vengeance then appeared, asking if he had hurt his right fist and was now training with the left, before asking if our hero had made any progress. Encred said quietly that if nothing worked, he would find a way. He looked forward confidently, vowing to protect everyone here. Vengeance had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Encred then apologized for what happened with Jenny. Vengeance told him to let it go, as it was not his fault. Encred told him to relax, noting there were plenty of women who did not care about looks. Vengeance froze, wondering if he was joking. While Vengeance argued with him, Encred simply laughed at his words. Time passed in the blink of an eye, and Encred was already walking toward the enemies. Mitch stood composed and confident in front of him. Suddenly, Mitch raised his sword with both hands, but Encred blocked the attack. The two stood face to face while Mitch tried to intimidate our hero. Encred gained distance from the impact, realizing he was at a disadvantage. Mitch advanced with everything, driving a frontal thrust. Encred barely blocked the attack, but it grazed him, cutting across Encred's neck. Our hero dropped to the ground with full force. Mitch looked at him on the ground and asked about his right hand. Encred extended his hand and answered it was injured. Mitch raised his sword, saying it was a shame, and then drove it into Encred's chest. He stood in front of our hero, defeated on the ground. The scene cut to another attempt. Encred was training his left hand. He attacked, trying to learn how to strike vertically, then drove a strike with upward momentum from below. Everything he had learned from Ragnar's style was still fresh in his mind. He remembered the attempts against Mitch with his right hand, but then kept training his grip. He drove a horizontal attack at a straw dummy, then was defeated by one of Mitch's thrusts, and went back to training a vertical attack on the straw dummy until he cut it clean in half. Encred sighed. He had already tried 40 times, but had not won yet. Vengeance was in the back, watching him train. He stayed quiet for a moment without saying a word, and then greeted Encred and asked if he wanted to spar. Our hero was confused, as this had not happened in any of his 40 attempts. Vengeance stared at him, waiting for an answer. Encred looked back, saw he was serious, and then turned toward him. Vengeance did not hesitate, attacking above Encred's guard. Encred blocked with his sword in front of the strike. Our hero realized that, even against him, it was still difficult to use his left hand. Then suddenly, Encred started pulling the sword, breaking Vengeance's support and making him stumble. Vengeance dropped to the ground, dropping his sword. Encred then said he had won. Vengeance was embarrassed since it had been with the left hand. Our hero asked why he had challenged him to a spar out of nowhere. Vengeance said he was not sure. Watching him train had made his blood boil. Encred answered all he had been doing was training the basics, and Vengeance said he knew. He said it reminded him of the first times he had ever held a sword, that desire to get stronger and fight with a sword. And then he looked at Encred and said his sword was a little strange. He finished saying it was as if it were dead. Encred looked at him and asked, "Dead?" Vengeance said it was not exactly that, he just did not know how to explain it. Encred stopped, trying to understand what he had said while Vengeance called for his attention. He ignored it and kept thinking, until he looked at his own hand and realized he had just been copying the movements of his right hand with his left. He approached the straw dummy. Encred raised the sword, trying to adapt the movement to his left hand, and then brought it down with everything. The attack was perfect and fluid. He had cut perfectly straight. Encred broke into a smile, then looked at Vengeance and thanked him, saying that thanks to him he had found a clue for learning to use his left hand. Encred looked at his hand and decided to start with the basics, eating with his left hand. Tag asked if he always ate with his left, and Encred answered it was because his other hand was injured. He spilled the soup by accident, almost dropping it on Esther, then put on his clothes using his left hand. He drove his sword into the ground again with the left. Encred sighed, saying he needed to push his senses to the maximum with the other hand. He then looked at his fist and remembered Torres explaining the hidden blade technique. He tried to throw a blade, which immediately dropped to the ground. He sat down and looked at the blade. That was attempt number 50. Vengeance appeared again, asking if he wanted to spar. Vengeance suddenly dropped hard to the ground, and then said Encred was actually decent with his left hand, but there was still something strange about it. Encred looked down, knowing the answer. It was still dead, and then tried again for the 55th time. He blocked the attack for the 56th time, and advanced for the 60th time. Encred broke Vengeance's stance. On attempt 80, he tried to use the hidden blade. It started coming out through his fist. Encred had perfectly mastered the technique. Sometime later, he fought Vengeance again, making him send his sword flying into the air, and it dropped right behind him. Vengeance quietly wondered how he could fight so well with his left hand. Encred cut in, saying he was overthinking it. Vengeance answered that when he went to the battlefield, he would have to push twice as hard. Encred realized he had stopped saying his sword was dead, and then turned and told him to keep pushing. Maybe he would even reach a Jenny someday. Vengeance ground his teeth, calling him a bastard. Meanwhile, Encred was heading out while Vengeance kept shouting at him from behind, until Encred said to himself that he hoped he would manage to confess to her someday. Sometime later, Encred was in front of the camp gate. He stopped, telling himself that talent was not something easy to explain. He immediately remembered when he was exhausted from training. When he was a child training, he raised his sword even while tired, and attacked with it even without technique. He screamed in frustration because it was useless. It seemed like he would never get anywhere. And then the scene returned to him gripping his sword. He started drawing it, then pointed it with his left hand, proud of how far he had come in just 100 days of training. He smiled, saying this was day 112. Mitch was already closing in with the enemy soldiers. Encred needed to overcome that obstacle called Mitch. Vengeance screamed, ordering everyone into position. Tag screamed, telling Encred to go back because he was injured, but Encred was already heading toward Mitch. Mitch said they had finally met, and then drew his sword, saying he would give his best. Encred told himself he would not let it happen, because he had already witnessed his own defeat before. He looked forward, confident. In the blink of an eye, Encred appeared in front of Mitch. Mitch blocked by reflex. The impact of Encred's strike was heavy, and Mitch was starting to be pushed back. The two were face to face, but Mitch was different now. He was tense. Encred grabbed Mitch's hand that held the sword. Mitch struggled to keep his grip, grinding his teeth until he finally let it go, landing a knee into Encred's gut instead. Our hero was thrown back by the impact as Mitch's sword dropped to the ground. Mitch looked at him, calling him a coward. Encred braced himself on his own sword, looked at Mitch, and said he needed to get past this wall. Holding his twisted wrist, Mitch told Encred he could do what he wanted, but those dirty tricks would be useless. He picked up his sword, looked at Encred, and revealed he was ambidextrous. Encred laughed, saying he was too. Our hero gripped his sword tight, declaring he would fight him to the death. He looked down, stating he was going to use a technique that should have been his last resort. Looking forward, he named it the Valencian mercenary style. He spun the scabbard of his sword and launched it at Mitch. The scabbard hit Mitch's guard, breaking his stance. Suddenly, Mitch was grabbed by the neck. Encred was face to face with him, entirely unarmed. Encred drove a left overhand that grazed Mitch's chin. Mitch used the opening to advance, but Encred stopped him by going for a double-leg takedown, throwing him flat on his back with everything he had. Encred dropped his knee onto Mitch's wrist, making him drop the sword. He raised his arm to attack from above, connecting directly on Mitch's nose. Loading up another strike, Encred declared he needed to win by any means necessary. He threw his fist, screaming that this was a street fight. Mitch slowly opened his eyes and off-balanced Encred by using the momentum of his own punch. Encred was thrown far away. Mitch screamed, demanding he take this seriously, and ordered him to pick up his sword. He attacked, screaming for Encred to fight properly. Suddenly, both of them stopped. Encred had been hit, and Mitch froze for a moment. However, Encred had blocked the strike with the armor on his shoulder. He slowly lifted his face, saying he was already taking this seriously, and launched a left cross. The strike cut Mitch because Encred was using a hidden blade. The cut reached from his nose to his left eye. Encred did not hesitate and loaded up another attack, while Mitch screamed with all his hatred. The sword sank into Encred's shoulder, causing both of them to lose their footing. Encred dropped, analyzing that if the fight lasted too long, he would end up losing. Mitch returned to his stance and advanced with everything. Encred threw the blade at him, and Mitch closed his guard to block, but it hit exactly on his left hand. Encred used the opening to throw his body forward, knocking Mitch flat on his back once again as the sword went flying. Mitch screamed, calling him a bastard. Encred did not hesitate. He grabbed Mitch's leg for a footlock and squeezed with his forearm. Mitch ground his teeth in pain and tried to land a cross, but Encred dodged. Encred returned to the footlock, trying to break the leg. Mitch felt unbearable pain and screamed in the middle of the fight, prompting the soldiers to turn and ask what that had been. The scene shifted to the genius who had never pushed himself, as he had never found an enemy who challenged him. Mitch had bloodlust in his eyes, burning to surpass Encred in their next fight. He had started training every day without missing a single one, stacking effort with talent. Defeated on the ground, he thought he had started to shine again, and asked himself why this was happening to him. He looked at Encred's feet, standing over the sword, and called out to him. Encred turned his eyes toward him, remembering how Mitch had been such a massive obstacle. Yet, it was thanks to him that he had found a new path. Mitch got up, saying he had not wanted the fight to go like this. The wall started crumbling. Mitch dragged himself, trying to say his piece, but the wall kept falling. He screamed, saying he had wanted to show how strong he had become. Encred gripped his sword and called his name, Mitch Hurrier. He then raised his sword, reminding him that this was the battlefield. Mitch felt the weight of those words, and Encred drove the sword into his neck. The blade passed through, and Encred stood quiet while blood flew. Some soldiers were approaching, and one of them screamed the captain's name. Vengeance then screamed with everything he had, pointing his sword and ordering the soldiers to kill all of them. The enemy soldiers were quickly hit by multiple arrows. Encred was still standing in front of the fallen Mitch as the last block of the wall dropped into the water and sank. He sighed without saying a word, looked at Mitch, and said it had been a good fight, speaking his name one last time, Mitch Hurrier. And so, Encred started walking forward. He had overcome the wall, stepping right over it.